What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the second part of a story where Issei got the leveling shield hero system. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations. Now, let's get into part 2. Issei looked at the sleeping form of his blonde friend while sitting at his desk. It's been 2 days since she fell asleep, 2 days since she almost had her sacred gear stolen. Asia was currently lying on his bed, sleeping soundly. It would appear that the hypnosis spell Rainier did on her drained her mentally. Issei smiled as he watched over her. He already informed his parents that she would be staying with them, and they were happy to agree. After all, who would say no to that adorable little girl? But Issei's attention was soon drawn to what Fried had told him. What a mountain of shit, he stated softly as to not awaken the girl. He only recognized the shitstorm they were in when he checked the system on the demon's power scaling, and he wasn't pleased. Demon power scaling. Lesser Demon, LV1-10, low class. Demon Spirit, LV10-40, low class. Demon Spawn, LV40-60, mid class. Greater Demon, LV60-100, mid class. Archdemon, LV100-140, high class. Demon Knight, LV140-180, high class. Demon Earl, LV180-200, ultimate class. Demon President, LV200-220, ultimate class. Demon Prince, LV220-260, ultimate class. Demon Duke, LV260-280, ultimate class. Demon Marquise, LV280-300, ultimate class. Demon Lord, LV300-400, King's class. Demon King, LV400-500, King's class. Demon Emperor, LV500+, Imperial class. Demon Monarch, LV600+, Imperial class. Demon God, LV850+, Hell class. Notice alert. Rare anomalies within the demon races like a primordial demon occurs from time to time and are measured not by the level of their power but by the level of their influence. Lust, primordial demon. Invokes lust upon others. Power determined by the amount of people it has made lustrous. A harem will also amplify its power by the amount of people it has in its harem. -1 servant equals 10,000 XP per day. Pure-hearted virgins increase its power by 10 levels. Greed, primordial demon. Invokes greed upon others. Power determined by the amount of people it has made greedy. Power amplified by the amount of disasters brought about through greed. Making generous people fall in greed increases its power by 10 levels. And so it went for the rest of the primordial demons, that their power grew the more they have influenced people. And Issei didn't like that one bit. Are they going to be one of the upcoming waves of catastrophe? He wondered. But looking up at the clock at the top of his vision, his concerns grew to an even greater extent. The clock that counted down the time until the next wave of catastrophe would appear had stopped. That too, right after Fried conveyed his concerns to Issei. At first, Issei thought it had nothing to do with the cardinal sins now freely roaming the earth. But right at that time, the system also gave him a quest to hunt and slay the primordial demons. Speaking of quests, Issei soon called forth the quest he had to save Asia. He still hadn't claimed the rewards yet. Quest completed. Faith of the Faithless. You have saved Asia Argento. Rewards. 3rd grade Holy Spellbook, claim. 10,000 reputation points with Asia Argento. 1st grade Holy Crystal, claim. Secret quest completed. Catching Crows. Enslave the Fallen. Rewards. Light Magic Scroll, claim. 10,000 reputation points with Gremory and Citri Peerage. 50,000 reputation points with Fallen Governor. Achievement unlocked. Made Master. Get more than 5 female servants. Reward. Plus 10 Charisma. Servant Shield, unlocked. Issei stared at all the notifications perplexed. The F? He started by claiming his first rewards. The spell book and crystal. He scanned through the book and saw that it contained various holy spells. Even though they were of the lesser kind, they were still useful. Summoning spells, restraining spells, exorcist spells, even locating spells. It was a perfect fit for him, so he had his shield consume the book, creating the new, holy spell shield, and granting him the knowledge of all the spells now at his disposal. Then came the crystal. At first he didn't know what to do with it, till a notification appeared. Do you wish to absorb holy crystal? Y/N. Deciding he had nothing to lose, he pressed the Y icon and the crystal was absorbed into his body. The next moment, Issei felt a sudden rush of warmth before his mind cleared up and notifications started appearing. Congratulations! The skill A Lesser Holy Affinity has evolved into the skill A Intermediate Holy Affinity. Congratulations! The skill A Intermediate Holy Affinity has evolved into the skill A Greater Holy Affinity. Notice alert. As a result of obtaining the skill A Greater Holy Affinity, the host now has access to 3 perks. Holy Vessel. Allows you to house and act as a vessel for holy beings. Holy Physique. Makes your body highly easy to purify and thus easier to cultivate. Holy Awareness. Makes you aware of anything and everything holy in your presence. Once again, Issei stared at all the notification perplexed. This has to be a result of my luck stat. He didn't know how right he was. Moving on to the other reward, the light magic scroll. He simply had it placed in his inventory before dismissing everything. He turned his gaze back to the sleeping blonde, only to see her gaze directed at him. She had awakened. Issei was caught a bit by surprise but smiled nonetheless. "Morning, Asia. Are you feeling okay?" he spoke. She rubbed her eyes and smiled at him. "Morning, Issei. I feel better now. Thanks for asking," she replied with a sweet smile of her own. Issei looked at the heart next to her status. The reputation bar. It was pink with the word admiration at its center. He knew him saving her would have an impact on her, but he didn't expect it to be this great. "Thank you, Issei. You saved me yet again," she spoke, her gaze setting on the floor due to embarrassment. Issei went and sat beside her, lifting her chin so that she would look into his eyes. He smiled. "You are welcome. From now on, you'll be staying with me," he spoke and stood to go open the curtains. The sun hasn't yet risen, but light was slowly starting to appear at the edge of the horizon. He turned to the clock next to her. It read 5:44 a.m. March 17, 2025. He'd have to depart for school soon. Asia looked at him surprised for what he said, but Issei, she was swiftly interrupted, "But nothing. This will be your home from now on. All your clothes have been sorted in the closet. I'll go and prepare breakfast for the both of us. The bathroom is through that door if you wish to freshen up. I'll be waiting downstairs," he spoke, pointing to the door across the room before moving towards the door. He went downstairs and started preparing breakfast. Soon Asia came down, wearing a white shirt with a pink skirt. She was walking barefoot and her hair was held together with a green hairband. Issei smiled with delight. She looked so cute. He placed her plate on the table before him and sat down across from her. She was fidgeting around as she ate. Issei could see something was bothering her, and thus decided to speak. "Is something bothering you, Asia?" he asked. She looked up at him and gazed into his eyes. Stopping for a moment, she asked, "Issei, what are you?" she questioned nervously. Issei smiled. "Is that what concerns you? Well, if you really want to know." He paused, smiling as he saw the suspense build up in her eyes. "I am human. Although my sacred gear grants me the power of a non-human entity, so I could be considered as non-human to some, and superhuman to others. But ultimately, my job is to protect this realm. Is that all that concerns you, or is there more?" he questioned. Asia looked relieved and yet conflicted at the same time. "I was just wondering. The way you saved me. It couldn't have been done by any normal person. So, Issei is like me," she stated, muttering the last part to herself as she looked down at her food. Issei nodded. "Indeed I am," he replied. She started eating again, but as they continued, Issei could see that there was still something bothering her. He guessed what it could be and decided to put the girl at ease. "You need not worry, Asia. I have already made arrangements for you to be put in my school," he stated. This caught her by surprise, so much so that she dropped her utensils. She gazed at him shocked while he smiled at her. "You'll be able to live like you should have while growing up, making friends, experiencing new things, coming home to a family that's waiting for you. I know you might have been troubled with the thought of choosing a new path to follow, since your previous path came undone. Thus I have already made arrangements. If it is okay with you, I'd like for you to stay and assist me in my mission. My mission to protect the people of our world," he finished. Asia, not thinking twice of Issei's offer, nodded. "Thank you, Issei. I accept," she replied with a smile. The girl had long since sought a purpose for herself. A purpose wherein she could have friends, family but still aid the people with her power. A place where she could be accepted for who she was. That's what she desired. What she prayed for. And here it has been given to her. By a man she didn't fully know. A man who saved her twice. Gave her food, shelter, and clothing. A man who didn't care for who she was or her past, but merely that she was in trouble and needed help. Someone who accepted her for who she was. A man of God. She believed. Issei nodded at her reply. "Good then. When you are done, return to your room. In the closet there is a female school uniform. Get dressed. We'll leave at 6:30, he stated with a smile, which Asia returned. Half an hour later, the two were walking down the street together, on their way to school. Issei wanted to go with the bike, but soon dropped the idea when he considered that he might not have enough space for more than 2 people. What would he mean by that? Down the road, a familiar blonde was waiting for them to arrive. It was Kuroheim. His first reason? Kuroheim. She refused to let him go anywhere without her by his side. Not that he complained. He enjoyed her company. But going to school with the bike would mean he would have to let her walk home alone. And he didn't want that. After all, why ride to school with one girl, when you could walk with 2? Morning, Issei. Morning Asia. I see you have finally awakened. I have been wanting to meet you ever since Master spoke about you, Kurohime exclaimed as she gave her fellow blonde a hug, even going as far as to rub her cheek on Asia's forehead. She soon backed up, holding the girl by her shoulders and gave her a warm smile. I am Kurohime Watani. Also, I'm Issei's mistress, she claimed boldly. Issei looked at Kurohime flabbergasted with an expression that clearly asked, really? Kurohime giggled at his expression, starting to show her mischievous side. Asia on the other hand looked at Issei somewhat surprised. Why? For one reason only. She could understand Japanese clearly. Issei saw her surprised expression and decided to elaborate. One of my powers allows me to grant people the knowledge of languages. That's why you can understand Japanese so easily now. I gave you the power while you were asleep, Issei spoke. Asia nodded in response before turning back to Kurohime. Good morning, Miss Kurohime. It's nice to meet you, she responded in Japanese. Kurohime waved her hand as they continued their walk to school. Ah, just call me Big Sis. No need for honorifics, she stated before turning back to Issei. Her cunning smile already warning Issei that she was up to no good. So, Master, is she my new harem sister? She questioned. Issei felt the urge to face slap himself. Asia looked at Kurohime with an innocent expression. Big Sis, what's a harem? She inquired. Issei couldn't help but feel that feeling of face slapping growing each passing second. Heavens, please aid this poor soul of mine. Having arrived at school, they were met with the gazes of various students. This was mostly due to Asia's presence, but also because she was walking with Issei and Kurohime. While the two blondes were conversing happily between one another, the students were whispering amongst themselves. And although they were far away for most, the nearest being 100 meters, they were still within earshot of Issei's inhumane senses. And thus, he heard every whisper. Is that a new student? Yeah, I think so, but what is she doing with that creep? Are there seriously two hot beauties walking around with that perv? Looks like the poor fool finally got lucky, or they might be relatives. In which case we still got a shot, were some of the whispers. Many more were spoken and Issei heard all of them. His smile wouldn't dare to leave his face. His status as breast fiend had regressed to the status pervert a while back. That was the reward for having stopped peeking for more than 2 weeks. But Issei was satisfied. Why? Because, recently, his reputation got a massive boost. It went from pervert to playboy. Again, why? The answer to that question laid at the entrance to the school building. Two girls stood waiting for him. One had long black hair, with beautiful black eyes. Her posture and figure were that of a senior student's, fully developed, and her attractive face could have any man's heart skip a beat. Her red lips curled upwards in a smile. The second was a young woman with pure white hair, pale white skin and beautiful, azure blue eyes. Her figure was quite similar to the previous lady, but her elegance was unmatched. The graceful way in which she carried herself could have one thinking that she was of nobility. These two were none other than Kiyomi and Kimiko. Kiyomi had arrived 2 days ago. She had managed to convince her uncle to let her come back home and study at Kuo Academy. Of course, her uncle didn't let her stay alone. 2 maids, 2 guards and 2 chauffeurs had accompanied her back to Kuo to assist her in her endeavors. The only catch was that she had to score at least 5 A's in her subjects every term and semester. Kimiko, on the other hand, wanted to play a more active role in her savior's life, both as his mate and advisor, so she took to becoming a student as well, even assuming a more adolescent form to pursue this goal. Now, both she and Kiyomi were attending Kuo as third-year students. Issei smiled at them and took a peek at their status bars. Kimiko Kirin LV 180, Capt. Status, Celestial, Kirin. Occupation, Advisor/Kuo Academy Student. Kiyomi Uchiha LV 38. Status, Enhanced Human. Occupation, Geico Heiress/Kuo Academy Student. He was pleased. Both showed remarkable progress, even if it was mostly as a result of him transferring EXP to his subordinates. Though, he couldn't take the credit for Kimiko's sudden jump in realms, as that was only a result of her soul re-establishing itself and returning to its former glory. Morning girls. I must say, you two look stunning, Issei greeted as he approached them. The Kiyomi smirked and responded, well, we aren't the only ones. What's with the new makeover? She inquired. And indeed, Issei looked different today. He chose to wear his blazer and tie for the first time this year. He even had his hair gelled back, with only one perfect crest, extending from the front of his head and flowing down to his cheek, beneath his left eye. Kimiko nodded. Indeed, your appearance has changed quite a bit. A special occasion perhaps? Kimiko inquired with a curious expression. Issei shook his head. Nothing of the sort. It was long overdue actually. But enough about me, here's someone I'd like for you two to meet. He spoke and stepped aside, allowing them to see Asia, who was still paying attention to Kurohime as she conversed. This is Asia Argento. She'll be joining us from now on, Issei stated. Asia turned her attention to the two girls in front. She bowed and introduced herself. Greetings. I am Asia Argento, please take care of me, she spoke. Kiyomi smiled at the blonde's cuteness and embraced her. Don't worry, Asia, she began as she looked into the girl's eyes. We, and especially Issei, will take good care of you. I am Kiyomi, and the lady behind me is Kimiko. Come, me and Kurohime will show you around, Kiyomi spoke with a smile. Issei could only shake his head as the three girls departed for their journey of the school tour. He felt a hand slip itself into his and was surprised to see Kimiko place her head on his shoulder. He smiled. You know, for once I think we might be able to rest for a little while. Now that all the main problems have been dealt with, we should be able to take a break for a little while, he stated. Kimiko gazed up into his eyes and smiled. Indeed. If anything, now that you do have time off, I think you should start paying more attention to your servants, and especially your mate, she spoke teasingly. Issei smirked. Maybe I will. And so it was that their school day began. All was good until it came time for Asia to introduce herself to her new class. Hi, I'm Asia Argento. I'm originally from France before moving to Italy and now Japan. I'm not yet familiar with the customs here, so please take care of me, she greeted with a bow. Issei's class was in uproar. Oh man, she's hot. Yeah man, I'm totally getting with that. Blonde and busty, she'll make a great addition to the class. Some of the men exclaimed. How is she so cute? Adorable. And did you hear her accent? For someone new to Japan, she sure learned the language pretty quickly. I wonder what her zodiac sign is. We must protect her innocence, at all costs, some of the girls exclaimed. One thing was for sure, everyone loved Asia. They started asking her the usual questions, until, Hey Asia, in which part of town are you staying at? Is it safe? One of the girls asked. Issei's instinct shot through the rough when he heard that question. He sighed, acknowledging his impending doom. Here it comes. Asia smiled as she spoke. Oh, you don't need to worry. I'm currently staying with Issei, she stated. Every male's head snapped towards Issei. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. Bastard. And before he knew it, Issei was being gripped by the collar and was held in a neck lock by both Motohama and Matsuda. Yo, Issei, what's the big deal, huh? Since when did you start stealing all the girls and leave none for your homies? Matsuda began. First Kurohime and now you have Asia staying with you as well? Cough up your secret, man, Motohama added. Kurohime, who saw all this, couldn't stop laughing at Issei's misery. Issei looked at Asia and saw her smile as she spoke to some of the ladies at the front. He smiled seeing her that happy. At least now she can start making friends, was his train of thought, until the next girl spoke up. Hey Asia, make sure to keep your door locked at all times. You never know what he might be up to. Issei sighed. Okay, that's enough guys. Cut it out. The academy bells rang, signaling the end of the day. The sounds of chatter filled the halls of Kuo Academy as students started making their way off campus. But while most students made their way home, there were some who made their way in the opposite direction. Sitting behind her desk, Sona proceeded to go through her weekly dose of paperwork. Her queen and assistant, Tsubaki Shinra, stood by her side, organizing the stack of paperwork on the desk, passing only the most important matters on to Sona while handling the other, more menial paperwork, herself. A knock was soon heard on the door. Come in, Sona replied, not even so much as interested to see who it was since she already knew. The door opens and the rest of her peerage members enter the room. Saji was the first to speak as he stood in front. You called for us, President? He inquired. Despite his posture of assertiveness, he was quite anxious. Being the servant of a devil princess was tolerable so long as you knew how to behave yourself in your master's presence. But for him, behaving was anything but easy. Specifically because he had feelings for the devil princess. Devils, being bound to follow their own dark desires and dragons being creatures of emotion and instinct, made it very hard for the blonde to keep himself in check. Indeed I did. It's high time you started looking for a familiar. The portal to the familiar dimension opens once a month for a period of 3 days. That also happens to be tonight. You will accompany me and Tsubaki to go look for one. We'll depart at sunset. The rest of you are to continue with your contracts. We just received another influx of the regulars, so you'll all be busy until at least midnight. You can select a contract from the pile me and Tsubaki sorted. That will be all. Sona finished. Each of her peerage members, Tsubaki excluded, nodded with a, yes, President, before proceeding to the edge of the table to go through the available contracts. Saji, on the other hand, looked somewhat confused for a moment. Scratching the back of his head, he decided to voice his curiosity. Ah, President, what is a familiar? He inquired. Sona turned her gaze first to the confused boy, before looking to one of her bishops, a girl with long white hair and blue eyes. Momo, didn't I ask of you to inform Saji of the basics regarding devil life? Why isn't he informed about familiars? She inquired with narrowed eyes. Momo's eyes widened in surprise as she turned to her master. Apologies, President. I did inform him regarding the necessities, duties, and responsibilities of the everyday devil's life. It's just. A blush made its way onto her face as she turned her gaze downward, her fingers starting to play with one another from the sudden embarrassment. We kind of got sidetracked before I could reach the part with the familiars, Momo stated. Sona looked over the 18-year-old girl and examined her from head to toe. The blush and embarrassed demeanor. The fidgeting fingers followed with the aura if attraction. A small smirk flashed over Sona's face. It would appear someone's fallen in love, she thought. Never mind. Saji, a familiar is a spirit. A creature that devils and other supernatural creatures make pacts with to assist us in our endeavors. They aid us in battle, research, and carrying out our contracts. Familiars, in turn for their servitude, feed off of our spiritual power, allowing them to grow and mature. Some even evolve if their master becomes powerful enough. Some have special abilities, which, when bonded with, will also be available to the master. Forming a pact with a familiar bounds the familiar to the soul of master. Thus if the master dies, the familiar dies. That's about the gist of it, she finished. Saji nodded, grasping what Sona said. They soon dispersed, each peerage member already having an assignment that they would attend to later. Saji went back home, wondering what kind of familiar he would receive. Time passed and soon it was sunset. The time had arrived. Within the SC room, Sona had already prepared the magic circle, and upon Saji's arrival, the three transported themselves to the familiar forest. Appearing in a barren land, shrouded by the dark night with only the moon as light, three devils hastily made their way forward. They arrived before the entrance to the forest. A path laid from crimson stone with only abundance of trees on either side for as far as the eyes could see. The group came to a stop, and just before Saji could question as to the reason for the halt, a voice was heard. I see you've come, Princess of Citri. Tell me, how can I be of service to thee? A man appeared in the trees above, with brown hair and eyes and a backpack on his back. Dressed in knee-length brown shorts, boots, and wearing a reddish-brown shirt. The man appeared in his 30s and was wearing a smile upon his unshaven face. He disappeared, only to appear before Sona in a bow. Sona smiled while Saji looked on surprised. It's been quite a while, Satuji. I came here to seek a familiar for my servant. Sona spoke and turned to Saji. Saji, this is Satuji. He is the guide that will help us find a suitable familiar for you, she stated. Satuji turned and smiled at Saji. Oh, so it is for this young sir. Tell me, young man, what kind of familiar would you prefer? A big one, a small one, or one with blazing fur? Satuji asked. Saji stood skeptical at the man's words while Sona only smiled. Satuji likes talking in rhymes, so you better get used to it, Tsubaki commented. Saji nodded and started thinking as to what all he'd like to have his familiar be like. Since I am a pawn and I can adapt my skill set when I promote, I should probably focus on getting a familiar that has similar qualities, he thought. After another minute of thought he nodded. 3. Clenching his fist he smiled. Right, I'd like a. Though before he could finish, another voice interrupted him. Get him a shadow-type familiar. A familiar voice echoed over the plain. Sona turned around to the green light that appeared behind them with shock. It can't be? She questioned no one in particular as she recalled the voice. When the green light faded, everyone saw the appearance of a new, yet familiar individual. Standing at a height of 5'9", wearing a red shirt which was visible as a result of the unzipped, pitch-black hoodie, a pair of blue jeans and black Jordans. His hair, although mostly hidden by the hoodie, was slicked back with only a single crest falling down till below his left eye. His well-built posture was only further emphasized by his mighty aura. The smile on his face clearly showing his amusement at their gawking expressions. Issei, what are you doing here? Saji exclaimed. Issei started approaching the group as he spoke. I received a quest stating that the gateway to the familiar dimension had opened up and that I was to get myself a familiar. But of course, I didn't come alone, he stated. And as he spoke those words, 4 more flashes of green light appeared behind him. 4 young ladies soon stepped forth from the light, each dressed in casual wear. Yet the elegance portrayed from their aura made their presence all the more alluring. Asia, Kurohime, Ito, and Kiyomi. All subordinates of the man that first stepped out of the green light. Each lady exhibited a profound aura. They went and stood behind their leader, further elevating his status before the devils. Mr. Satuji, I understand there is a test that needs to be taken to qualify for getting a familiar. Issei spoke to the man. Satuji nodded. Indeed, indeed. But considering your level of power, I'm sure you'll all succeed. Satuji spoke. The test soon began. Each individual of Issei's group had to showcase their power. This was to show that they held the potential to be a familiar's master and are capable of subjugating one of the forest's many creatures. Issei made a scorching hot flame appear in his bomb. Asia showcased her healing prowess. Kurohime merely revealed her tales. They spoke of her power loud and clear. Ito released her demonic aura and Kiyomi released a pulse of mana from her feet, shattering the ground she stood upon. Satuji was pleased, but still made it know that he could only attend to one group, lest they decide to join up with Sona, which the Devil Princess agreed to. Issei, earlier you spoke of getting Saji a shadow-type familiar. Mind elaborating? Sona questioned. Issei nodded. Saji's sacred gear is one of the 5 Vritra sacred gears, each possessing a soul fragment of the Dragon King Vritra. Vritra is a shadow dragon and his sacred gear has granted Saji a lesser shadow affinity. Getting a shadow-type familiar who would be greatly compatible with Saji's affinity might grant him access to a unique set of skills that are within his capabilities. Furthermore, he will gain experience in handling shadow magic and in doing so will also gain greater understanding of his own sacred gear. Issei finished. Even though Saji didn't understand much of what was said, he saw Sona nod in agreement and realized that what Issei said might be true. With that said, they went off to go look for a rare breed of shadow familiars, the Phantom Spirit. Its powers of concealment were unmatched in the forest and could grant its master access to a wide variety of shadow techniques. Upon arriving in the Hollow Woods, where the Phantom resided, Issei was quick to activate his mana perception skill. If this thing is so great at concealing itself, wouldn't your eyes be worthless? Saji inquired. But Issei shook his head. If it's cloaking itself with mana, then I'll see it. If it's hiding itself within a subspace, then I'll still see the mana that's pouring out, Issei replied. Saji frowned. Then wouldn't that mean that others can locate my presence if I was to use the same technique? He stated his concerns. But Issei shook his head in denial. There aren't many beings out there who can perceive mana. It's an ability unique to a few races and divine entities. So your chances that you'll run into such a being is quite minimal. And before you ask, I have gained the ability from continuously having my body altered by mana. So I'm an exception. But otherwise you should be okay, Issei finished. Sona looked on at the 2 boys who conversed with one another before turning to the girls that followed behind Issei. You all seem quite close to Issei. I was quite surprised when I heard he had servants, especially feminine ones. Tell me, how did he recruit you all if you don't mind me asking? Sona inquired. Whether it's his power at work or something else, for these servants to be so attached to him, honoring him like some prince, seems a bit unnatural. Especially considering his perverse nature, she thought. Kurohime was the first to speak as she was closest to Sona. Our master is a man you couldn't quite begin to understand, Miss Citri. To most of Kuo Academy he's known for being a pervert. But outside of school, he is a completely different being. Much like yourself, she spoke as she smiled while looking at her master's back before turning back to look at Kuo as she spoke her last sentence. Sona, who looked at her, turned her gaze towards Issei. He's a different being? Then would you mind telling me what he's like? Sona looked towards the kitsune with a look of curiosity. Why? Kurohime wasn't at all sure she could trust the devils, especially when they are probing for information. But Sona already had an answer in store. I am curious. We tried recruiting him, offered him everything he desired, yet he still refused. To top it off, I found out my partner angered him to some extent. Knowing what he is like as a person might help us improve our relationship with him, she replied. Kurohime looked towards her master, then towards her fellow servants. Each of them had their own reaction to this. Don't you tell that bitch a thing about master. They might use the info against him. Kiyomi spoke telepathically through their link. I don't sense any hostility and the winds of truth didn't manifest. She speaks the truth, Kurohime replied. I don't know what's the problem, but shouldn't we ask Issei if it's okay to talk about him? Asia asked. I agree with Asia. We must ask master first. We are his servants after all, Ito replied. There's no need to fret. Kurohime, tell Sona everything she would like to hear. I permit it. Issei's voice suddenly entered the link. Everyone looked forward at his back before their attention slowly turned back to Sona. Where to begin, I guess I could say master is a righteous man, Kurohime finally replied, to Sona's relief. She focused her attention on Kurohime and every word she spoke. He hates injustice and wickedness. That's ultimately why he hunted down those demonic possessed creatures and why he is mad at you guys now. In his eyes, you were supposed to be the overseers of Kuo. You were supposed to protect it. And yet, it was because of you that it was almost destroyed. You blew up his home and nearly killed his mother. For that alone he probably should have killed you guys, but he decided not to, simply because he found you worth more alive and in his death than dead and useless. I was the first person he saved, and among the few victims that survived an encounter with the beasts you created. At the time, I was only focused on my pain and how badly it hurt, but when it was all over I remembered him, my savior. He took up the responsibility which was yours to begin with and even apologized to my family for the mess you people made. I followed him afterward and saw what he did. He would go and destroy the dens of those creatures that roamed the land. Each location would bear creatures even more horrific than the last. Each time I could feel his anger and distaste increase towards you people. He saw the carnage your presence in Kuo had brought about, and he wasn't happy. He saw what the demonic energy did to the humans, turning them into mutants and ghouls. which only led to more killings and death. He ultimately found it funny how no one remembered their siblings, children, and/or parents going missing after they were killed by a stray. But then he found out you people erased the memories of all those who knew the victim, like criminals covering up their tracks. Master was furious. He saved the mutants, cured the ghouls, purified the land of demonic presences, and stopped the wave of catastrophe which you devils set in motion. If you wish to understand why he hates you people, then look no further. You have your answer. Master considers you and the Redhead threats towards the safety of his people. Though he is more lenient towards you since he deems your intellect allows you to distinct from doing things that are harmful towards his people, unlike the Redhead. As for us and our loyalty towards him, well, he is our savior. Each one of us were in a bad place, and he saved us. I was a slave who was sold by a slave merchant. My slave brand would forever keep me a slave. Yet he gave me freedom. He tore off the mark that restrained me and cured me of my illness. Kiyomi was a mutant and a ghoul. She fed on human flesh to sustain herself. She killed quite a few young men with her looks, until she ran into Master. He turned her back into a human and gave her a new reason to live. Ito was the servant of the demon whom Master had slain. As per the soul contract of the demon residing within her, she was to become the servant of whoever killed her master. She became Master's first servant. Asia was led to Kuo by the Fallen who were intent on stealing her sacred gear. When she first got here, it was Issei who gave her food, shelter, and clothing. He was the one who looked out for her, and later, it was him who saved her from the Fallen. He accepted her into his family and she accepted him as her master. In each of our cases, it was not Issei who subjugated us, but we who followed him and requested that he make us his servants. And if not for Ito's soul contract, he might never have entertained the thought of taking on servants. We were drawn to him by his kind and caring nature. A man who saved people, not out of a sense of duty, but simply because he had the power to do so. That's the kind of person he is. But at the same time he can be quite delusional, thinking he, on his own, could bear the burden of protecting humanity and saving the populace from the apocalypse. But then again, his delusional dreams are what inspired us to follow him even more. Kuroheim finished. A smile spread across her face as she looked at her master's back. Sona was quite surprised by her words. She couldn't deny that she and Rias were responsible for the mess with the mutants and demons. But nevertheless, she didn't expect for Issei to have such loyal servants. Guess I was wrong, she thought as she also gazed at his back. Having thought that his sudden influx of servants were also a result of his power, perhaps I was too focused on his perverted nature, thinking that he would use his power to gather women for his own pleasure, she thought as a smile crossed her face. At the end of the day, you were nothing like Riser? A few minutes later Issei came to a stop, his outstretched hand preventing Saji and Satuji from passing him, forcing everyone to come to a stop. Do you see something? Satuji whispered. Issei nodded in response. A smile spread across his face as his shining blue eyes locked onto a spot in a hollow tree's shadow where space seemed to be distorted and mana leaked out. He narrowed his eyes as they turned azure, allowing him to fully gaze into the subspace. There, sleeping ever peacefully, resided the phantom. It was black, yet transparent like a ghost. Meanwhile its appearance was like a crow's. Issei pointed toward the spot around the tree where the creature resided. It's resting in a subspace. Saji, this is your chance. I'll point out its location. Capture it with the use of your sacred gear. Afterward, try channeling your power into it, Issei whispered. Sona rose a brow at Issei's words. Why would he channel power into a creature he's trying to catch? Saji looked over at Issei and nodded. His sacred gear appeared on the back of his right hand, seemingly looking like a purple frog. Issei nodded and started moving towards the tree. His footsteps vanished in sound. His scent vanished and his presence entirely vanished as not even his mana could be felt. Sona's eyes widened along with Satuji and Tsubaki. Kuroheim smiled at her master's display of skill. These were the only ones who could sense the sudden change that Issei underwent. Ito could also, but since she wasn't channeling any of her demonic power, her senses weren't up to par. Issei went and stood before the tree, his hand rose, with his index finger pointing to the area where the space was distorted. He turned to Saji and nodded. Saji, in turn, shot forth his arm. A pale tongue came from the frog's mouth. It passed over Issei's outstretched finger, pacing into the subspace and entangling the phantom. The creature was abruptly awoken. It released shrieks of surprise and anger as it tried to escape its entangled prison. But suddenly, almost as soon as it started struggling, it stopped. The onlookers looked surprised at the bird's sudden passive behavior. Only those with heightened senses noticed what made the bird calm down. Mana was flowing out of Saji, through the sacred gear and its tongue, to the phantom. The purple energy enveloped the crow-like creature. It, in response, started feeding on the mana, chirping every once in a while. Issei smiled and turned to Saji. You can let it go now. I doubt it'll consider flying away. Issei spoke. Saji nodded. He looked at the bird a bit hesitant, yet still decided to let the bird go. The tongue untied itself, and as soon as it did, the bird flew down and came to a stop on Saji's head. Saji looked perplexed at the bird, whom suddenly decided to turn his head into its nest. Okay, how do I make a contract with it? He inquired to no one in particular. The rest who watched on were once again surprised. Satuji looked at Issei surprised as he finally understood. This boy is smart, using the phantom's love for shadow mana to tempt its heart, giving it a sense of need. How smart indeed, he thought. Sona had similar thoughts but shoved them to the back of her mind as she told Saji how to form the contract. A bit of magic with an incantation later and Saji had himself a phantom familiar. This meant that Sona's group had finished their purpose in the forest. They left soon after. Satuji turned to Issei after saying his farewell to Sona. On to you, kind sir. Tell me all your wants and desires. Do you want a strong one, a fast one, or one that likes to set fires? The guide inquired. Issei, in response, shook his head and pointed to the ladies. Let us tend to the ladies first. Their familiars will be far harder to catch than mine. Plus I am in no rush. I have lots of time. He spoke in a rhyming manner similar to Satuji, who in turn only chuckled. Yes, fine, so it shall be. Who will be the first to get a familiar from me? Satuji asked as he turned his attention to the girls. The girls turned to each other before pointing at each other. They soon started bickering, each trying to nominate a person they thought should go first. It finally ended with Asia being the one nominated. Satuji looked at Asia as she stepped forward, a virgin with a pure holy aura, one who is humble and meek. I wonder, what familiar does she seek? Ah, hello Mr. Satuji. I honestly don't know what kind of familiar I'd like, but I would very much prefer a cute one, she spoke shyly. Satuji nodded. I hear you, Missy. I hear your plea. I'll get you one that's strong and cute, one that will not flee, he stated with utmost confidence. He was just about to guide them to the resting place of such a familiar he had described, when Issei spoke up. Mr. Satuji, there is no need to seek. Let's get a dragon for the one most humble and meek, Issei spoke. He was standing next to Asia, patting her on the head with a radiant smile on both their faces. Though Asia's was soon confused when Issei said dragon, and she wasn't the only one. Satuji turned to Issei skeptical. A dragon you suggest? My kind sir, surely you jest, he inquired. But Issei nodded. I'm sure you felt her aura of chaste and purity. Would it come as a surprise if I said she has a dragon affinity? Issei replied. Satuji's eyes widened to the size of saucers. A dragon affinity you say? In that case, I shall lead the way. And with that, Satuji started leading the to a different part of the forest. Asia on the other hand was confused. Issei, what is a dragon affinity? She inquired. The rest of the girls also listened in as they also wished to know. Issei hummed. Dragons are extremely attracted towards people who are pure of heart, religious, and chaste. Usually we refer to such people as people possessing a dragon affinity. Basically what it does is make any dragon you come across take a liking to you and makes them more eager to follow you around and obey your commands. Those with dragon affinities have the potential to become dragon tamers, Issei explained. Asia, and the rest of the ladies, were quite surprised when they heard this. Kuroheim was the first to speak up after this revelation, but I thought a dragon affinity granted people access to dragon-type magic. Issei responded with a shake of head as he looked at her. That's a dragonic affinity you are referring to, and it's only accessible to those who are dragon descendants or have been blessed with a dragon soul. Those with dragonic affinities bear the potential to become dragon slayers, and they are also as affected to a dragon affinity as dragons are. Which is one of the reasons why I am so fond of Asia. I am part dragon after all, Issei concluded. What? Issei is a dragon? Asia awed. Issei nodded. Indeed I am. This made little Asia smile. The thought of having a dragon familiar excited her now. And so it was that Asia came across a blue lightning dragon, who she named Reize, after Issei. Moving on to the rest of the ladies, Ito got a little bat. Kiyomi caught a white snake. And lastly, Kuroheim received a crimson fox spirit. Having dealt with all the ladies, Satuji turned to Issei. Now, sir, without further ado, what familiar do you desire for you? He asked. Issei looked at the man, before turning back to the image of the girls playing with their familiars. Issei hummed after a minute of thought. Which creature in the forest is the weakest? Issei asked. Satuji was caught off guard with this question, but nevertheless answered the question. That would be the slime. But they can also grow into quite the nasty creatures, given enough time, he responded. Issei nodded, a smirk making its way onto his face. His words carrying a sense of amusement as he spoke. Then the slime it shall be. Let's see if it is the one for me. Arriving before a swamp which was brimming with mana, Issei looked on perplexed as he saw no sign of any life forms. Satuji, seeing the young man's confusion, decided to clarify his doubts. This is the Chaos Swamp. At the center of this realm resides the Chaos Karma Dragon, one of the 5 great dragon kings. As she sleeps, she releases a great deal of mana, which saturates both air and land, allowing for other creatures to cultivate the saturated mana and grow stronger. This swamp acts as a sponge, sucking up the dragon's mana from the air and land. Since the mana it gathers is a sentient energy, when it accumulates, it gives birth to new sentient spirits. Spirits that are too weak to manifest a body will use the swamp water as a medium. In other words, the slimes. Any other creature that attempts to enter or come in contact with the swamp will have their mana sucked out, and eventually, die. Satsuji spoke, this time without his rhyme. Issei smiled at this, finally stopped rhyming. He teased. Satsuji smirked, rhymes aren't just words to say. But I have had enough for now. You'll continue another day, he replied. Issei nodded and proceeded to activate his mana perception. He could see the rate at which the swamp drew in the mana. Looking towards the center of the swamp, Issei could see various mana particles gather at the swamp's center. A light had already formed where the mana gathered, signaling the birth of a spirit. The light soon became prominent to the others. It would appear we are just in time, Satsuji stated with a smile. It is the birth of a slime. The other members of Issei's group watched on with amazement. Is Issei's familiar going to emerge? Asia inquired to the rest of the girls. Kurohime nodded in response. Indeed. Let's see what kind of familiar Master chose, she replied. They continued to wait in suspense, watching as the light approached the shore and finally revealed itself. When it emerged from the water, the light vanished and was replaced by a blue slime no larger than a fist. The girls looked on slightly agitated and in disbelief. Is Master going to take this slime as his familiar? You have got to be kidding. I can't even feel its power level. How weak is this thing? Ah, it's so cute, were the thoughts of Kurohime, Kiyomi, Ito, and Asia. None could believe the outcome of their master's choice. Issei approached the slime, who in turn, approached the massive source of mana before itself. Issei knelt down and picked up the blue slime in his hands, using his observation to perceive the slime. Name? Title? Level 1 Next level, 50 XP. Class, Low Class Slime. Stats. HP, 100 out of 100. MP, 100 out of 100. SC, 40%. STA, 5. Int, 5. Wis, 2. Cha, 0. Luke, 100. Abilities, Storm Affinity, Slime Regeneration, Mana Absorption, Basic Instinct. Skills, Water Manipulation, Lightning Manipulation, Storm Manipulation, Corrosion, Predation, Digest, Stomach, Vibration Sense, Mana Sense. Issei smiled. This was precisely what he wanted. A creature that he can adapt and empower, like creating his very own video game character. Tell me, slime, do you wish to become my familiar? Issei inquired with the use of telepathy. The slime, still being incapable of thought, sent warm pulses through Issei's hand. Issei smiled. I'll take that as a yes, he thought, and a green light shrouded the slime as Issei began the incantation. Let our hearts align, our souls entwine. Establish the bond of servitude. Relinquish yourself and become mine. With those words spoken, the light intensified before it suddenly vanished. Issei could feel a similar link to the slime as he had with the girls. Those who witnessed the contract being formed still wondered why Issei, who had power in spades, would choose a slime, the weakest of spirits, as his familiar. They were about to find out. Issei looked at the slime that had now become his familiar, as a thought went through his mind. You need a name. System, what is the price for naming this slime? He inquired. Mana required for bestowing name, 500 MP. Notice. Since bestowing a name grants a being power, the strength of the name can be increased by increasing mana output. This results in the name receiver receiving a blessing. Rank 1 blessing, 10,000 MP. Rank 2 blessing, 100,000 MP. Rank 3 blessing, 1,000 MP. Rank 4 blessing, 10,000 MP. Rank 5 blessing, 100,000 MP. Rank 6 blessing, 1,000,000 MP. Rank 7 blessing, 100,000,000 MP. Issei read through it all and decided on his plan. He'd give his slime a rank 5 blessing. Checking his own mana status, he sighed. Spirit Core LV5, 21,097, low. That's about 13 boosts to get me to the mark for rank 5. Damn it. If my spirit wasn't sealed, it would have taken only 10 boosts. I really need to start with the red dragon cultivation technique, he thought. As the red gauntlet appeared on his arm, everyone became tensed. What would he do? Satsuji, feeling the massive power radiating from the gauntlet, became stunned. Just who was this boy? Just as Issei was about to start boosting, Drake intervened. Partner, cast a barrier immediately, lest you want to get you and the rest of your servants killed. Issei was startled by Drake's words, but nonetheless complied and casted his phantom barrier. Everyone felt the barrier go up, yet no one knew why. Everyone present wondered what Issei was doing. Mind explaining yourself, Drake? Issei thought. Tiamat, the Chaos Karma Dragon, resides within the forest. Her presence is everywhere, and if she picks up on my presence within the forest, you're dead. She has a huge grudge against me. I can't remember why, but ever since I got sealed, she has hated me with a passion. Every host of mine that ran into her was killed. Which is why I implore you to finish what you are doing and get the hell out of here. Drake's booming voice echoed in Issei's mind. This information suddenly had all the hair on Issei's neck stand up straight. When he heard the name Tiamat, his instincts flared, further emphasizing Drake's warning. Boost. His power began to increase with each passing 10 seconds. When more than 2 minutes passed, the signal appeared on the gauntlet, telling Issei he had reached his mark. He held his gauntlet-covered hand over the slime and spoke. You have the potential to command storms, thus Tempest should suffice. But I wish to have that name be your surname. The name to which you'll be referred to shall be Rimuru. I hereby grant you the name, Rimuru Tempest. With those words spoken, the slime once more emitted a stunning blue light, like a Pokemon going through evolution. But this wasn't where Issei stopped. Using his system skill, Provide, he imbued Rimuru with all his knowledge and all the skills he wanted Rimuru to have. When this happened, the slime started changing shape and form. Everyone watched on with awe. When the light vanished, a young naked individual stood before Issei. He had the cross appearance of a human boy and girl, but was ultimately genderless. His body was as a 14-year-old's, small in stature but well-defined, lacking any baby fat on his face to give him a mature look. This was brought about by the transformation skill Issei received from Kuroheim. Light skin color, azure blue hair and golden yellow eyes. He looked at Issei before a smile crossed his face. He immediately assumed a bow as he greeted his new master. Rimuru Tempest, at your service, master, he spoke enthusiastically. But it was only then that he noticed he was naked. I'm naked. His eyes widened in shock as tried covering himself up to no avail. Issei, who saw the way Rimuru acted, started laughing. Meanwhile, everyone else looked shocked at what just happened. Not just the sudden transformation, but also the change in status. Rimuru Tempest LV40, capped. Those who were in Issei's party could also perceive a person's basic status. And they just saw a being go from level 1 to level 40 in 2 minutes. Issei, especially, was pleased. He checked Rimuru's blessing and found that it was improvement. Improvement. This blessing grants the host the ability to improve any aspect of themselves when needed, allowing them to become immune to anything they are exposed to for a certain amount of time or gain an affinity towards an energy they are exposed to. Effect of the blessing depends upon the host's desire. Issei was damned pleased with himself. It was in essence a spin-off variation of his skill system. Looking back at the still naked Rimuru, he spoke, I welcome you into my family, Rimuru. As for the nakedness, there's nothing to worry about since you don't actually have any private parts, but there is a skill that you can use to cover yourself up. Do you remember it? Rimuru heard his master's words and immediately scanned through his newly acquired knowledge until he found the skill Issei spoke of. Almost immediately after Issei spoke, clothes appeared on Rimuru. Blue jeans with a white shirt and white sneakers. Issei nodded in approval, to which Rimuru smiled. Those who saw it were shocked, especially Satuji. Boy, what is this? What did you do? Satuji asked Issei. I wanted a familiar that could meet all my expectation, but none could. The only way I could get my perfect familiar is if I created it myself. But doing so would require me to pass on my knowledge and possibly a name, all of which require a mass amount of power the stronger the spirit is. So I took the weakest of the spirits, who required the least amount of power to name, and recreated him in my image. I passed on a lot of my knowledge and skills onto him, including the understanding of all languages, which is how he can communicate so well. His clothes are nothing more than the result of a solidified illusion spell I gave him access to. Issei finished. Hearing all this, Satuji stood awestruck. He could feel the increase in power that the slime now possessed. It was almost at his level. The thought that Issei could increase the power level of a slime from the bottom to the peak of a realm was purely insane, and frightening to say the least. Issei turned back to face his companions. We'll depart immediately. Satuji, he turned to the demon that acted as their guide. I thank you for having aided us in our pursuit for familiars. I also know that there is a price for this service. Name it, Issei replied. Satuji gazed over the young only once before giving a gesture of hand. Leave it be. I'll give you this service for free, he stated. Issei seemed surprised, but also as though he expected something along this line, like a favor or quest. In that case, I'll give you a gift, Issei spoke as he summoned his shield over his gauntlet. The two fused into one, resulting in the red dragon shield. Issei held up his hand as he pointed towards Satuji. This is a technique I can use only once a month. Consider it my gift. Boosted blessing, he spoke. The shield responded with the same shout and released a golden glow. Transfer. The glow was passed on to Satuji, who stood apprehensively. Though, immediately after, he felt a sudden increase in the absorption of mana into his body. When he expanded his senses, he confirmed that not only was mana being drawn into his core faster, but the concentration of demonic energy which sustained his body had also increased. He looked at Issei shocked as the boy unsummoned his gears. The blessing I bestowed upon you has doubled your cultivation talent. Thus, you should be able to reach greater heights now that you possess the boost? He spoke and started approaching his companions. Satuji, still shocked at what just happened, bowed to the retreating boy. Thank you, Sir Issei. If you ever find yourself in need of a tamer, don't shy away. He spoke. Issei's smile turned into a smirk. Owing a devil is never a good thing, but having a devil owe you? How can that be a bad thing? He thought excitedly. All this time, Issei has done nothing but try to build connections. Whether through force or diplomatic means, he is slowly spreading his influence within the supernatural world. Rimuru joined Issei whereafter the group vanished from the forest. Not long after, Issei's barrier vanished. And when it did, Ruuwea air, a mighty roar echoed through the forest. Satuji looked towards the center of the forest in fright. All the central forest creatures fled from their residency, fearing the anger of the mighty creature. Who in their right mind would dare to anger the dragon? Satuji wondered as he also started running at breakneck speed. The forest was filled with the sound of various creatures fleeing while crying out to their fellow spirit, warning them of the impending doom. This all occurred as a single creature roared. Draig. Arriving back at their home, Issei and Asia each decided to take rest within their rooms. Issei fell on his bed, which vibrated tremendously at the sudden weight it received. Having a body that was as strong as a supernatural entity's didn't come without side effects. One of which was his weight. Weighing over 180 kilos, Issei still appeared not heavier than 80. Luckily for him, his mana had the tendency of making his body lighter than what it ought to be. So even though he weighed nearly 200 kilos, it was brought down to a mere 100, which was a godsend for his bed. What do you intend to do now, master? Rimuru inquired from within Issei's mindscape. One key feature about familiars was that they were spirits and could as such enter and reside within other beings. This was beneficial for the masters of these creatures, since they could call upon their familiars at any time, instantly. There are a few pressing matters I have to attend to, the first being my need to cultivate my body to a level that can bear my full power. The second being that there are currently 7, or rather 6 powerful demons running amok in my world. And even though they were weak now, their strength may soon rise to match mine. Luckily I have a cultivation method ready and my informants are currently searching for these demons, so that's mostly being dealt with, Issei thought. I want you to remain with me for the time being. I'll teach you, train you, and when the time is right, you shall have a faction of your own. Never forget that our goal is to expand our influence. The greater our influence, the more people we protect, the more disasters we prevent, the more these waves of catastrophe will become undone. He conveyed his thoughts. Rimuru, who was listening to his master, marveled at his words and intentions. He knew Issei was a cardinal hero and that his job was to save the world from the apocalypse. This task was not an easy one. Yet, Issei had full confidence that he'd succeed, and that unshakable confidence was what inspired Rimuru to be like his master. The slime soon retreated its consciousness into the state of slumber. His spirit, slowly expanding its aura capacity due being surrounded by such potent dragon's aura. Issei's gaze firmly rested upon his ceiling. His heightened sense of perception made everything stand out. The small cracks in the ceiling that went unnoticed to normal human eyes, the sound of the wind faintly blowing against the window, or the smell of the grass that's being cut by his neighbor's son despite the late hour. He could even hear Asia's heartbeat, though faintly. He could discern what she was doing at the moment. The sound of water falling on her body, the smell of her vanilla shampoo and the wonderful aroma it left in its wake, the sound of her humming as well as the rhythmic body movements. She was taking a shower. Getting these images in his head from the abundance of information his senses gave him, he immediately regretted having this power. Why? The passive skill, a calmed mind, has been activated. That's why. But nevertheless, his night was about to get funky. Just as he too decided to fall asleep, a crimson magic circle appeared on his floor. He sighed in annoyance as he knew the mama signature. Rhea stepped out of the circle and looked at Issei distressed. Issei merely lifted his head from his pillow, his eyes looking at her with disinterest. What do you want? He asked nonchalantly. But Rias, in her distress, ignored his words and crawled onto his bed, and onto him. The F she doing? He thought disturbed. He was about to voice this thought when Rias got in the first punch. Issei, please, you have to take my virginity, she exclaimed with the utmost seriousness. What? Issei thought he misheard her, but when he went through his excellent memory, he knew that was not the case. Please, if only for tonight. I really need your help, she begged. Issei looked into her worried eyes with an unreadable expression. using his observation technique on her to find out what brought about this sudden act, he sighed. Intentions, lose virginity in hopes of nullifying engagement. He sighed again, Rias, losing your virginity won't end your engagement. That'll only happen if you ended up getting pregnant. And considering the devil race's non-existent fertility, I highly doubt that'll happen. The only thing you'll succeed in doing is pissing off your fiancé and his family as well as put a target on my back. So I implore you to calm the hell down and relax. He spoke. His eyes looked at her dissatisfied. Did she honestly think I'd sleep with her after she tried to kill me? Twice, he thought. Rias looked quite surprised and also shocked. She didn't expect for him to refuse. This was Issei after all. She expected he'd be more than willing to jump in bed with her. How wrong she was. Though, even she had to admit that when she thought about it, what he said made sense. He parents, brother and Riser wouldn't care much if she lost her virginity to a man other than her fiancé. After all, they were devils. Some of them have been engaging in the act since their birth. Who the hell would give a damn if she slept with another man? No one. But if that man is an important and powerful individual, like a cardinal hero for instance, then they'd back off. This was ultimately the driving thought behind her actions. But once again, her plans did not turn out as she hoped. Then what do you want me to do? She asked as tears began to build up in her eyes. Drama queen, he thought in response to her words and actions. But nevertheless, he answered her, Rias, if the man is such a pain in your side, then challenge him to a rating game or something. It's a simple method and very easy to deploy. And doesn't involve you being in my room? He spoke, his voice turning quite sarcastic at the end. Rias shook her head. I couldn't beat him in a rating game even if I tried. I have no experience in the games while he has never lost a single one. He has 1,000 years worth of experience behind him on the battlefield while I only have 18. He has a full peerage while I only have 3 at my command. Not to mention his heritage as a phoenix grants him instant regeneration, essentially making him immortal on the battlefield. She spoke and began to cry. She let her face fall into her hands, trying to cover up the tears and sorrow she felt at that moment. Everything is stacked against me and I don't know what to do. Issei merely shook his head at the girl. While he hated seeing a girl cry, he couldn't care less if the one in front of him wailed in agony. Oh, and whose fault is that? Rias, just listen to yourself. No experience? So what? You said you have 18 years of experience. I only had 2 months of experience and still kicked your entire peerage's ass. Heritage? You are a devil princess, descending from 2 powerful clans, possessing both the power of destruction and the spatial magic unique to the Grimoire. And yet still, you lost to me, a human with no such heritage. All you're doing is making excuses for your shortcomings. If you hadn't ran away from home and continued training under your teachers, you would have been powerful enough to take him on and win. If you hadn't been so neglectful towards your peerage, they would have been able to handle an entire peerage on their own. And you might think I'm being sarcastic, but despite your clear inability to train them, each of your peerage members has the potential and the means to not only defeat, but to kill your fiancé, he finished. Once again, Ria's eyes widened. When Issei said that her peerage members could defeat Riser, it gave her hope. But that hope soon dwindled as she realized they were almost out of time. Before she could respond to his claim, a silvery light illuminated the room as a magic circle appeared on the floor. Ria's eyes narrowed at the circle while Issei rolled his eyes. Another devil had appeared from the circle. Wearing a white and blue maid outfit, she had icy silver eyes and silver white hair. With the aura of nobility and the body of a succubus, it was quite hard for Issei to not notice her. Especially her level. Grafia Lucifuge LV? Grafia looked at the scene before her. Rias was on bed, sitting on top of a boy who looked like he had better things to do. She sighed before turning her gaze back to Rias. My lady, while I can understand your panic, this is no way to resolve it. Now come, you must prepare, he will arrive tomorrow to see you. She spoke. Rias' expression dropped once more. Can I at least have Akino there with me? She asked, her voice seeming to be an inch away from despair. Grafia nodded. Indeed. It is most advisable that a king have his or her queen by their side at such important gatherings. Grafia spoke. Rias stood up and moved to Gragia's side. Turning back to Issei, she spoke with a saddened gaze. Sorry for having disturbed you, Issei. Upon hearing the name of the young man, did Grafia's eyes narrow? So he is the one. The magic circle lit up once more and within another second, the 2 women vanished. Issei sighed, not caring in the least, as he covered himself with his blanket. Finally, now I can sleep. Sadly, that wasn't an option since his senses reminded him of what he was doing before Rias first appeared. Damn it, Asia. The next day, after school, Rias returned to the ORC club room and prepared herself, emotionally, for Riser's arrival. Her peerage members each took up their positions. Akino at her side, Kaneko on the couch, Kiba near the window and Rias herself, on the opposite couch. Grafia was already stationed at the corner of the room, next to the door. An additional member, Ito, was also stationed here. She was sent to observe the meeting on Issei's behalf. She stood on the opposite corner of Graphia, next to the door, dressed in a similar maid outfit which consisted of colors white and black. The outfit stretched to her mid-thighs, with black stockings covering her legs and black pumps. Her long green hair was flowing down her back while 2 strands laid down her shoulders and onto her breasts. Her hair was glistening as though they were well oiled. Graphia wondered as to who she was, but dismissed her as either a servant or ally of Rias. Everyone waited in suspense. None chose to speak a word, already experiencing the intensity of the situation. Everyone was on edge, which is why it should come as no surprise that Kiba's hand instinctively went to his sword when a fiery magic circle appeared at the entrance. And with a flare of flames, a man appeared from the circle. Yellow hair with green eyes, dressed in a maroon suit with the upper buttons undone, on both the blazer and the white shirt beneath, revealing some of his chest to the world, for all to see. Leather shoes and golden cufflinks accompanied with the golden ring on his ring finger, gave him quite the wealthy appearance. Sadly, the same could not be said for his demeanor. While his appearance portrayed wealth and status, his demeanor spoke of arrogance. He was the perfect representation of the typical young master. Looking over the group before him, his eyes carried indifference. Eventually they reached Rias, and those same indifferent eyes blazed with desire. Riser has arrived for his fiancée, my darling Rias. He spoke his first words to the group, refusing to address the group and only directing his focus onto Rias, his voice carrying the arrogance which his demeanor foretold. This was Riser Phoenix, a devil raised in wealth, status, and authority, each of which only adding to his foul character. Born of wealth, he has always had what he needed and never had to work for anything costly. This made him a very materialistic individual, someone who values others by what they possess and how wealthy or influential they are. Naturally, this led to him fostering emotions of hatred and disgust towards other beings who are poor and struggle to make ends meet. His status as a high-born devil granted him many privileges and abilities unique to him. Yet this standard of life has made him prideful, believing that all his status and power isn't his privilege, but his right, giving him a sense of superiority over his peers. The authority brought about by his status ultimately led to him being arrogant. No one could do anything to him if he did something wrong, since he was a prince among the devil clans. No one would reprimand him or punish him, at least, no one that wasn't of equal status as him. This ultimately led to him disregarding low-born people, considering them as nothing more than slaves and toys for his amusement and pleasures. Rias sneered. Riser, why have you come? She asked in a threatening tone. Riser smirked. Am I not permitted to visit my fiancée? He inquired. Rias' eyes blazed with disgust at the mere mention of the word fiancé. When her father told her she was engaged, from birth, to this devil who treated all females as though they are but only creatures meant to be used for lust and birth, she was mad. No, she was outraged. Did her father think nothing of her? To give his daughter to such a man? Even if it was out of friendship that the 2 clan heads wanted their children to be wed and unite their clans, it was still not something she desired. Thus, she ran away from home, and continued running, until she realized it was useless. No matter where she went, no matter how far she ran, she couldn't get away. She was still bound by the marriage contract. And when she turned of age, she would be forcefully summoned back to hell to wed the lunatic she had come to know. For the last time, Riser, I will not marry you, she exclaimed. Riser sneered. You have no say in the matter. Or have you forgotten? Devil law demands you be wed to a devil of noble status when you turn of age. Not to mention the oath our fathers made, binding you to Riser as his betrothed. It is inescapable. He spoke irritated. But Rias didn't care. I'd rather die than marry you. Go back to hell, Riser. I am in no mood for you today, nor any day for that matter. She spoke once more. Lifting his head to the heavens, he took a deep breath through his nose. A second later, a powerful pressure invaded the room. It was hot to the point of causing the floor to ignite beneath his feet. The pressure assaulted the peerage members and suppressed them. They clenched their teeth as they felt their skin burn. Rias' eyes ignited with fury as she also let her power loose. It repelled the pressure of Riser's presence to a small degree, but still succeeded in relieving her peerage members of the pressure. Riser sneered. Riser will not tolerate such disrespect. If you refuse to return to the underworld with him, then he'll simply have to punish your peerage, now won't he? He stated as his flames consumed the room. Fat chance I'll allow that. Rias' power clashed with his, directing it away from her peerage members. Both of you, that is enough. Graphia's voice stretched out through the room, and instantly neutralized their power. Both Rias and Riser stood shocked at this. She snuffed out our power, with her voice. Both parties thought. They knew she possessed the title of Ultimate Queen and was one of the few devils who could challenge the Devil King Lucifer, but it was only now that they got a glimpse of her strength. Well, if it is the Ultimate Queen that requests his humbleness, then surely Riser must comply. Riser spoke and let out a breath as a way to express him letting go of his anger. Rias nodded, accepting the temporary truce. Graphia, seeing that they had calmed down, continued, "The Devil King Lucifer knew this would happen and as such, proposed a solution to your conflict." She turned her gaze to Rias. "Lady Rias, if you wish to dissolve the marriage, then you will be granted the same chance as every other devil to oppose your marriage. You will face Lord Riser in a rating game. And should you lose, then your marriage will continue as planned?" She finished. Rias stared wide-eyed at Graphia. She knew that she could appeal for the rating game, but even she doubted that she could win against him. "Of course, if you agree, a handicap will be offered onto you, considering your lack of peerage members as well as inexperience in the rating games. Lord Riser has participated in the rating games for nearly 1,000 years, thus, it was deemed acceptable to grant you 1,000 human hours to prepare for the match. Should you agree? On the other hand, should you refuse, then you will marry Lord Riser immediately." Graphia finished. Rias nodded. "I accept. I'll face Riser in the rating game," she exclaimed. After all, what other choice did she have? Riser laughed at her proclamation. "Rias dear, you might as well give up now. You are far too inexperienced, not to mention have, 1, 2, he began counting her peerage members, starting with Aquino and moving on to the rest of the peerage. When he finished with Kiba, he turned his attention to the presence behind him. "Ito, oh, and who might this be?" he inquired as he looked her over. Ito smiled and bowed. "I am Ito, Lord Riser. I am but a humble servant," she spoke. Riser was very much pleased with her appearance, not to mention the presence she radiated. It was clear that she possessed the most power after Rias. Furthermore, she appeared to be Rias' age. Riser nodded at her. "You possess quite the potential. You are Rias' age yet your power is almost on par with hers. She who is a high-born devil. Impressive indeed. Once I have wed Rias, I will surely make you my concubine," he proclaimed. Rias sneered. "She is not yours to have, Riser." Rias spoke outraged. And what she said was true. If Riser messed with Ito, then he'd be dealing with Issei. And unbeknownst to her, that was precisely what Issei had intended by sending Ito there. Riser merely waved his hand, swatting away her words as though they meant nothing. She is only a mere servant, not even a peerage member. Many in the underworld would see it as the chance of a lifetime to even be in the presence of a high-born devil, much less to be taken as his concubine. He spoke once more. This time his demeanor was one of a man that just got a free purchase at a store. "Is this the old, buy one get one free?" he thought, pleased with himself. "You have fine servants, Rias, too bad it won't matter in the match. You only have 4 servants while I have a full set?" He spoke, and with a snap of his fingers, flames engulfed the entrance to the room. From it, 15 women appeared, each one with great beauty and devilish charm. These were Riser's sex slave. I mean peerage members. Rias shook her head when she saw a familiar blonde beauty in his peerage. Now he even has a thing for his sister, she thought as she looked at the 16-year-old blonde. Her name was Ravel Phoenix and she appeared to be resonating a similar aura as he brother. Everyone looked at the crew of beautiful ladies. Each one was a stunning beauty in their own right, especially the queen of the peerage. Sadly, the same thoughts did not travel through their minds. They looked at Rias' peerage with superiority clearly evident in their eyes, not even believing them to be qualified to stand in the same room as them. Rias sighed seeing their expressions. She turned her gaze to meet Riser's smug look. "Riser, our rating match has been finalized and I have accepted it. Please return to hell. I have a rating game to prepare for," he spoke. Riser looked at his fiancée and nodded. "As you wish, my dear Rias. Riser will even be as kind as to throw in an extra day for you to prepare. Do use it wisely," he spoke arrogantly. Turning to his peerage, he proceeded to walk to them. Snapping his fingers, a magic circle bearing his clan symbol appeared beneath the group. He stepped into it and turned to Rias. "Until the rating game, darling Rias," he greeted. The circle immediately shrouded them in a cloak of flames. The circle instantly expanded a bit towards the door just before vanishing. Those in front did not notice as a result of the flames. Rias sighed. Riser was finally gone. Now she had to prepare for their inevitable match. She was just about to sit back down when she noticed a crucial detail. Ito was missing. Rias' heart skipped a beat. Ito was gone. With an expression of horror, Rias turned to Graphia. "Graphia, did Ito leave?" she asked, almost shaking from the thought running through her mind. Graphia looked at the place the girl once stood and nodded. "Indeed." Rias smiled. She almost thought Riser had abducted Ito. "She left with Lord Riser," Graphia finished. Rias' expression became one of horror once more. Soon, that horror turned to rage. "Riser!" Her demonic-empowered voice spread over the empty school grounds. Her demonic power had filled the room, nearly destroying the furniture before she reeled it back in. Graphia looked at her mistress surprised. Was that girl of such great significance for Lady Rias that she would react in such a manner? She thought. When Rias finally calmed, Graphia asked of what importance the servant was to Rias. But secretly, Graphia noticed that the entire group was on edge when they heard Ito was taken by Riser. This intrigued her more. Rias sighed before she replied. It isn't that she's a servant, but exactly whose servant she is that has gotten me enraged, she replied. Graphia's eyes widened. If that girl was not a servant of Gremory, then, him, Graphia thought until the image of a human boy came to mind. I see, so she is his servant then? Graphia asked Rias. Rias nodded. The cardinal hero. When he finds out about this, he's going to be furious. Ito was sent here to observe the meeting on his behalf. The fact that Riser stole his servant and even threatened to make her his concubine, will have him storming to hell in record time, she replied. Graphia nodded. Then I'll report this to His Majesty. We'll secure the girl before Riser does anything inappropriate to her. She spoke but Rias interjected. Yes, please. He may know the whereabouts of all his servants. In which case he may probably be aware that Ito has been abducted. And if that's the case, he might summon her back to Earth. But getting her back should be top priority. Riser's actions and provocation will surely anger him. I just hope he doesn't do something rash, she stated. Graphia nodded. Even so, I must report this to His Majesty the King. We'll determine what we'll do from there. Graphia spoke before greeting the peerage and disappearing instantly. There wasn't even a trace of mana to be found. Rias sighed and fell back into her chair. She could only hope that Issei won't do something irrational. And for that reason, she decided to contact him immediately. Meanwhile in Tokyo, Issei stood on top of one of the many buildings Tokyo had to offer as he gazed down at a cafe in the distance. A blue arrow was on top of the cafe, confirming it as his destination. He smiled as he spoke into a crimson magic circle next to him. Is that what happened? Good, he spoke. Good. What do you mean good? Ito was abducted by a womanizing scumbag. She might get violated by that bastard, Rias exclaimed from the other side. Rias, I observed the meeting through Ito. I know what happened. You need not fret. It all went according to the plan. Just focus on your training and notify me to your location once you begin. I still have things that I need to discuss with you and your peerage before you begin your training. Till then, Issei concluded. Issei wait, Rias tried to say, but was dismissed by Issei as he crushed his magic circle. Turning to his companion, Kimiko, he inquired, Are you ready? He asked. She walked up to him and stood by his side. Her hair blew in the wind as a smile grazed her lips. He appears to be at level 120. That might be above your capabilities, in your normal state, but not with your sacred gears active. He is no threat to us. We are ready to proceed, she spoke. Issei nodded as a smile grazed his lips. Then I guess it's time. Let's go meet the infamous king of ghouls. Rias sighed. She knew Issei had a plan, but she still felt worried. After all, Ito was taken on her watch. I can't let myself be distracted at this time. Akino, prepare the arrangements, we are heading out to train. Rias spoke in the presence of her peerage. Every one of them nodded at their master's words. How they used this time of training would decide how far they would go in the battle that would decide their fate. With that in mind, everyone went to prepare their things for the next 42 days which they'll be training. The next morning, before dawn broke, they teleported to the location of their training grounds. Gazing up the mountain, which would act as their training grounds, Rias and her peerage each put on a heavy mountain hiking backpack and prepared to race up the mountain. Last one up the mountain is in charge of cleaning duty for the next 2 weeks, Rias proclaimed as she hoisted her backpack onto her back. Everyone's bag was enchanted to weigh 80% of their maximum carrying weight. This would help them improve their stamina while ascending the mountain. Almost everyone's bag was either in the lower hundreds, Rias and Akino, or mid-100 kilograms, Kiba. Of course, Kaneko, being a rook with monstrous strength, had her backpack weighing at 500 kilograms. The team nodded at their master's challenge and hastily made their way up the mountain. Rias smiled as she took first place, taking pride in how determined she was to succeed. 5 hours later, Rias frowned as she came in last. Akino laughed while Kiba chuckled. Well, maybe if you didn't overexert yourself to stay in the lead, you would have had the strength to come in first, President. Kiba spoke. Kaneko was looking at Rias with indifference. Quite frankly, she didn't care. She found herself caring less and less as to what happened to Rias after Issei gave her the talk. If anything, she found that a part of her wanted Rias to marry Riser, to have her freedom taken and be thrown into despair. This was her demonic side, and the main reason why she feared using the power of her lineage. Shaking her head as a sigh escaped her mouth, Kaneko walked over to Rias and picked her up, hoisting her on her back. Let's go. There is still some distance to cover before we reach the bungalow. President can rest for a while. I'll carry you to the house, she stated and started to walk in the direction of their destination. Akino and Kiba nodded. They walked beside her while Rias rested her head on Kaneko's. She was smiling, thinking of how much her servant cared for her. And yet my instincts tell me she is troubled, Rias thought. She looked at Kiba and Akino before speaking. Kiba, Akino, could the two of you go on ahead and check if the preparations are completed? I'd preferably not want you all to stay in an unprepared residence or training grounds for that matter, she stated. Kiba nodded. I'll check the training grounds. He spoke before disappearing. Guess that leaves me with the house. I'll have some tea prepared by the time you arrive. Akino spoke with a smile before disappearing in a magic circle. With both her other servants gone, Rias turned to Kaneko. She rested her chin on her head as she began to speak. Tell me, Kaneko, what is the matter? She asked. Kaneko looked somewhat surprised. She didn't think it would be that obvious that she was unhappy. She thought of disregarding her president's question, but decided against it. I don't think we'll win, she began. Her words caused Rias' eyes to widen. Ever since we came to Kuo, I became more and more aware of how we seemed to change from devils to humans. President's focus on devil responsibilities seemed to diminish. Our training stagnated and our efficiency in watching over Kuo took a swan dive, she stated. Rias looked saddened by this, taking it as Kaneko blaming her for not training hard enough for her inevitable confrontations. But she wasn't finished? I didn't realize just how much we had degraded until Issei showed up. After every demon nest we visited, which had destroyed, it felt like a slap to my face. The previous me would have sensed those demons before they even had a chance of taking a life. The previous me would have been able to prevent all those deaths. The previous me wouldn't have been so fearful of embracing her heritage due to becoming a devil. The previous me could have taken on Riser if needed and won. Yet, when I look for that part of me now, I can't find it. All that remains is a weak little girl plagued by her past, failing to do anything while people around her continues to suffer. Tears started building up in her eyes as she held her head down. A single tear flowed down her left cheek. Her voice grew haggard as she continued. And it isn't just me. It's all of us. Kiba is still hung up on his past, and it's dragging him down. I can see it. I can feel it. The same for Akino too. We may hide it sometimes, but it's still there, preventing us from moving forward and growing stronger. Even if we train for an entire year, it wouldn't make much a difference. Until this weight on our shoulders disappears, we won't grow stronger, she finished. Rias now felt even worse than she did before. Of course, why didn't I notice? I thought they had come to terms with their pasts, but it would seem as though they buried it. And it's still there, constantly reminding them of their pain. I truly am a bad leader. To think I never noticed? She thought. Kaneko, there will always be problems that we can't do anything about. What happened in Kuo is one of them. There is nothing you, I nor any of us can do to change it. We can only choose to move forward and forgive ourselves for the mistakes we made. Improve and never repeat the same mistake again. The same can be said for that incident. You had nothing to do with it, nor could you do anything to stop it. You must forgive yourself, Kaneko. You need to accept yourself for who you are and not who people say you are. You are kind, gentle, caring and strong. You are nothing like your sister. Don't let what she did affect you. You are a greater person than she ever was. Rias spoke as she rubbed Kaneko on the head. She decided to get off her back and walk beside her as she continued to console Kaneko. The two reached the house where they reunited with the other two peerage members. They settled themselves in before meeting in the living room, dressed in their tracksuits as they prepared for their training, which will commence shortly. Rias nodded at her servants. Good. Since we are all here, I'd like to explain how we'll divide our time and which training each of us will focus on specifically. Rias began but was soon interrupted. That won't be necessary, Rias. A voice echoed through the room as a familiar character appeared in a flash of green light. Issei was here. Rias turned to Issei and felt a sliver of hope enter her heart when she saw him. He smiled at the group of devils as he stood with his hands in his pockets. An air of confidence shrouded him. I'll be the one training you. Rias looked perplexed at the man who just boldly stated that he'd train a group of devils. Are you sure you can train us, Issei? I mean no offense, but we do have powers that work differently than the magic you are used to, Rias stated. But Issei shook his head. That won't be a problem. In fact, it is precisely because your powers are different that I'll teach you how to fully utilize it. But regardless, let's begin this small meeting, he spoke. Strolling to Rias' side, he turned and faced the group. Now, I would just like to mention a few things before we go outside. The Phoenix has an ability that'll put a cork in your plans if you don't prepare for it properly. The Phoenix regeneration. There are only a handful of methods that can counter it outside of holy magic. And ironically enough, you have a good bunch of those few methods right here, Issei stated as he looked at each of the 4 people present. And what would those methods be? Rias inquired, intrigued. Issei smiled at Rias' comment before he turned to Kiba. Kiba, do you think it is possible for you to create an anti-demon sword capable of nullifying his power? He asked. Kiba nodded. He rose his hand and a magic circle appeared beneath it from which a black short sword appeared shrouded in a purple aura. Its name is Demon Repulsor. It will nullify the special ability of any demon for exactly 1 minute after being cut, he stated. Issei nodded. That's one way. Another way is to counteract the method he uses to regenerate. The ability is fire-based, so any immensely strong ice-based attack should stagnate his regeneration. Issei spoke and immediately afterward, Kiba summoned another sword. This one had a blue grip with a double edge, crystal blade, and an aura of ice that threatened to freeze everything that dared to approach it. This is Absolute Zero. It has immensely strong ice-based magic which can reach temperatures nearing Absolute Zero. When it pierces its foe, it will release a special ability encasing the individual in a prison of ice, Kiba commented. Issei nodded in approval. His body may be immortal, but his mind is far from it. Enough pain will cause his mind to shut down and make him collapse. Do you have something for that? Kiba looked hesitant at the thought of the type of weapon Issei spoke of, but nevertheless, he produced a third sword. A saber that was like crimson blood and had multiple sharp spikes protruding along the edges of the blade, extending backwards toward the hilt. Piercing won't be an issue, but pulling it out could definitely cause critical damage. Kiba looked at it with distaste. It was definitely not his type of weapon. This is torment. It will amplify the pain of any cut or wound that the receiver has sustained, even those not of its own, by 100-fold. Though I must say, it's not a sword I'd enjoy wielding. I doubt it could even be considered as such. He shook his head as he made the sword levitate in front of him like the previous two. Everyone looked at the three swords in front of them. Each one of the swords could potentially increase their chances of victory. Or ensure it. Wouldn't this be placing a lot of pressure on Kiba during the rating game? Rias asked. But Issei shook his head. The swords can be wielded by anyone and can be crafted in advance. If the preparations are done properly, Kiba won't have to be under any pressure during the actual match. Each one of you should carry one of each blade and use them when the time calls for it. Plus, once he's done training, he'll have an edge over Riser's peerage. That I can guarantee, Issei spoke confidently. He turned his gaze onto Akino, which brings me to his most well-known weakness. She looked him in the eye and could see the expression in them change from teasing confidence to slight empathy. Her eyes widened as she came to conclude what he meant. No, she rejected, her expression turning to one of rebuke at the mere thought of what Issei intended. Holy light, you have it, Akino. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed that I even had to mention it. Issei spoke frankly. Akino looked away with disgust still evident in her eyes. I'd rather let Riser have me as a plaything than to use that power, she retorted, her hands wrapped around her waist as she sought comfort in herself. Rias placed her hand on Issei's arm to focus his attention on her. Issei, she began with a remorseful tone, Akino has experienced trauma at the hands of the power you speak of. It still plagues her to this day. Asking her to call upon it now wouldn't be fair from either of us, she tried to reason. But Issei shook his head. That mentality is precisely why you aren't cut out to be a leader, Rias. For the past several years, you have done nothing about their dormant trauma and merely decided to let them deal with it on their own. Now, the consequences of your actions have come back to haunt you. Akino's holy light is the only thing that can do permanent damage to Riser. That, and Kaniko's senjutsu, Issei stated and looked to the shocked expression on Kaniko's face. She shook her head as the thoughts of using that power caused her to be reminded of what happened the last time someone used it. Her sister. And she slaughtered the entirety of her peerage members and master. Issei looked at her expression of horror before turning back to Rias. See what I mean? He stated with a displeased look. Rias looked away, ashamed. Issei sighed. Look, there is no need to fret. I have already devised a way for all of you to utilize your powers to the fullest without any negative side effects. So you can relax, Kaniko, 'cause I'll be looking after you. He smiled at the little girl before him. He decided to let some of his aura loose. The charm ability he has, doing wonders to convince everyone of his sincerity and even calming them to some extent. Seeing that everyone has calmed down, Issei decided to continue. Now, as I stated, I'll be teaching you some new and exotic ways to utilize your powers, including your individual piece abilities. So, Rias, would you mind if I aided you and your peerage throughout the next 40 days? Issei inquired. Rias looked at Issei and saw the resolve in his eyes, yet, she also took note that he placed the decision of putting him in charge in her hands. Like he valued her opinion on the matter. She nodded with a smile. I'll entrust us to you then, Issei. But if our training under your care doesn't show results by the second week, then I'll have to take over as instructor. She spoke firmly. To which Issei nodded. Agreed. With that, everyone made their way to their individual training spots. Issei created clones, which fascinated Rias and sent them with each individual peerage member. Rias took note of the fact that Issei stayed with her to act as her personal instructor. This pleased her somewhat. The thought that the real Issei wanted to teach her personally. Meanwhile, in the mountains, Issei sat crossed-legged in a meditative pose as he sweat profusely. A crimson aura was shrouding his body and scorching the surrounding stones as it was extremely hot. Issei was immersed in the red dragon cultivation technique. Opening his eyes to reveal a pair of blazing green eyes, Issei couldn't help but smirk. I have already reached level 1 and it hasn't even been an hour yet. My cultivation skill is surely boosting the speed of my progress, he thought, amused. Hey partner, mind telling me why you let the redhead believe that clone of yours was the real deal? Drake asked. Issei sighed. She likes people giving her attention or valuing her opinion on matters. It makes her feel as though she is appreciated. Which is why I also asked her for her permission to lead them. I let her think the clone was the real thing because I know she'd be pleased if it were. She may not realize it, but she is sucking up to me more and more. It won't be long before she becomes my slave. I think that'll be an appropriate punishment, he stated with a smirk. Issei could practically feel Drake shaking his head inside his mindscape. You and your manipulative crap. You are despicable, you know that? He responded. It caused Issei to chuckle. Drake, my friend, do you know the principles behind seduction? They are love and care. Show someone those and they'll happily throw themselves at you. Rias is no different. She is playing into my hand without even being aware of it. Dre shook his head. And that's precisely what's worrying me. You are getting too good to fast? He chuckled afterward. There was no doubt in Drake's mind anymore. Issei was going to be the greatest host he's had till date. Meanwhile, in hell, Graphia stood before her master, the Devil King Lucifer, otherwise known as Surzex. He sat on his throne with an expression of amusement. Is that so? The cardinal hero, you say? We could use this to our advantage then. Leave his servant with Riser. She should prove to be great insurance in the event that Rias lost the rating game. He spoke intrigued. But Graphia nodded. As you wish, my lord. She spoke and dismissed herself. Surzex on the other hand turned his gaze to the ceiling, his greenish-blue eyes turning crimson. Show me what you are capable of, shield hero. I expect a great spectacle from your end. Don't disappoint me, he spoke out loud, a smile grazing his lips as he did. In the training ground clearing, sounds of wood cutting through air could be heard throughout the clearing as Kiba's swift attacks threatened to strike down Issei. Despite the speed of his strikes, Issei continued to dodge them quite splendidly. Kiba observed as Issei sidestepped each of his strikes. Each time he would move only a centimeter out of reach and make the wooden sword pass by him effortlessly. While doing so, he would tap Kiba on an exposed or unguarded spot. Kiba soon grew irritated by his inability to match Issei. Throwing caution to the wind, Kiba started infusing magic into his body. His night piece granted him a speed-type physique that had its speed multiplied each time Kiba increased the consumption of stamina. He seemingly vanished, leaving nothing but a crater where he once stood. Issei smirked before disappearing also. Shockwaves spread out throughout the entire clearing for the next minute as after-images of the two continuously appeared across the field. Soon, they came to a stop, with Issei standing in front of an exhausted Kiba. His right-hand finger rested on Kiba's forehead while his left hand held Kiba's arm, preventing him from wielding his sword. Excellent sword skills you have there, Kiba. If not for my superior speed, I'd most likely have been beaten. Let's go another round. This time I'll limit my speed and strength, but there's a catch, Issei stated and retracted his arm. Kiba stabbed his sword into the ground and rose his hand in a gesture to stop Issei. Let me catch my breath. Using my physique eats away at my stamina, not my demonic reserves. Using both simultaneously amplifies the effect but shortens the time I can use it while increasing the cooldown. It's a last-ditch effort, so I probably won't be able to fight at the same level for another hour. He spoke. Issei looked at him perplexed. You assume that I care? This is training. The entire point being to surpass your limits and achieve new levels of power. So suck it up and wield your sword. The stipulation for our second round is this. Issei began before he made a hand sign, overlapping his index and middle fingers to create a cross sign. A moment later the clearing was filled with copies of Issei. Kiba looked unshocked and, quite frankly, scared. He never expected to face a mob of Issei, especially since he couldn't even defeat the singular version of the Armada standing before him. This is going to hurt. Meanwhile in the forest, Kaneko and Issei exchanged blows. To be more precise, Kaneko was throwing an onslaught of punches at Issei while he, like with Kiba, dodged them effortlessly, never moving more than a few centimeters to let the punch miss or fly by. Kaneko knew she was too slow to land a blow on Issei, so she stopped. She only needed one blow, but this wasn't the way to deliver it. The only option she had was to let him attack her and then counter. So she waited. Issei took note of what she did and nodded. She knew she was too slow to land a blow, so instead of continuing she opted to change her approach. Smart girl. Fine, I'll bite, he thought and got into a fighting stance, leaping at the white-haired girl with a fist ready to launch. Kaneko rose her arms in a boxing stance. The moment Issei's fist struck down, Kaneko changed her stance. Stepping into his personal space, she moved out of his fist's trajectory before grabbing his arm and flinging him over her shoulder. A shoulder throw which should have slammed Issei into the ground, if he hadn't twisted mid-air to land on his feet. Deciding to return the favor, he flung Kaneko, who was still holding onto his arm, over his shoulder. Except, unlike Kaneko, the moment he had her in the air, he twisted and slammed her into the nearby tree. Back first. The girl gasped as the wind was knocked out of her. Before she could regain her senses, Issei had her pinned to the tree with his arm. Honestly, I am impressed. You managed to fare better than I had hoped you would. Your tactical mind is sharp. Or is it just your instincts? He lifted his arm to let the girl free from his hold. Kaneko rubbed her chest. She looked at him with a questioning gaze. What exactly will you be teaching me? She inquired. That depends. Tell me, what is your demonic ability? I know that each piece grants the host an ability that coincides with their status within a peerage. Just as Kiba received a speed-type physique. So what is yours? Well, since you asked, I also inherited a physique. The giant's physique. It grants me the strength and durability of a giant but decreases my movement speed by quite a bit. It also costs quite a bit of stamina to maintain. Issei nodded at the girl's statement. I expected as much. The training I have designed for you will mostly involve teaching you fighting techniques while pounding you until you beg me to stop. But to tell you the truth, I don't think I will, he replied with a devious smirk. Kaneko gave him a deadpan expression. Pervert. Issei laughed and got back into a fighting stance. Come on. Let's continue, to which she responded with a boxing defense stance. Then let's. Meanwhile, near the mountain, a boulder the size of a human exploded into rubble as a lightning bolt passed through it. Akino's stretched out finger was crackling with thunder as a delightful smile enveloped her face. Is that what you wanted? She asked the man standing beside her. He nodded. You did well, although you used way too much power. In the upcoming battle you'll be facing an entire peerage while your group only consists of 5 individuals. It'll be a battle of endurance. The one that can last till the end will surely win. That's why you'll need to master your manipulation over your magic to keep the mana output at its lowest optimal level while keeping the efficiency at an all-time high. Like this. He proceeded to lift his hand and concentrate a small amount of flame mana in the center of his palm. The baseball-sized sphere of fire soon shrunk to the size of a pea before being flicked at another boulder not too far away. Upon contact, it exploded, blasting the boulder to smithereens while leaving only dust as remains. Akino nodded and proceeded to do the same with her thunder magic. Issei nodded in approval when she managed to perfectly replicate his spell. The effect was also more profound than his was, even leaving a small crater where the boulder once stood. Hey Akino, what is your demonic ability? He inquired. She looked at him with surprise laced all over her face. I thought you knew. It's called natural. It grants me the ability to learn any and all magic associated with the natural elements or in some cases, magic without an elemental base. As a testament to what she said, she rose her hand and the 5 elements appeared on her fingertips. Fire, water, thunder, wind and earth. And in the center of her palm was a dark sphere of demonic mana. In addition, it allows me to use the 5 basic magic arts with ease while boosting their effect, she continued before dismissing the elements in her hand. That would explain how you are able to access the abilities of knight, rook, and bishop while being a queen. Your ability natural grants you access to all 5 basic magics. Reinforce magic would grant you the abilities of both knight and rook while your defensive, offensive, perceptive and recovery magic gets a boost from your ability natural, subsequently granting you an ability similar to that of a bishop. Impressive. In what magic are you most proficient in? If you are referring to elements, then thunder of course. Although if you are referring to types, then offensive magic would be my strong suit. I have used it the most, so I guess I'm more skilled in it than the others, she responded. Issei nodded. Makes sense. This gives me new ideas to add to your training, but for now I'd like to continue training in mana manipulation. We'll move on to the other regimens later on. Let's continue. And with that the two moved on to mana transformation, turning their mana into weapons and fighting in close combat. Meanwhile near the lake, the training Rias and Issei were going through was quite similar to Akino's. Rias was currently maintaining a sphere of destruction magic which rotated at high speed within its confined space. Good, you have assimilated both power and density with movement, resulting in a highly destructive technique. How about you launch it at that little island in the middle of the lake? See what happens, Issei commented. He observed her nod, whereafter she launched it at the island. The moment it came in contact it exploded, taking the entire island with it. Rias was surprised, typically due to the little amount of power it had required to do so. Only the control was high and this was the result. The complete destruction of an island stretching over a distance of 200 meters. Whoa, it is actually quite effective, Rias spoke after recovering from her momentary shock. Issei nodded in response. True, but it's incomplete. Rias looked at Issei perplexed. I just used a technique that required high-level mana manipulation to cause that? She pointed at the absence of the small island in the middle of the lake. And you're telling me that thing is still incomplete? She inquired shocked. Issei nodded. All you learned in the past few hours was how to invoke the spell. But there are various ways to release it. And until you have mastered every manner of spell release, and learn how to adapt it to your circumstances, you can't say you've completed the technique, much less mastered it. He spoke before replicating what Rias had done moments before. A mass of mana gathered in his palm, compressing into a sphere of valiantly rotating energy. He closed his fingertips in on each other, the sphere resting on his touching fingertips, before he moved them apart. As he did, the single sphere separated into 5 smaller spheres, each sphere resting on a fingertip. Take the spiraling sphere spell as an example. It's a very simple technique consisting of 3 easy steps: power, rotation, and compression. When combined, it results in a very powerful spell that can tear apart almost anything when mastered. For now, I'll show you how releasing the same spell in various manners can have different results, so watch closely. And she did. She observed as Issei made the 5 swirling spheres on his fingertips move to his wrist, having them rotate there in preparation for his showcase of magic. He made one move to the center of his palm. This technique was originally made for close combat, so I'll first demonstrate close range release. He spoke before taking a few steps away from her. He rose his hand before striking the ground. The small orb carved a perfect sphere into the ground before it exploded, creating a basketball-sized crater. It was a perfect hemisphere, cut to a smooth surface. When you release it at close range, keeping your control over the technique is easy. So tell me, can you see the difference between my technique and yours? He asked. Rias approached the crater and inspected it, coming to a conclusion. Yours has more control. When I released the spell, my explosion spread out in waves while yours maintained its sphere shape. Even after the technique was released, it limited its explosive power to an area wherein it would have the most effect instead of simply letting the power disperse outward. To have such control over a spell is insane, she exclaimed. Issei found himself amused by her shocked expression and exclamation. He shook his head in refute to her statement and decided to correct her. It wasn't I who controlled the range of its destruction, but rather, it was the technique itself. The technique? But how is that possible? Rias questioned. The technique is balanced by the ratio power, rotation, and compression. Of course, this also means that if one of the 3 suddenly gets weaker, then it would have an effect on the other 2 aspects of the spell. The power in the technique is high and thus it requires a lot of compressive force to keep its form stable. But once you release the technique, the compressive force starts to alleviate because you are no longer concentrating the power through compression. This causes the technique to expand outward until the pressure applied by the compressive force and power contained within reaches an equilibrium. Thus the power will be contained within a limited space and be free to destroy anything within that space until it runs out of power, Issei explained. Rias looked perplexed at Issei as she tried to process what he just said. So basically you just mean to say my compression was too weak? She stated, confused. Luckily for her, Issei nodded. Indeed. Now, let's move on to the second demonstration. He summoned another sphere to his index finger before pointing it at one of the trees on the outline of the nearby forest. The sphere launched at the tree and exploded upon contact, resulting in a fist-sized hole in the tree trunk. And that was the swirling sphere cannon? The evening the entire group had another meeting, this time discussing the results of their training. Issei looked at Kiba, who sat on the couch while drinking a bottle of water. Kiba, your sword skills are exceptional. There isn't something I'll be teaching you with regards to that. Kiba nodded at this, feeling a sense of pride envelop him at the compliment. But, you are lacking in defense. Anyone fast enough can easily counter your attacks and deliver some frightening damage simply because you don't have any form of defense other than your sword. Secondly, you lack the ability to take on multiple foes at once. Swordsmen fight, more often than not, one-on-one battles, but that will not be the case when you are up against Riser's peerage. You'll be outnumbered and that will prove to be fatal for someone not used to multi-foe combat. Lastly, you are lacking in the stamina department, a trait shared among everyone in the peerage. He stopped a moment to look at everyone present and nearly every one of them looked a bit embarrassed at that statement. It prevents you from utilizing your physique to its fullest and limits your recovery speed in battle. Luckily I have solutions to all 3 weaknesses. But I'll have to implore you to try dual wielding whenever you have the chance. Issei finished. Yet Kiba seemed confused. Dual wielding? Why? Issei smiled. Dual wielding isn't easy. It requires extremely fast reaction time, concentration, and coordination. Individual mastery of arm movement and decisiveness. Ultimately, if you manage to master dual wielding, your skill with a single sword will increase by leaps and bounds, he explained. Kiba nodded. That makes sense. Might as well give it a try. Issei turned to Kaneko next. You, my dear, are slow. But that's not a problem we can't fix. And the method I'll be using will even amplify your strength further. Otherwise you lack stamina. You can only fight for 2 hours while utilizing your giant physique, and even then you continue to use countermeasures instead of offensive ones. Lastly, I'll be teaching you various ways to level up your basic combat skills and techniques. So you'll be fine either way. Kaneko nodded at his words. She could feel his approval for her over the others and that slightly warmed her heart. Akino was next. Akino, you have a vast understanding of magic and the magic arts, but you use too much power in your techniques and lack mastery over the arts of magic you don't normally use. We'll fix that. But one thing I'd like to address about the way you mages fight is this: drop the long-range projectile spells. They are useless unless your opponent is of a lower level than you are. During our fight, both in the factory and in the mountain, your projectiles missed and left you severely drained of mana. At best I'd say that 70% of projectiles miss their mark in battle and results in a severe drain in reserves. Of course there are better ways of utilizing projectiles within battle, and I'll be teaching both you and Rias how to use them more accurately. But try to dodge, block or deflect projectiles instead of neutralizing them with your own. Other than that, you lack stamina, like the rest. But again, not something we can't fix, he finished. Akino smiled. Is it just me or is Issei becoming more forceful? She thought as she slightly liked her lips. 1. Rias looked at Akino's momentary expression and couldn't help but sigh at her best friend's behavior. Rias, you lack control. You lack technique and on top of that you lack fighting experience. I'm just gonna take a guess and say that you took out most of your previous opponents with powerful blasts of destruction magic and have been getting by on that. To his amazement she shied away. Why am I not surprised? That ends here. I'm going to teach you how to control and utilize your power to your fullest capability, he finished with her quickly. Now, addressing the entire group, he spoke. In the morning, we'll be working on techniques to improve skills. From noon, we'll work on physical training and combat simulation. I'll be beating you all into a pulp throughout the entire afternoon, straight into the evening. So prepare yourselves. Issei had just finished speaking when a green light lit up next to him. He smirked. Just on time. Everyone looked on guard at the sudden light, but then relaxed when they felt the technique was similar to Issei's teleportation spell. When the light faded, a beautiful young blonde stood next to Issei. Her smile seemingly lit up the room as she directed it to the person next to her. Clearly Issei was the object of her affection and happiness. She then turned to the group and bowed. Good evening everyone, I am Issei Hyoudou, Issei's adopted sister. I hope we can get along, she spoke. When she lifted her head she saw everyone's surprised/shocked expression. She turned to Issei a bit worried. Issei, did I do something wrong? She asked genuinely worried. Issei burst into laughter. No Asia. They are just surprised to hear I have an adopted sister. No worries, he spoke and began to pet her on the head with a gentle smile plastered over his face. Asia's expression did a 180 as her frown turned upside down. Issei turned his gaze to the gathered devils. Asia here is also a part of my party. She's a healer in possession of a rare sacred gear that grants her great healing abilities. So you don't have to worry about recovery time. I'll beat you up and then she'll heal you afterward. This will amplify the speed of your progress and allow us to utilize our training time to the fullest. He spoke and did a fist pump in enthusiasm. The devil's sweat dropped at this while Asia seemed confused. But Issei, why do you want to beat them up? She asked. Issei looked at her face full of innocence and felt his heart melt. You see, Asia, when the body gets damaged during exercise it repairs itself stronger and more durable than before. So by having you heal them after I beat them up, they'll grow super strong, super fast. He explained with a gentle smile. Asia nodded. Okay, in that case I'll heal them as best as I can. She also became enthusiastic. Rias looked at the duo and felt that they'd make deadly training couches. But nevertheless, one question plagued her mind since Asia's arrival. Excuse me Asia, what sacred gear do you possess? She inquired, intrigued. Asia looked back at Rias with a confused look. I thought you were already aware, Lady Rias. My sacred gear is twilight healing, she answered. Their eyes widened to the size of plates at her answer. What? They exclaimed in unison. Asia was confused. The devils were shocked. And Issei was laughing his ass off. Gathered in the ORC club room, Rias and her peerage awaited the arrival of Graphia to transport them to the site of the raiding game. Issei sat on the couch sipping on a cup of tea that Akino prepared for him. Ah, delicious. Thank you Akino? He thanked the beauty standing next to Rias. Akino giggled. My pleasure Issei. Rias, who sat on her chair shook her head and sighed. I'm starting to become restless. Where is Graphia? She asked agitated. Issei's lips twitched in amusement. It would appear that Akino's affection towards me is getting on her nerves. Amusing, I must say. Calm down Rias. You must learn to enjoy the calm before the storm. Just look at Kaneko. He pointed at the girl that sat next to him, eating a chocolate bar piece by piece. Her cheeks were practically red from the bliss she experienced from finally having something sweet back within the confines of her mouth. She's so lost in her little paradise she can hardly focus on anything else. Even Kiba is doing something relaxing. He looked towards the knight who was polishing his sword. Rias was about to reply when a silver magic circle lit up the room. From it Graphia emerged. She looked over the group before addressing Rias. Are you ready to depart? She inquired. She received a nod from Rias as she stood from her chair. We are ready. Shall we depart then? She looked to her peerage who also stopped what they were doing to go stand with their master. Graphia turned her gaze toward Issei. Do you wish to observe the match, Sir Issei? She inquired. Issei nodded. Why not? He stood and smiled at Graphia. After all, it would be unjust of me to abandon them when they are so close to reaching the finish line. Graphia nodded. In that case you will be accompanying Lady Sona, as she will also bear witness to this rating game. She spoke and gestured at the door as Sona and Tsubaki entered the room almost on cue. Sona approached Rias and greeted her with a hug and kiss. Good luck, Rias. I expect to see you come out of this victorious. We'll be rooting for you. So give it your best? She spoke. Tsubaki nodded in accordance with her master's words. She turned to the peerage and bowed. I wish the same as my master, unto all of you. Best of luck to all of you. Do your best. Her words brought a smile to the faces of the peerage members. We surely will. We'll kick their asses. Indeed. Akino, Kaneko and Kiba spoke. Rias placed her hand on Sona's, a confident smile adorning her face. We will take him down. I will make sure of that. The group was soon transported. Issei went along with Sona to the observation room while Rias and her peerage were transported to the location of the rating game. In an alternate dimension, Rias and the peerage found themselves standing back within their club room. Gazing at the heavens through the window, she witnessed the night sky filled with auroras swirling through the air. She smiled at the implications thereof. It would appear they replicated Kuo Academy with the intention of using it as our battleground. This creates another advantage for us, she spoke. The voice of their arbiter sounded through the night sky as she spoke. As you all can see, Kuo Academy has been replicated to act as your battlegrounds. The base of each participating team are as follows. Riser Phoenix, King of the Phoenix Peerage. His base will be the Student Council Room. Rias Gremory, King of the Gremory Peerage. Her base will be the Occult Research Club. Each team has been provided a map to lay out their plans, and in accordance with the rules of a rapid game, each team will be provided 20 minutes to plan, strategize and set up any preparations they deem necessary. Your time starts now. She finished speaking and not a moment longer did a timer appear in the sky above. 20 minutes were ticking down. Rias looked toward the map resting on the table in the center of the room and moved swiftly to examine it. The rest of her peerage gathered around the table as soon as she opened the map. All right, we are already aware of the Academy's layout. So the plan is as follows. Akino, I want you to go and set up illusions around the building. Use traps and whatever other spells you know to mislead the enemy from our base to the training fields. As soon as the words left her mouth, Akino bolted out the window, literally. Kiba, as soon as the match begins, move to the training fields. I have a strong hunch that the ones who'll be lead there will include risers, knights and pawns. I'll leave dealing with them to you. She addressed her knight, who nodded in response. She pointed at the gymnasium at the center of the map. Kaneko, as soon as the game begins, head to the gymnasium. It's a crucial outpost since it resides within the center of the battlefield. No doubt Riser will send some of his own forces there as well. Defeat them and claim the outpost as swiftly as you can. Kaneko nodded. Yes, President. She complied. Rias continued thinking of more strategies to implement, and with that, time soon passed and now 10 minutes remained on the clock. Meanwhile with Riser, the man in question was making out with his queen. Their tongues intertwined as they kissed. A melody of moans echoed throughout the room as he massaged her exposed breast. His knee was grinding against the intersection of her legs as a small wet match started to form. Ravel looked at her brother in disgust. Don't you think you should be planning on how to win this game instead of making out with your queen? She questioned her brother. Riser stopped in response to his sister's question and smirked when he saw the blissful smile on his queen's face. Turning to his sister, he decided to let his queen rest up for now. Ravel, Riser's dear little sister, there is nothing to fret. Honestly, you should learn to enjoy the calm before the storm as your elder brother does. He spoke confidently. Ravel sneered. I do not fret. I am angered at your behavior. You spend your time gallivanting over your servants while you should be preparing for the most important battle of your career. This isn't just a battle to secure Rias Gremory as your wife, it is also to secure a seat in the Council of Hell and increase the Phoenix clan's influence throughout the underworld. Why can't you see the criticality of your position? She scolded her brother. Her accusing finger pointed at her brother throughout the entirety of the argument. Riser's expression grew deadly serious, to such an extent that Ravel shivered from the intensity of her brother's stare. Tell me, Ravel, do you take your brother a fool? He spoke with a tone so commanding that she couldn't bring herself to answer. Riser is well aware of what's at stake. That is why he requested for him. Riser turned his back to his sister, clearly agitated by his sister's doubt in him. Riser's peerage members looked at their master as he went and stood before the window, gazing out at the campus grounds. Rias is no more than a cornered dog. She'll bite if you come at her unprepared or careless. Riser has no doubt that during the time she spent training she had utilized every resource and every opportunity she had at her disposal. Riser is certain she is doing precisely that right this instance. She probably thinks Riser's came unprepared, but I assure you he has not. Today she'll experience defeat at Riser's hand, and tomorrow she and he will be wed. He clenched his fist as he proclaimed his belief. He turned to his peerage but a confident smirk. The plan is simple, we will isolate each of her peerage members and eliminate them. Now, listen closely. Riser began to explain his plan. It wouldn't be different than his previous strategies, but this one would be a little altered as a result of a specific factor. 5 minutes were left on the clock. Sona, Tsubaki and Issei looked on at the projections of both teams as they prepared for the upcoming match. Issei snickered when he saw what Riser was up to with his queen. Sona on the other hand shook her head. Honestly, I can't believe he'd be so arrogant as to flirt with his servant while being broadcast. She shook her head in disapproval. Tsubaki sneered at the man's mannerisms. Issei on the other hand shook his head. Your view is biased, Sona. That's why you can't see what he's actually doing, he commented. Both girls turned to look at the boy who was looking at the visuals amused. Oh, and what am I missing? Sona asked intrigued. Issei rested his head on his right hand fist as he closed his eyes. He's doing the exact same thing I would do if I was in such a match. Although his manner of going about it is a bit stingy. He's boasting. He opened his eyes, looking back up at the screen. Everyone of importance within the underworld is watching this match. And believe it or not, the impression you make before the game is of equal, if not more importance than your impression during the game. Most people want to know the nature of the people that might one day come into power and lead them. I believe that's why they also broadcast the preparation instead of only broadcasting the game. And it is this impression that he's creating that will have a lasting effect on the audience. I mean, just look at them. Rias is planning like crazy. She fears her strategies may not work and is creating backups for when they fail. To some she may come across as a proper strategist, utilizing her advantages and opportunities to ensure her victory. But just look at her, he pointed at her lazily. Sona and Tsubaki also looked towards Rias and examined her composure. She is too unsure, doubtful and on top of that, inexperienced. She's trying to figure out how she can overcome Riser, strategies she can implement, ways he can counter and how she can follow up in case it ever comes to that. Instead of appearing as a proper strategist, she's coming across as being paranoid. Meanwhile Riser is relaxing, keeping his composure while indulging in his interests. I mean, just look at him. Now he's drinking champagne while chilling on the couch. This sight seemed to irritate Sona even more, he noted. There are only two reasons as to why he would act in such a manner while in preparation of a match that could determine his career and future. Either he is arrogant, underestimating Rias and her peerage and couldn't care less about planning because he has already considered the match won. Or, he has already planned ahead, made preparations, strategized and came up with methods that will ensure his victory. He isn't arrogant but confident. He isn't underestimating his opponent but rather, in acknowledgement of their strength, have already made preparations to counter everything his opponent can throw at him. People want a leader they can believe in. Someone who is cool, calm and collected, doesn't break under pressure and doesn't lose sight of their goals or ambitions. If look at it from that view, who'd you entrust your faith to? Rias or Riser? Issei finished. Sona nodded. I understand what you mean. True, if you look at it from that point of view, then Riser is doing a far better job at enticing the audience than Rias is. But will that be enough to ensure his victory? She questioned intrigued. But once more, Issei shook his head. Rias has already lost, he stated amused. Sona looked at him shocked with a questioning gaze. How so? I know she has a disadvantage but even then, Issei shook his head once more. I am the one who trained them. I know what they are capable of. I even supplied them with various methods to counteract his phoenix regeneration. I made it so that there were only two possible scenarios wherein she would not come out as the victor. And it would appear that Riser has found one of those methods and implemented it. She is finished, he spoke solemnly. Tsubaki shook her head, denying Issei's claim. You claim that she has lost before the match has even begun. Don't you have even the slightest bit of faith in them? You who trained them? She asked in disbelief. Issei, for the first time, turned his gaze away from the screen and looked at Tsubaki with a blank expression. Tell me, Tsubaki, if you were tutoring someone in any subject, let's say math, and a question appeared in the exam that was based on work you didn't cover with your student. What would be the odds that your student could answer that question correctly in the middle of a timed exam when they've never even covered the work it was based on? He asked her seriously. She tried to remark but couldn't. Her gaping mouth abruptly shut, not having anything to say. She turned back to the screens with a troubled expression, hoping that the Gremory group would pull off a miracle. Sona on the other hand turned back to Issei. There's a loophole in that analogy you just used. Even if you fail the question, there is still a chance you pass the exam, she stated. Issei smiled and nodded. Indeed, if she can perform well during the rating game, then even if she loses, she won't have to marry that prick, Issei stated confidently. Sona's and Tsubaki's eyes widened once more. How so? She asked. But he only shook his head and pointed at the screen. Enough talk. Just watch. It's about to start. 1. And true to his word, the clock was already ticking down the last 5 seconds. Both girls immediately focused their attention on the screens as the last few seconds ticked away. 5. Ria's face gained a hardened expression as she began to channel her power throughout her body. 4. Akino looked on at the labyrinth she created with the help of illusions, traps, and misleading spells. She was already clothed in her priestess uniform and was awaiting to deliver some punishment. Thunder danced on her finger as she smiled mischievously. 3. Kiba looked around at the empty sport fields. He'd be fighting here shortly. With a great exhale of air, Kiba summoned 3 sets of swords. All 3 of them rested on his left hip, waiting to be drawn. He looked up at the clock in the sky and narrowed his eyes. It was almost time. 2. Kaneko looked at the gymnasium not too far from her. As a rule, they couldn't move outside their own territory until the match began, so she waited. She, like Akino, had already changed into her battle gear, which consisted out of a white battle kimono, black sandals which were as silent as a cat along with her black fingerless gloves with the metal plates. She stood cross-armed, awaiting the signal. 1. Riser smirked as he gazed at a dark silhouette in the corner of the room. His trump card. With this, his victory was assured. No matter the cost, he would win this game and claim Rias Gremory as his wife. 0. The preparation time has expired. Let the game begin. With that announcement made, both teams sprung into action. Riser's peerage stormed the campus grounds while Rias' team readied themselves for combat. Let's go girls, you know the plan. Isabella, Shualon, you take the gymnasium. Secure the outpost before moving on to assist Carlamine and Cirrus. Ubaluna, Riser's queen, commanded. The rooks, Shualon and Isabella nodded before departing from the group, the 2 heading for the gymnasium at breakneck speed. Ubaluna turned to the knights, Carlamine and Cirrus. Carlamine, Cirrus, you go with Leon and I, escort them to the enemy's base. Once they have promoted, they are to aid you in engaging the Gremory Knight. She spoke once more. Will do. Leave it to us, we'll have that knight begging for mercy shortly. Let's hurry, each of the knights and pawns responded. They too separated from the group and made their way in the direction of the old school building. That just leaves me and the bishops. Lady Ravel, I am sure you are also aware of our plan, Ubaluna stated as she glanced at the blonde beauty of the Phoenix clan. Indeed I am. We the bishops are to assist you, the queen, in aerial combat. More precisely, we are to help you when engaging with the Gremory Queen to ensure victory with little to no injury or harm incurred. She finished as her green eyes met Ubaluna's purple ones. Ubaluna smiled with a nod. Indeed. Then in that case, shall we take to the skies? She rose her staff and immediately ascended into the heavens. Ravel followed with her flaming wings carrying her through the sky. The last bishop, Maihi, followed after Ravel with her devil wings. Meanwhile, Kaneko arrived at the gymnasium. She sneered after entering the building. I can sense that you are already here, so why not come out already? She called out. With an amused grin on her face, Isabella stepped out from behind the wall while Shualon descended from the roof, crashing into the thin gym mats which covered the entire floor. Isabella stood at 5 foot 8 inches, wore a black leather jacket, black leather pants with combat boots and leather gloves. She had a white mask which covered the right half of her face. Her brown hair stopped inches away from her green eyes, which carried great amusement at their current matchup. Shualon on the other hand had black hair and light blue eyes. Her hair was kept together with 2 white ribbons. Her dress was a blue cheongsam with black heels. I'm assuming you are the Rook of Gremory then? Isabella inquired. Kaneko nodded. And you are Riser's rooks. Quite funny that both leaders would decide to send their rooks to the gym, don't you think? She spoke and began moving toward the 2 rooks. Indeed we are. But worry yourself not with the decisions of our masters, you should focus on the battle at hand. Shualon spoke as she also approached Kaneko. The 2 stopped, 10 feet from each other, and stared each other down. Are you not willing to participate in this battle? Kaneko asked as she gazed at Isabella behind Shualon. Isabella shook her head. Shualon will be enough. If not, then I'll step in if she is taken out. She replied and proceeded to fold her hands, wanting to watch the match before her play out. Kaneko's gaze shifted back onto Shualon before she shifted into her fighting stance. Well then, shall we? She asked. Shualon resorted to a kung fu stance. Let's. The 2 smiled and launched themselves at each other. A battle between rooks had begun. Meanwhile, the knights and pawns made their way to the old school building. Or at least they tried. Upon entering the forest, which they swore weren't shown on the map, they were bombarded with magic attacks and traps located within the forest. It's a trap, retreat, Cirrus cried out. They tried their best to get out of the forest, but found that with every turn they made, more traps would be triggered and would launch their deadly attacks at them. To the sky, Carlamine shouted as she unraveled her wings and took off. The others followed her example and took off. Yet, the moment they arrived within the clear night sky, even more traps seemed to be triggered. Both in the heavens, which was now raining down thunder and fire, and from the earth, which was shooting various earth spikes at the airborne devils. Curse you Gremories! Carlamine cursed as she drew her sword and released a concentrated wind attack in all directions, enveloping them in a temporal barrier of wind magic. This attack provided them a minimum of 1 second to find an escape route before they get torn apart by the rapid attacks. There, I can see it. Ni spoke as she pointed at the old school building hidden among the trees. Good work, Ni, let's go, Carloman shouted and bolted for the building. It was common knowledge that trap makers wouldn't place any offensive traps near their hideout in fear of damaging the building. The two pawns approached the building and placed their hands on the building wall. Promote to queen, both shouted. But sadly, before they could even hope to celebrate, the building exploded. With a flash of white light, the explosion consumed the 4 individuals. Bodies flew across the air as the 2 pawns were blown away by the force of the explosion. Burned clothes now adorned their wounded bodies. The 2 knights had tried to use their speed to get out of the blast range but still got caught by the shockwave afterward. Cirrus was flung into a nearby tree while Carloman was tossed into a man-sized boulder. The 2 knights were the first to recover, and upon their arising, they came to witness their pawns getting stabbed through the chest. Kiba had capitalized on their immobility after the explosion and used the time provided to eliminate the 2 pawns. He turned to face the 2 knights as a blue light enveloped the 2 pawns and teleported them out of the dimension. 2 of Lord Riser's pawns have been eliminated. Graphia's voice echoed throughout the dimension. Riser sneered at this. Damn it, Leon and I, how could you be so useless? He exclaimed in anger. In the skies above, Ubaluna replicated the actions of her master. Those fools got themselves eliminated within the first 5 minutes. This is a disgrace to the Phoenix name, she exclaimed. She was so enraged that she almost missed the thunderbolt that had threatened to strike her down. Quickly using her explosion magic to propel her into the sky, she narrowly dodged the thunderbolt. Turning her attention to the culprit at hand, she sneered. In the skies high above the forest, stood Akino dressed in her priestess outfit. Queen of Gremory, she shouted. Akino giggled at her reaction. Was it really that surprising that we'd be claiming first blood? My, it would seem you have much to learn, Akino stated before her expression hardened. I suggest you ready yourselves, 'cause I'll be tearing through all of you, she exclaimed before raising her hands to the heavens. Thunderclouds began to encompass the entire sky. This in and of itself had the queen and bishops of Riser on high alert. It was all too well known that Akino was the priestess of thunder. If she could conjure up natural thunder to strike them down, then it would prove to be a highly lethal technique, which was why they immediately went on the defensive. But, instead of calling forth thunder, what Akino did next seemed to frighten them even more. She made the clouds descend onto them, in the form of fog and mist. The 2 bishops immediately began casting wind magic to disperse the fog, but it was so thick that they could only disperse the area within their immediate vicinity. This was bad. If Akino chose to call upon thunder while they were in the fog, then they would have little to no chance of dodging. They had to think of a plan immediately. Back in the observation booth, the 3 Kuo Academy students watched on in bewilderment. Wait, she blew up the base, Sona exclaimed. Issei shook his head. That wasn't the club. It was an illusion crafted by Akino to lead them to Kiba. What they thought was the club building was an illusion placed over an explosion seal. Pretty smart, he stated. Sona looked back at the screens and saw a new panel appear, showcasing Rias atop the actual old school building. Sona released a sigh of relief. It would appear Kiba has engaged in battle with the other knights. So too has Kaneko and Akino engaged in battle with their opposing pieces. But will their strength be enough to overcome the numbers advantage? Tsubaki questioned. Issei nodded at her statement. They will. Trust me on that. During our time training, I made them become accustomed to fighting multiple foes at once. In addition, I also used some of my best resources to boost their progress by a couple months. Trust me, they can handle their counterparts, he assured. Both girls nodded before turning back to the screens. More specifically, Kaneko's battle. Heat waves continued to melt surrounding equipment as the 2 rooks continued their clash. Shuelan had infused her fists and legs with fire magic, using it in conjunction with her kung fu to deal as much damage as possible. The only problem with that was that Kaneko was even engaging her in battle. She was only dodging. For how long will you continue to dodge? Or is running away the only thing you Gremories know how to do? Shuelan shouted angrily. She wasn't getting in any hits at all. Kaneko, on the other hand, was smiling ear to ear. Remember, Kaneko, dodging is just as important as attacking. In fact, dodging is a greater alternative than blocking. If you manage to master it, you'll be able to avoid any danger, no matter how severe. She recalled Issei's words. For the past month, Issei had hammered the art of dodging into her very bones. And it wasn't like she had any other choice in the matter. The more she dodged, the less she hurt at the end of the day. Issei was just that brutal. But now, in the face of her counterpart, her hard work has paid off. So far I have been only dodging actively, avoiding her attacks for the sole purpose of avoiding damage. But it has allowed me to decipher her fighting style and attack patterns. Now, let's see how well I can do against her, she thought, excited. Next punch Shuelan threw at Kaneko's face was sidestepped, followed by the pulling of her arm which caused her to lose balance. The moment she did, Kaneko responded with quick jab to the core. Xiulan, seeing her attack would land, decided to block with her other hand. Bad mistake. It was quick, yet powerful, and caused a ripple effect which crushed some of her finger bones and tore through some of her tendons. Ewa! Xiulan screamed as she jumped back to get some distance between her and her opponent and maybe buy a little recovery time. Yeah, Kaneko didn't allow that. Body flicker, she thought, and seemingly vanished from her spot and instantly appearing in front of Xiulan. No way! This girl has the speed of a knight, Xiulan exclaimed inwardly as she saw Kaneko appear before her with her fist cocked back. Second fist technique, focus punch. She delivered a powerful strike with her right hand. Unlike the previous strike which caused a ripple effect with the force, distributing it over an area, this one focused all the force at one spot and aimed to deal as much damage to that specific spot. Xiulan's body was lifted from the ground and shot across the room like a missile, flying through the building wall, across the clearing and crashing into a nearby tree. Xiulan's eyes had rolled into the back of her head while her mouth hung open. Blood slowly dripped from it. Her abdomen was distorted. The muscles appeared to have a hole in it which was focused inward. But that wasn't the disturbing part. No. What was disturbing was the fact that Xiulan's back had ruptured from the force applied to her abdomen. This was a grueling sight to all those who were watching the match. A blue light started to envelop the unconscious girl and teleported her out of the dimension. Hopefully she wasn't dead. One of Lord Riser's rooks has been eliminated. The second announcement for this match was made. Isabella stared wide-eyed at what she just witnessed. She took Xiulan out with a single punch. She slightly panicked. Her panic was soon replaced with anger. Prepare yourself. I will not fall as easily as Xiulan, she proclaimed before dashing at Kaneko with her fist raised. Sadly, Kaneko vanished again, delivering a similar punch to Isabella. Except, unlike Xiulan, Isabella wasn't even fazed. Kaneko's eyes widened in shock while Isabella smirked. Taking hold of her arm, she anchored her to her spot. Before Kaneko could react, she delivered a punch of her own, straight to Kaneko's face. The force behind the attack was so devastating that it released shockwaves throughout the entire building, causing slight quakes to emit from their position. Kaneko momentarily lost consciousness, her mind rebooting as her body crumbled to the ground. Isabella, thinking it's over, let go of Kaneko's arm. The poor girl laid on the ground dazed. Isabella snorted, "How pathetic. You can sure dish out the heat, but you can't take it yourself." She turned around with her arms folded. "This match is over. How disappointing," she stated and began walking off. Who told you, it's over?" Kaneko asked as she stumbled to make her way onto her feet, nearly falling as she rose. She finally found her footing and stood on her own 2 feet. Her arms hung at her sides as her head faced the ground. Her hair covered her face as blood slowly flowed from the side of her head. Isabella turned around shocked. Seeing the girl back on her feet shook her resolve. "I delivered a punch that carried at least 100 tons worth of force. How could she possibly stand back up after that?" she wondered. Isabella sneered. "Just look at you. You can barely stand. Do you honestly think you are in any condition to take me on?" Isabella questioned. The next thing Isabella saw made the hair on the back of her neck rise instantly. Kaneko rose her head to reveal icy blue cat eyes. Slits carrying murderous intent stared Isabella down as the girl's body began to steam. A bluish aura enshrouded her soon after. "I'll end this quick," Kaneko spoke in monotone voice. Time seemingly slowed down as Kaneko activated the full body flicker. With a single leap, she stood before Isabella, who was still oblivious to the super-fast Nakomata. Kaneko formed a fist with her small hands, her elongated nails piercing into her skin as she clenched her fists, ready for her assault. Body flicker, full cowling, first fist technique, ripple punch, barrage, she thought as she began to punch Isabella back and forth. To an onlooker it would appear as though tens of fists struck Isabella all at once. The ripples caused by the barrage of punches would have caused the body of any other person residing within the low realm to explode immediately. Luckily, Isabella had her ability active which prevented this from happening. When Isabella became aware of what was happening, her body collapsed in on itself, her mouth laying wide open as she tried to recover from the shock of the force that was applied to her body. And yet, a moment later, she started laughing. "Did you honestly think that would work?" she mocked as she tried to stand up. Kaneko, who stood before her, shook her head. "I am already aware of your ability. I have been since I gave you that first strike," she stated, and instantly, Isabella experienced a dreadful premonition. Her body began to shake. "Your ability allows you to absorb force of any kind applied to your body and then release it at a later stage. That's how you managed to almost KO me in one strike. You used my own attack against me," Kaneko stated as she watched Isabella's body began to shake vigorously. What have you done?" she questioned as she found it nearly impossible to move her body while the pain she was experiencing started to increase. When I struck you just now, I delivered at least 64 strikes. Each of those strikes carried a force of 50 tons. Now my math might not be all that good, but that's roughly around 1,020 tons of force that I struck you with. No matter what ability you possess, there will always be a limit to what you can do with it. Yours is no different. You may be able to absorb and store force, but there's a limit to how much your body can take. And now, like a dam that has exceeded its water limit, so too has your body exceeded its own. Kaneko looked at Isabella with pity as the woman in question began to scream in agony. Currently, all that force in her body is tearing the body apart from the inside. Muscles were exploding, bones shattering, even the skin was being torn apart as the body tried to release as much of the built-up force as possible. With each muscle that ruptured, a great deal of force was released, causing shockwaves to emit from the fallen rook. With each tearing of her skin, more and more of her blood splattered onto the gymnasium floor. Finally, the poor woman dropped to the ground like a bag of meat. Now unconscious, she remained oblivious to the continued destruction of her body and the damage done to the surrounding area. Luckily, a blue light swiftly enveloped her and transported her out of the dimension, and hopefully to a healing facility. Lord Riser's remaining rook has been eliminated. Kaneko turned away from the destruction she indirectly caused and proceeded to speak with her master through the communication circle next to her ear. President, it's done, she stated. She could hear her master's approval in the words she spoke next. Well done, Kaneko. You performed even more stunningly than I had hoped. Now proceed as planned. Rias replied. Yes, President. Kaneko looked back at patch of blood that covered the entire floor. A slight sense of guilt entered her mind at the thought of the carnage she caused. She caused at her hands and her elongated nails. I knew I shouldn't have dashed. Boom! The gymnasium was blown to smithereens. A while ago. Kiba stared down the two knights who stood before him. Both Cirrus and Carloman had drawn their swords, preparing to eliminate their counterpart. Cirrus sneered as she glared at Kiba. You'll pay for what you've done, Knight of Gremory, she exclaimed and charged at Kiba. Carloman followed her example and charged at the blonde knight, their battle cries echoing throughout the clearing as their swords came down on Kiba. He scoffed. When their blades finally struck, they stood within a 5-foot crater with no one present other than them. You know, if you are going to attack your opponent, it's best not to let your emotions get in the way. They tend to cloud your judgment. Kiba's voice came from the edge of the crater. When the two girls turned to face him, they flinched from a sudden plane. Looking down, both saw blood dripping from their sliced abdomen. Carloman looked at Kiba in disbelief. How could you have possibly dodged our attack and struck back within that short amount of time? You are just a low-class devil, she exclaimed. Kiba chuckled. How indeed. You see, I have these swords to thank for that. Only now did the two knights notice that he was indeed holding two swords in his hands. One was a deep ocean blue, double-edged sword with a swirl for a guard, though it was hard to make out the true shape of the sword since it appeared as though the space around the blade was distorted. The second blade was clear like a crystal, double-edged with a green gem in its center. The grip was green while the clock-like guard was golden. These are space and time. By bending space around me, I can move at speeds which you couldn't possibly fathom. And by accelerating the flow of time on my body, not only do I increase my speed further, but I can react near instantaneously. So please, if you would, resign. There is no way for you to defeat me at your current level, he spoke confidently. Cirrus sneered again. You're only talking tough since you have those swords. I guarantee you are too scared to face us without them, she shouted, no doubt trying to provoke him into dropping his swords. Kiba smiled. Who said anything about fighting the two of you with these two swords? I just used them to escape that little attack of yours. Not that I needed them anyway, he stated before sheathing the two swords. Instead, he drew his third sword, a silver double-edged sword which seemed slightly bigger and thicker than the average short sword. This is Imperium, and it has a very unique trait. Let me show you. Awaken Imperium, he cried out, and with a flash of silver light, Kiba was encased within a suit of silver armor. The flaps of a blue suit with golden edges could be seen clearly as it extended from beneath his armor around his midsection. He now stood with his two swords resting on his hip while a thinner silver sword rested in his hand. Carloman looked at the blonde cautiously. What is this? She questioned. Kiba smirked. This is my Imperium sword's unique ability. It will encase its host in an impenetrable armor. It's a mainly defensive weapon and has no real offensive abilities, so you need not fear. As of this moment, it is but a mere sword, he stated before pointing the blade at the two women. Now, let's begin. Over the course of the next 5 minutes, the two female knights clashed with the blonde male. With their immense speed, the battle was anything but visible to common onlookers, only craters appearing where the knights would clash their blades. Shockwaves, ripping the boulders and tree remnants to shreds. Finally, after a sequel of failed attacks, the two ladies came to a stop. They seemed slightly winded as faint bruises were evident all over their bodies. Kiba, on the other hand, didn't have a single scratch on him. His armor was proving to be a fierce defense. Enough of this. Carmine, use your ability. I'll use mine. Then we'll finish him off together, Cirrus proposed. Carmine nodded and began concentrating her magical power. Kiba watched on amused. Here it comes. The next moment, 16 pillars of fire shot into the air. When they dispersed, 8 copies of Carmine and Cirrus stood before Kiba. Clad with their blazing swords, they charged at him. Meanwhile, Cirrus focused her power and made the clones appear mere inches away from Kiba. Seeing himself suddenly surrounded, Kiba drew both his space and time swords. Everything seemingly slowed down for Kiba, allowing him to jump out of the way of their combined attack. By the time the girl's attack struck the ground, Kiba had vanished and the only thing left in his place was a 12-foot crater. Both girls looked on surprised once again as they didn't expect him to be able to dodge that attack. I must commend you, Knights of Phoenix. You almost had me with that last attack. But the time has come to end this. His voice came from the sky. Looking up, both girls saw a sight that they would never forget. Up in the sky, above Kiba, was a multitude of magic circles, each opening a portal, making swords emerge from them. Kiba's face hardened. This was the technique he created after having lost to Issei's clones continuously, an anti-army attack of his very own. He could still recall the inspiration for this technique. If you create the swords in advance, then you can merely call upon them in battle instead of having to create them. It'll spare you a great deal of mana, Issei had said. And so he did. This is a spell of my own making, one that will annihilate you where you stand. I bid you farewell, and thank you for having pushed me far enough to finally unleash it, he smirked. Raising his hand, he called forth the name of this technique. Now open, gates of Babylon. And as his hand fell, so too did the swords. Hundreds of them. The group of women had no chance. Cirrus tried her substitution technique to transport them out of there, but it was of no use. The farthest she could substitute them was 100 meters. And that was still within the range of the technique. Within a mere 10 seconds, both girls and their 16 copies had been properly flayed by an onslaught of swords. The open plain now looked like the aftermath of a war. Kiba looked on at his hand's work and nodded. Next time I fight Issei, he'll have another thing coming, he smiled. 2 of Lord Riser's knights have been eliminated. Graphia's voice came soon after. At this moment, Kiba became aware of an explosion in the direction of the gymnasium. In fact, it was the gymnasium. Kiba shot in the direction of the gym, wanting to assist Kaneko, if he still could. Hang in there, Kaneko. I'm on my way. He flew as fast as he could, even utilizing his spatial sword for extra speed. When he arrived, he was met with a horrific sight. The gymnasium was enshrouded by a cloak of fire and smoke. But that was nothing in comparison with what he saw within the fire and smoke. A dark silhouette was holding a smaller, lifeless silhouette by the neck. That has to be Ko-. He didn't even get the chance to finish his thought as he witnessed another enraging sight. The taller silhouette had impaled Kaneko with a weapon. Not too long after, the girl faded away as she was transported out of the realm. Lady Gremry's rook has been eliminated, Graphia's voice sounded once more, confirming Kiba's fear. Anger filled Kiba in no less than a second. He knew he could take out this individual if he so wished. With both space and time swords, along with his speed physique, he was very confident that he could take this person out. But, Kiba, stop, go and assist Akino, Rias commanded. Kiba sneered. But why, President? He inquired. The only other pieces in his arsenal who can cast such powerful fire magic is his queen and his sister. Both are currently with Akino, so that means the person down there is probably him. Do not engage him. She spoke through the communication circle. Kiba nodded, turning in the direction of the mist-covered heavens he sighed. He took one last look at the gymnasium before he took off. Rest well, Kaneko. You did well, he spoke before his expression hardened. Rest assured, I will avenge you. A while ago, after having been engulfed by the clouds, the members of the Phoenix group had become even more alert. Stay alert, she might attack at any given moment, Eubeluna spoke. She had already started casting tracing spells to help them locate the Thunder Priestess, when multiple stars became visible in the sky above. Stars, he thought. But no, it was something much more worrisome. The next thing they knew, it was raining arrows of thunder. They immediately erected a magic barrier to defend themselves from the sudden assault. And to their relief, it appeared that their barrier would be able to withstand the assault. But one thing they didn't account for was the arrows that passed by the barrier. These arrows changed course and started heading back toward their intended target. Shit. Eubeluna took note of this and extended her staff at the incoming projectiles. She set off a few explosions to counteract the thunder magic before attending back to the barrier. Damn this priestess of thunder. Are all of Gremry this cowardly? Attacking from the shadows and using such underhanded tactics, she exclaimed in frustration. Meanwhile, Akino was giggling to herself as she shot arrow after arrow. It's almost ready. Just a little longer, she thought as she saw the sparks of static electricity accumulating within the clouds. What Riser's servants were unaware of was that all their explosions and fire magic used to counter the arrows was heating up the surrounding air, causing it to expand rapidly. As a result, the lightning production rate skyrocketed. Thunder started roaring through the area, making the servants of Phoenix realize their mistake. Their expressions portrayed the horror they felt at the sound of thunder. But it was too late. Akino grinned as she readied her thunder bow. "This is where you fall." Suddenly, all the built-up lightning gathered within Akino's bow. It formed an arrow of brilliant white light, stretching over a distance of 50 meters. "Now go, Indra's arrow." And with the call of its name, she released her most powerful attack. A lightning bolt born from natural lightning. A technique which surpasses all forms of elemental magic. And now it shot through the clouds. With unmatched speed, it reached its intending targets in less than a second. Eubeluna looked on, frightened, at the sight of the lightning bolt. They had sensed the sudden buildup of energy, but were too slow to react. It took less than a second for the arrow to form and even less time for it to fire. Yet, within that short amount of time, they had managed to separate from each other, opting to run rather than face that terrifying attack. It was better for one of them to fall rather than for all three of them to fall together. But there was one problem in their desperate plan. They were trapped. When the lightning bolt struck down, it used the moisture in the air to determine its path. And like a heat-seeker missile it chased after them. "Ah-aga!" Their cries echoed simultaneously. The first to be struck down was Maihi, tearing through one of her wings as well as her back. The scream echoed across the heavens as her wings, back, lungs and chest were fried by the lightning bolt. Tears fell from her eyes as dread set itself within her heart. "Forgive me, Lord Riser," she thought as a blue light enveloped her. But she wasn't the only one to be struck down. The moment it tore through Maihi, the lightning bolt curved and struck Ravel, cutting through her spinal cord and French frying her intestines till they were cooked well done. Lastly, Eubeluna was struck. But unlike with the others, the moment it made contact, the bolt expanded, consuming Eubeluna entirely. An explosion engulfed the sky, lighting up the heavens as it did. Its light shined across the entire campus. Both leaders looked up, worried at this surprising occurrence. When the blinding light subsided, the heavens remained undisturbed. The clouds were now nothing more than a mass of steaming gas. And from that gas fell two individuals. Both Ravel and Eubeluna crashed. A small crater formed where they fell. Akino looked down at them amused. "One down, two to go," she spoke before speeding toward the two down servants. "One of Lord Riser's bishops has been eliminated." Graphia's voice was finally heard, and shock was clearly evident from her voice. And with good reason. The time since the arrow formed and was shot, until the explosion and now, afterward, was only 3 seconds. Not only was it extremely powerful and fast, but the light contained in the lighting was deadly towards demons and devils alike. That's why Ravel was having a hard time recovering from the sustained injury. Her regeneration ability was taking care of it, but at a very slowed tempo. "Curesiu, Gremory," she thought as she tried uplifting herself, only to feel an unbearable pain shoot through her entire body, forcing her to remain immobile. Struggling to lift her head, she looked at the source of her pain. Her stomach. Her eyes widened in horror as she came to the realization that her stomach had a basketball-sized hole running through it, charred black with intestines missing, most likely vaporized in the attack. Only a sliver of flesh kept her upper body attached to her legs while fire raged over her body, trying to restore the damage that was done. Fear started to grasp her heart as she realized something. If that attack W was any higher, I'd be. The fear intensified. Indeed, if the attack was but a mere 3 inches higher it would have struck her heart and killed her on the spot. Ravel started shaking at the thought of almost dying. "Lady, Ravel." Ravel heard her name being called. When she turned her head, she saw Eubeluna laying in a crater no further than 20 meters from her. Her eyes widened at the state the queen was in. Her left arm was missing, along with half of her chest and stomach. Her lower torso was absolutely destroyed. A green aura cloaked her, rapidly healing and restoring her body to its former peak. Ravel sighed in relief when she saw this. "Luckily we had the Phoenix Tears. Their healing prowess should restore Luna to her peak within a matter of seconds." And true to her thoughts, Eubeluna was fully restored within 15 seconds. Albeit naked, the bomb queen rose from her crater and recalled her staff. With a tap of her staff, her clothes were restored. She looked up at the incoming Akino and sneered. "Lady Ravel, I'll stall her for as long as I can. Once you've recovered, activate your ability. I'll activate mine soon after. We'll use the combined power to eliminate her," she stated before ascending to confront Akino. Ravel looked up at her friend with worry. "Be careful, Luna." Shockwaves and explosions filled the skies as the two queens clashed once more. Akino, with her thunder bow and Eubeluna with her bombs. The two proceeded to take each other on in aerial combat. "You know, I honestly thought you'd tuck tail and run after your near-death experience. Color me surprised," Akino commented as she shot a cluster of arrows. Eubeluna countered it with a consecutive explosion spell. "Don't be." I'd never run from the likes of you, Thunder Priestess, she exclaimed. Akino giggled. Oh, how I love it when the prey squeals. It makes torturing them so much more appealing. So why not squeal some more, Bomb Queen? Akino mocked. With a sneer, Yubaluna released an even more powerful explosion, nullifying all of Akino's arrows. She pointed her staff at Akino before a great torrent of fire emerged from it. Akino raised her hands and a magic circle materialized. From it emerged a great water dragon. The two spells clashed, filling the sky with a column of steam. The sudden smoke screen gave both parties a breather as they readied themselves for the continuation of their battle. Lady Ravel should be near full recovery, Yubaluna thought and gazed down to Ravel only to see her slowly standing up. Both individuals smiled at one another. Their plan would now commence. Stretching out her hand, Ravel cried out, "Activate, helping hand." With her command, an orange light enveloped both her and Yubaluna. A crimson mark appeared on their foreheads, resembling the image of a bird spreading its wings. With a wave of her staff, a massive torrent of wind emerged from Yubaluna's staff, clearing the steam in an instant. She stared Akino down as she readied her staff. "Ready?" she questioned. Akino nodded. "I am, but are you?" she questioned. Yubaluna smirked as she raised her hand. "Let's see then." Detonation. She spoke and snapped her fingers. The moment she did, Akino exploded. She started snapping her fingers back and forth. Each time she did, the place Akino was flung to would explode, bruising her body and tearing apart her clothing. Blood started dripping from her mouth as the consecutive explosions continued. When it eventually came to a stop, Akino was battered and bruised. She fell down to the earth below like a sack of potatoes, creating her own little crater when she finally struck the earth. Yubaluna began laughing as she descended down to Akino. "Do you understand now? This is the power of my ability, Detonation. It allows me to cast spells prematurely and have them take effect at a later stage," she explained as she pointed her staff at her counterpart. "I swallowed the Phoenix Tears before this battle began and only activated its effects after you struck me down with that lightning bolt of yours. And when we fought earlier, I casted tens of explosion spells all across the sky without having them take effect, just waiting for the right opportunity for me to activate them. And now look at you, a pitiful mess," she mocked. And indeed, Akino wasn't in the best of states. Or so she thought. Akino looked up at Yubaluna and smiled, savagely. It caught the Phoenix Queen of Guard and made her lift her guard. "It's not over yet," she claimed before a shocking event took place. Akino dispersed into streams of thunder, which in turn, attacked Yubaluna. Cries emerged from her once more as the thunder shocked her, and laughter accompanied her suffering from above. Yubaluna looked up at Akino, who was flying up above without so much as a scratch on her, with hatred and contempt. "How?" she questioned. "Honey, you've never heard of clones before?" Akino asked in a mocking manner. Yubaluna's eyes widened. "I see. While Ravel used her spell on me, she created a clone to take her place," she thought. Suddenly, fire engulfed Yubaluna and started healing all her wounds. This shocked Akino as she recognized the ability. Phoenix regeneration? But how? Only direct descendants of the Phoenix clan can utilize the ability, she thought. Unknown to Akino, this was the effect of Ravel's ability, Helping Hand. It allowed her to establish a link between anyone she considers an ally and share her power and abilities with them. So as long as it was active, Yubaluna would be incapable of dying. "No matter, your little light show gave me the time needed to finish my spell," Akino stated and raised her right hand to the sky. Up above her, a column of clouds had gathered once more. Yubaluna's eyes widened. "No," she cried out and tried to stop her from casting the spell. After all, she recognized it. Akino made her hand descend. And as she did, so too did the clouds. Labyrinth of Heaven. Akino cried out as the clouds, for a second time, engulfed the surrounding area. This time, everything within a 300-meter radius was engulfed by the clouds and trapped within its confines. Yubaluna panicked, knowing this was the same spell she used on them earlier. "I need to get to her as soon as possible, before Helping Hand wears off," she thought in haste. Flying up into the sky, she was suddenly attacked by thunderbolts from the clouds themselves. Being too many to dodge, she resorted to taking the full blunt of the attack. The Phoenix regeneration would take care of it. She continued flying, trying to decipher Akino's location. But it was useless. The clouds were filled with traces of mana, making it nearly impossible to sense anything while trapped inside. "Are you looking for me?" A booming voice sounded from behind her. When Yubaluna turned, she was faced with a being that terrified her. As if thunder itself had taken on the form of a devil, Akino was clad in an armor of thunder. Her eyes were a fiery white while her hair had turned to a golden yellow. Armor had materialized all over her body in the form of solidified thunder. In her left hand she held her bow, while in her right hand she held a sword, both made of thunder and threatening to kill. Before Yubaluna could even process what she was seeing, the golden goddess appeared in front of her with her sword raised. With a single strike she was sent into the earth below. a 10-meter deep crater forming where the queen struck. Placing her sword in the bow, Akino pointed it at the fallen queen, aiming at her head. Releasing the shot, Akino watched on as the sword sped down to its target. Right before it could make contact, Ravel threw herself in front of Eubeluna with a magic barrier casted to protect her friend. Sadly, it was for naught as the sword, much like the lightning bolt before it, merely changed its path, moving around the barrier and striking the queen in the side of her head. Ravel gasped when she saw the sword passing by her barrier, her cry echoing in the prison of clouds as the sword struck the head of her friend. Luna. But it was too late. Once the sword struck, it exploded. Ravel caught the blast head-on and was blown away, slamming into the ground 100 meters away as she began to skid, only coming to a stop once she struck a tree another 100 meters away. The mark on her head started to fade, signaling that her ability was undone. Eubeluna, who took the full force of the blast while still laying in the crater, was luckily healed of most of the injuries to her head before the mark faded. But sadly, her body had taken an unrecoverable amount of damage and was currently laying in a 50-meter deep crater. Electricity still pulsed across her paralyzed body as her muscles spasmed from the constant shock. It was a pitiful scene to say the least. A blue light enveloped her and soon transported her to the outside world. Lord Reiser's queen has been eliminated, Grafia declared to the horror of Reiser. Ravel recovered her consciousness just in time to hear Grafia make the announcement. A single tear flowed from her eye when she realized her friend was gone. She tried escaping to her brother's side, but unlucky for her, she happened to run into another foe. "Forgive me, Lady Ravel," Kiba stated with his eyes closed as he summoned the demon Repulsor. "Knight of Gremory," she exclaimed. She didn't know why, but every fiber of her being was telling her to run. Although, before she could even raise her hands to make a spell, Kiba had appeared in front of her and stabbed her in the stomach. Ravel felt an intense sense of pain fill her while her magical power vanished. She started falling, and as she did, she took note of the fact that her wounds weren't healing. "I see, they prepared for us well. Good luck dealing with this, brother," she thought before a blue light enveloped her as well. A second later, she was gone. Lord Reiser's last bishop has been eliminated. Reiser smashed the table in front of him. Damn it, how could this have happened? Not only Eubeluna, but they got Ravel as well. Reiser shouted enraged. The silhouette in the room thought this to be the most prudent time to speak, and so it did. "Master, do you not think it is time to confront our foes?" The manly figure spoke. Reiser nodded. "It is time. The final showdown will begin at once." In the spectators' room, two individuals stared in awe at the performance of the Gremory peerage. While watching Kaniko's match, Sona couldn't help but be amazed. Her speed rivals that of a knight, she exclaimed in shock when she saw how swiftly Kaniko moved. And when she revealed her new form, Sona was even more amazed. She looked at Issei surprised. "You not only taught her your movement skill, but also helped her overcome her fear of her power?" Sona inquired. But Issei shook his head. "I taught her my movement skill and some of my fist techniques, but I did not help her overcome her fear of senjutsu. In fact, what she just used wasn't regular senjutsu," he stated. "Not regular senjutsu?" Explained. "It's quite simple. Senjutsu allows an individual to draw in natural energy and use that energy to amplify a person's strength by enhancing their spirit and body. The problem is that when you enhance the body through natural energy, the body's consciousness, or rather, its instincts get amplified as well. Depending upon the nature of your instincts, you could become a peaceful sage or a ruthless beast. Kaniko's species possesses strong animalistic instincts. Thus, when they use senjutsu, some of them actually lose control of themselves. Kaniko is in even greater danger of this happening since she is also a demon, and they, in turn, possess an instinct towards evil. That's the reason why she is afraid of utilizing her power," Issei explained. "I understand all that, but it still doesn't explain what you meant," Sona replied. Issei shook his head. "I wasn't done. The purpose of senjutsu was to increase a person's aura, firstly, and grant the spirit the power to manifest itself secondly. The part about increasing aura is what results in their instincts taking over, and that's not what she needed. The only thing she needed was to be able to manifest her spirit in order to deal spiritual damage. That was the only way she could counteract the phoenix regeneration. So instead of having her draw in natural energy, I advised her to draw out her own spirit. Using senjutsu in this manner allowed her to manifest her spirit and continue dealing spiritual damage without any risk of running rampant. She can also draw out her own life energy. It results in a partial transformation which grants enhanced speed, strength, and healing while keeping her instincts under control," he finished. Sona nodded, finally understanding what she saw. It's unheard of for senjutsu to be used in such a manner. But it seems to have worked. Her prowess in battle is at a whole new level. It's just a shame she got eliminated. Sona spoke with both admiration and sadness. Tsubaki on the other hand was curious as to the techniques that Kiba used and asked Issei regarding them. Kiba's two swords, space and time, are the byproduct of a challenge I issued him to complete. During the time we spent training, I told him to become more creative with his ability to create any sword with any type of ability. I would issue challenges that would require him to create different kinds of swords as the solution to the problems I'd present him. In this particular instance, I asked him to create swords that would maximize his movement speed to its fullest. And those swords were his answer? Issei replied. Amazing. But what about the technique he used at the end? She questioned with enthusiasm. Issei chuckled. Looks like someone has a love interest, he thought, amused. It's called the Gates of Babylon. Ultimately, I had advised Kiba to create swords in advance and then merely summon or call upon them during battle. It would save a lot of power and stamina in addition to granting him instantaneous access to a weapon. He followed my advice and that technique was the result. Gates of Babylon opens a gateway between Kiba and the space where he stores his weapons, allowing him to call upon his weapons at a moment's notice. That was the original purpose behind the technique. But after being beaten by my hordes of clones day in and day out, he devised this method of employing the technique. Now he has his very own anti-army technique and it barely costs him any mana to employ. The only strain it places on him is having to control so many weapons at once. I believe that at present, he can't control more than 50 at a time. That's why he can only open 50 gates at max. For now at least, Issei finished his explanation. Sona gulped in fear when she heard what Issei had to say regarding the technique. If he manages to get his control up to 100, or possibly 1,000, then he'll be an unstoppable force on the battlefield, she proclaimed. Issei chuckled. I agree, although, getting to that stage may take a while. Kiba has immense talent when it comes to swords and close combat. Sadly, the same cannot be said for his magic skills. I advised him to learn telekinesis to increase the efficiency of his technique, but he sucks at it. Even using mana to replicate the technique took 3 weeks to learn. Currently he can only control 3 swords at a time, Issei stated. Sona rose a brow at this. But didn't he just control over 50 swords? She questioned, confused. Issei shook his head. He launched over 50 swords. There was no excessive control required, he retorted. Issei turned his gaze toward Akino. Seeing her thunder armor brought back memories of the time he fought her in that state, although this new version was far more profound than her previous form. Honestly, if I were to fight her now, I doubt I'd be able to beat her as easily as I did before. Truly, you've come a long way, Akino, he thought, pleased. After witnessing Kiba eliminate Ravel, Issei's eyes narrowed. It's about to begin. Rias finally emerged from her club room and was flying toward the main school building. Along the way, she reunited with Kiba and Akino. Both were tired from their fight, but used a rejuvenation dagger, another of Kiba's creations, to relieve them of the fatigue and grant them strength. As they made their way to the building, Rias could feel Riser emerging from the building and standing atop of the school. Alone. I don't get it. So far, only 9 of his peerage has been eliminated. Where are the other 6? Is he trying to have them promote while we charge him head on? But that wouldn't be a problem. Kiba alone could take on 6 queens and come out the victor. So it doesn't matter what his plan is, it won't succeed, Rias thought confidently. When they reached the main school building, Rias and her 2 peerage members stood in the sky, facing the Phoenix King as he stared them down, amused. It's over, Riser. Give up now or face defeat, TIAs proclaimed. Riser snickered. A snicker which grew into an laughing fit. Rias, oh dear Rias, you seem to think you have already won. Do you honestly think you, alone, have the strength needed to take Riser on? He questioned. Rias shook her head. Open your eyes, Riser, it's 3 against 1. She frowned at his smug attitude. She felt something here was amiss. But Riser shook his head. Sorry my dear, but it's 3 against 2. He snapped his finger. Faster than the eye could see, an individual flew out from the window. Akino summoned a thunder sword to block the spear tip that was about to impale her, while Kiba crossed his arms to block the kick that flew his way. Both got struck with such force that it shot them across the sky and into the crater where the gymnasium once stood. Rias tried blasting this new figure with a concentration of destruction magic, but she found her attention drawn to the giant ball of fire shot by Riser. Directing her destruction magic to the big ball of fire, she successfully cancelled out the attack. By the time she turned, the individual had already disappeared from sight. Rias turned her gaze back to Riser, her eyes showcasing her loathing of the man. Who was that? She inquired aggressively. Riser swayed his finger with a smug smile rampaging all over his face. Clearly the man was amused. Now Rias, don't forget your manners. What's the magic word? Riser teased. Rias sneered. Seeing the sheer hatred on Rias' face, Riser decided to comply. Fine, I'll tell you. Meanwhile, Akino and Kiba emerged from the crater. They gazed up at the warrior floating above them with a pair of fiery wings. Upon closer introspection, the man above them was dressed in a red and white uniform which was adorned with armor protecting at the joints. In his hand, he carried a spear. black, with red runes along with a crimson jewel which was brimming with power. The man himself had blonde hair and green eyes, appearing in his mid-20s with Japanese facial features. He looked down at the two uninterested. "Who are you?" Kiba asked. The man looked at him and his gaze intensified. Ria's eyes widened, shock filled her at hearing what Riser just said. "This is low even for you, Riser. You couldn't take me on with your own peerage members, so you recruited a servant of your mother's." "That too, him," she cried out. Riser laughed like a madman at the look of fear that now adorned Ria's expression. "Indeed I did." Sona looked on shocked at the individual that appeared unexpectedly. She turned to Issei with a questioning gaze. "Is this what you meant?" she asked Issei as the worry became clear in her voice. Issei sighed and nodded. "Yes, this was one of the scenarios I envisioned Rias would lose in. Although, I didn't expect Riser had him on his side. This could be worrisome," he confessed. Tsubaki on the other hand seemed confused. "What do you mean? And just who is that man?" she inquired. "There are many ways to increase the overall strength of your peerage. I knew that, if Riser were to take this seriously, he'd boost his peerage's overall strength to the max. Problem is how he would go about doing this. If he simply trained his servants, then there wouldn't have been a problem. Rias would have won. But there was another way. A way to soundly obliterate Rias, if he managed to think of it. And the moment I saw his lack of pawns, I knew immediately he had thought of it," Issei stated. Tsubaki wanted to question him further, but Sona intervened. "The strength of a peerage is determined by the strength of a piece. And if the king is unsatisfied with one of his pieces, he could always trade them out for other, stronger pieces," Sona finished. Tsubaki's eyes widened in realization. "You don't mean he?" Sona nodded. "Indeed he did. And guessing by the lack of his 6 pawns, I'm guessing this guy is worth 6 pawns, she added, further shocking Tsubaki. "But the question still remains. Who is he?" Sona thought aloud. Issei narrowed his eyes. "You're about to find out." The man stared down Kiba as though he was some kind of murderer, gasping his spear tighter as he sneered. "I am the adopted third son of the House of Phoenix, reincarnated devil who formerly served as the pawn of the ravishing Lady Phoenix. In addition, I also happen to be the fiancé of Lady Ravel. Who you hurt," he proclaimed. His voice grew louder as he spoke. He twirled his spear, making it transform back into its original form. An ordinary spear with a blade that possessed a jewel at its center. He pointed his spear at Kiba as he spoke the words that would shake them to their foundation. "I am Motoyasu Kitamura Phoenix. But you just call me the Cardinal Spear Hero?" Akino and Kiba looked on shocked at the man who stood before them. Not long ago, they had to face a Cardinal Hero in battle, and lost severely. Now, they face the same circumstances, only this time, it is 2-on-1 instead of 4-on-1. "How long will you continue to gawk at me? Raise your weapons and face me, if you dare," Motoyasu exclaimed as he pointed his spear at Kiba. A second passed and Kiba still hesitated to do anything, so Motoyasu took the liberty to attack first. "Fine. If you won't attack, then I will." His spear changed shape once more, looking more like a standard spear but with an aura of thunder surrounding it. "Thunder Spear." He shouted his war cry and seemingly vanished with a clap of thunder. He appeared before Kiba, with his spear retracted, making the spear transform into a 3-point spear, similar to a trident, before he called out its name. Meteorite Spear. He thrust his spear forward at a speed nearing that of a meteorite falling from the heavens. It erupted with a blazing fire as it struck forth. Luckily, Kiba drew his space-time dual swords just in time to block the blunt of the spear's attack. But it didn't stop there. The spear exploded upon contact, similar to how a meteorite would as it struck the Earth. The resulting explosion was devastating. The entire dimension shook for a moment as quakes and shockwaves spread throughout the area. Kiba flew out of the explosion with partially destroyed armor and 2 cracked swords. He was about to slam into the ground when Akino, clad in her thunder armor, appeared and caught him. Sadly, before she could place him down, she had to defend against a concentrated wind attack. Aerial Spear Strike. Motoyasu shouted as a vacuum was shot from the tip of the spear. It was heading straight for Kiba when Akino raised her palm and created a thunder barrier. "Priestess of Thunder, I advise you to move out of my way. I have no enmity with you, so I won't raise my spear against you. But if you continue to get in my way, I'll have to strike you down as well," Motoyasu spoke as he walked out of the smoke and dust that was clouding the sight of those who looked at the enormous crater where the gymnasium once stood. Akino sneered. "Oh? And what enmity do you have with our knight? I'm sure the two of you never met, so why despise him so?" she asked. Motoyasu rose a brow as his eyes narrowed at the knight in Akino's hands. He was slowly regaining his consciousness. "That poor excuse of a knight attacked my fiancée and stabbed her with his sword. I am obliged to avenge her and reclaim my lady's honor. So I'll ask you again, step aside?" He spoke affirmatively. Akino shook her head. "Sadly, I cannot do that. He is my comrade after all. Only scum would abandon their friends in times of need," she declared and flared her magical power. Looking at Kiba, she took the vial of phoenix tears and poured it out on his wounds. We'll have to work together if we wish to defeat him. Ready yourself, Kiba. This won't be an easy fight, she stated as she stared the cardinal hero down. Kiba stood next to Akino as he restored his damaged armor and swords. He was also staring down the man that nearly killed him in less than a minute, his eyes brimming with fighting intent. Then let's do this. Rias and Riser clashed high above the main school building. Rias was clad in her armor of destruction while Riser was shrouded in a cloak of hellfire. Back and forth the two went, exchanging blows and causing minor explosions in the sky each time they did. Riser tried long-range spell casting, but Rias always found a way to close the gap between them and followed it up with physical attacks. Very few actually connected as Riser wasn't anyone's pushover. He actually trained in hand-to-hand combat even though he specialized in spell casting. Rias, trying to amp up the damage of her close-range combat, created tangible weapons from her power of destruction. More specifically, twin short swords. She began hacking away at Riser, who in turn, merely dodged. Amused at Rias' efforts, he was caught off guard when she suddenly threw the sword at him. He tried blocking it with a barrier, which broke soon after, but still fulfilled its purpose in nullifying the attack. Only for him to feel a sudden pain in his lower abdomen. Looking down, he saw a crimson sword sticking out of his stomach. What? When did dash? Aya! Riser suddenly cried in agony as he experienced pain unlike anything he has ever felt before. He tried removing the sword, but moving itself was such torment that felt like his mind was about to break. Rias smiled when she heard Riser crying in agony. Using the shadow shuriken technique she learned from Issei, she had thrown the sword of destruction magic and then threw the sword torment right after, hiding the sword within the shadow of the first so that it could bypass Riser's observation. And it worked. Scream, you filthy swine. Scream. This is for all the times you tried to molest me, you disgusting bag of barf. Rias thought in delight as she relished in Riser's agony. Finally, with tremendous effort, Riser managed to pull out the sword. Sadly, that didn't mean that the pain he was experiencing had diminished in the slightest. Before he could regain his bearings, Rias stabbed him in the back with another sword. Unlike last time, the pain wasn't so severe, but the previous attack still had him dazed so he couldn't even resist when his entire body was encased in an ever-growing ball of ice. The ice was so cold that Rias had to let go of the sword, lest she caught frostbite. The air grew foggy merely from the cold of the ice. Once the ball reached a height of 10 meters, it dropped to the ground with Riser in it. Upon touching the ground, everything within a 100-meter radius was frozen stiff. Everything beyond that was exposed to a deadly cold that slowly burned away at their vitality. Rias looked down at the man, locked in the ice, triumphantly. Where is your arrogance now, Riser? Where's the smug playboy who thought he could decimate me and my entire peerage without breaking a sweat? She mocked before raising her hand at the sphere of ice. An orb of violently rotating destruction magic manifested. With each passing second it grew. It finally stopped when it reached the size of a human boulder. At this point, Rias required both her hands to stabilize the technique. I win, Riser. Massive Rasengan. She called out the name of her technique. Just as she was about to launch the mass of destruction, an object crashed into the earth next to Riser. I don't think so, Gremory. A voice sounded from inside the dust cloud. Rias wanted to launch her attack anyway, but what she saw next made her heart drop. Motoyasu stood before the sphere of ice with his spear in his right hand, and a bloody, spasming Kiba in his left. Kiba! Rias exclaimed. Her shock soon turned to rage as she glared at the spear hero with murderous intent. I must commend you, Lady Rias. You trained your peerage well. With only 3 members, you were able to decimate an entire peerage. That is truly remarkable. Sadly, I cannot allow you to take down elder brother Riser, he stated as he looked back at the sphere of ice behind him. Rias decided to let the technique dissipate, lest she ends up killing her own knight. How did you manage to take down both my queen and knight? She asked the man standing beneath her. He smiled. It is as I said. You trained them well. Too well, in fact. All I had to do was turn their attacks back on themselves and they fell like flies. He thought back to the final moments of their match. Kiba unleashed the gates of Babylon while Akino launched her final flash. All he did was summon his karmic spear. When the attacks were about to strike him, he had both their attacks reflected, turning Kiba's attack on Akino and Akino's attack on Kiba. Neither expected it, which is why the attack ended up hitting its mark. Akino got skewered and penetrated by a barrage of swords, while Kiba got fried and electrocuted. Akino was eliminated on sight. Kiba's armor acted as a strong enough buff for the attack, but even it crumbled, leaving behind a paralyzed and spasming Kiba, on the verge of unconsciousness. Rias sneered. Coward, she muttered as the man explained how her peerage members fell in battle. But sadly, Motoyasu didn't care. He took his spear and held it above Kiba's heart. Listen, Lady Gremory, I have a vendetta with this knight of yours. He raised his sword at my fiancée and struck her down. By right I should kill him where he lays, he proclaimed as he glared at Kiba's half-conscious form. He turned his gaze up at Rias with a heavy expression. But, I'll let him live. I'll let go of my vendetta, if and only if you resign this instant, he declared. Rias' eyes widened. She was so close to her victory. So close. And now this happened. She looked at Kiba's condition and tears started gathering in her eyes. He wasn't even fully conscious. Blood dripped from his mouth as well as the torn and spasming flesh near his chest. His clothes were torn away and all his bruises and injuries were visible to her. He was defenseless. And now, on top of that, a spear hovered above his heart, threatening to end his life. She knew the price for his safety, but was it worth paying? If she lost and things turned out for the worse, then her peerage members would end up as Riser's slaves. Kaneko and Akino would have it worst. But what about Kiba? She didn't even want to think of what he'd do to Kiba. She felt conflicted. Sighing, Rias raised her hand. Fine, I resign, she announced as tears began falling from her eyes. A blue light covered both Rias and Kiba as the final announcement was made. Rias Gremory resigns. Riser Phoenix is the winner. In the underworld, all the nobles and influential devils gathered in the Phoenix territory. All of them came, bearing gifts of goodwill. Gifts for the union that was about to take place. Many maids were busy dressing the bride and tending to her hair as she remained a captive to her thoughts. I hope you make it in time, Issei, Rias thought hopefully. She knew that if nothing was done, she'd end up as Riser's wife and her servants as his playthings. The thought of that happening enraged her. But there was nothing she could do now. She had to rely on her insurance. On Issei. She rubbed a spot near her shoulder. A mark that was hidden beneath her wedding gown. She couldn't wait to get this over with. A column of fire emerged at the center of the room. Rias sneered when she saw it. What do you want, Riser? She questioned in an angered tone. From the fire, Riser emerged. Dressed in a white tuxedo. He scoffed at Rias' tone of voice. Rias dear, you will do well to know that you are addressing your husband. Show him some respect. He walked over to her and stood beside her. Nevertheless, Riser has come to take his bride. The processions have already begun. All they are waiting for is Riser and his beautiful bride. He spoke with a smirk. Rias averted her gaze from him. She couldn't believe things had come to this. Feeling a sudden tug, she was pulled into Riser's arms. Gazing into her eyes, he smirked. By the end of today, you'll be Riser's wife. Oh, how he has waited for this day. And now, finally, it has come to pass. He released her and started walking back to the center of the room. 10 minutes is all you have. In 10 minutes Riser will come to receive his bride. He stopped and turned to look at her with a lecherous expression, and she better be prepared. With a sudden flare of fire, he vanished from the room, leaving behind a group of anxious maids and a fuming red head. Hi! Rias yelled in frustration. Back in the hall, the Gremory peerage had gathered. Each was dressed in their best outfits for this occasion. Kiba in a tux. Akino in a purple kimono with Kaneko wearing a white kimono. They stood among the guests, chatting and discussing over various topics. But every once in a while, they gazed into each other's eyes and saw the worry they each held for their leader. And for themselves. What are we going to do? Kaneko asked her fellow peerage members as they approached the table bearing drinks. I don't know if we can do anything regarding this matter, Kiba replied sincerely. Leave it be. We can't do anything. We had our chance and we blew it. This is the consequence. We must accept it. Akino spoke with a solemn expression. They sighed in unison and proceeded to get themselves some drinks. A bell rang, signaling the start of the procession. Everyone gathered around the entrance as Riser came walking in with Rias at his side. Cheers filled the room as everyone began to clap their hands and praise the couple. They walked up to the altar, where a man dressed in blue and gold armor with royal clothing visible beneath. His red hair fell to his mid-back and his greenish-blue eyes carried an almost hypnotic gleam to them. This was Surzex Lucifer, the current king of hell, and also, Rias' older brother. As the two came and stood before their king, he began to speak. You have finally arrived. Good. Everyone. I'd like to take this moment to welcome you all here and thank you for having accepted the invitation. He began, but one could clearly see the amusement in his eyes. We were invited to the wedding of the Devil King's sister. Who in their right mind would not come if invited? They all thought. And indeed, if the King of Devils asked you to be at a specific place at a specific time, you'd be seeking your death to not show up. We are gathered here today, to bear witness to the union of both Phoenix and Gremory. I ask, if there is anyone among you who wishes for this union not to take place, speak now or forever hold your peace, he declared. But in all honesty, it was just a ruse, a joke. And it's for this very reason that a few of the guests started laughing. No one would dare to open their mouths and object. Doing so would go against the will of the Devil King, the Council of Devil Elders as well as the Devil clans that agreed to the marriage. You'd have to be suicidal to object. I object. As if someone just committed blasphemy, the entire room was overcome with a death-like silence. Everyone's mouths were slightly open from shock. They started looking around to locate the source of that powerful, and yet, majestic, voice. When no one found anything, the Devil King looked to the center of the room with an amused smile. He has arrived. The next instant, a pillar of fire emerged from the center of the room. Every devil close to it hastily jumped out of its range as the flames threatened to consume anything close to it and devour it whole. When the fire dissipated, 3 figures stood in the center of the room. The first, standing in the center, was a young man seemingly the same age as Rias. He was dressed in a black tuxedo with a red shirt beneath, red cufflinks and a pair of red leather shoes. A golden watch adorned his right wrist. To his left stood a young lady. She had long flowing green hair, gray eyes, and was dressed in a black maid's uniform. To his right stood a teen. A boy, a head shorter than him, with long blue hair, yellow eyes and dressed in black like his companions. They were Issei, Hyoudou, and RIMURU. Issei looked at Rias and saw the smile that appeared on her face, along with the glimmer of hope that resonated in her eyes. "Am I late?" he asked teasingly. The guests started muttering amongst themselves as to who this intruder was. Guards started flooding the room, but after RIMURU received a glance from Issei, they were all wiped out by the young slime. His storm magic leaving the entire hall speechless. Turning to the king of the devil race, Issei smirked. "Pleasure to finally meet you, Sirzex Lucifer. I assume you already know who I am," Issei stated. Sirzex smirked in turn. "Indeed I do. Issei Hyoudou, you who saved the sisters of the devil kings Lucifer and Leviathan and proceeded to save their territory as well. You secured the lives of thousands. A hero, one might say." "The hero?" Everyone stood flabbergasted at Sirzek's comment. "He saved the princesses. Just who is this Issei Hyoudou? Is he here to stop the wedding? He must be someone powerful if even the king acknowledged him. I honestly doubt it. Just look, he's a human. He has no place here." The guests were riled up at the sudden appearance of this mysterious individual. On top of it all, he appeared to be human. "I guess I should feel honored, if the king of hell knows who I am. But let us not chase around the bush. You know why I am here, do you not?" Issei stated and turned his gaze toward the groom of this wedding. Sirzex narrowed his eyes. "You mean Riser. Pray tell, what is your business with the groom?" he asked suspiciously. Every one of the guests and the clan members present turned their gaze toward Riser, who in turn stared at the woman who stood next to Issei, in shock. "Well, if you must know, this rascal here thought it a good idea to abduct my servant and attempt to make her his concubine." The sheer audacity, Issei roared in anger. Now everyone stared at Hyoudou with shock. Not because Riser did something atrocious, but because he actually deemed the girl worth making his concubine. That had to mean she had great potential. Riser had heard that she disappeared after he had confined her to his room. But who is he? And wasn't she supposed to be just another Gremory servant? Riser wondered perplexed. But after turning his gaze to Issei, he snared. He didn't care who he was. This man was disrupting his wedding and for that, he'd pay. "Who dares to interrupt Riser's wedding?" he shouted. Issei looked to him and shook his head. He turned to Rias. "You're supposed to marry this buffoon? Honestly, your people need higher standards," he stated with a straight face. "What did you say?" Riser shouted in rebuke. Not only had this man ignored him but also insulted him to his face. Sirzex nodded at Issei. "While your claims hold ground for you to challenge Riser, it still doesn't explain why you object to the marriage. Care to explain yourself?" Despite what it may appear like to the guests, the clan heads understood something from the Devil King's remark. He knew this was gonna happen. And he was allowing it. Does he disagree with the marriage? Or is he looking for entertainment? Never in history has a devil that has objected to a clan marriage lived longer than a breath. What makes this human so special? Were the thoughts of the Phoenix clan head. Issei looked to Sirzex as though he was telling a bad joke. "Surely you jest. Did I not just tell you what he has done? That is more than enough grounds for me to nullify this wedding," Issei proclaimed. Riser sneered and was about to make a remark when a woman with similar appearance, albeit older and much more beautiful, spoke first. "Young man, with my understanding, you received your servant back unharmed and untouched. So I fail to see your reason for disrupting this wedding." The matriarch of the Phoenix clan spoke politely. Make no mistake, she was only respectful because the king of devils tolerated his presence. If the king was even slightly displeased, everyone would have destroyed this intruder that dared to interrupt the union of Phoenix and Gremory. Even though she was displeased herself, she would not dare overstep her boundary. Especially not after finding out that this man is viewed as a hero for rescuing the princess her son was about to marry. This in turn forced her to show a little gratitude, if only a minuscule amount. Issei looked at the woman and smiled, then chuckled, followed with a laughing fit. Before the angered matriarch could question what was so funny, Issei spoke. "Sorry, it would appear there was a misunderstanding just now. You seem to have thought I was referring to Hyoudou here." Issei gestured to the young lady beside him while shaking his head. The matriarch rose a brow at this remark before taking a glance at her son. Did he abduct another servant? She wondered perplexed. "Oh? And who is this servant you are referring to? Surzex asked. Albeit, this time, he felt an ominous premonition. I have a bad feeling, the king thought. Issei rose his finger and pointed at a very special individual. Everyone's eyes widened in disbelief as Issei spoke. I was referring to my servant, Rias Gremory. Flashback, night before the raiding game. Issei was on his way back to the mountains. He and Rias had just finished discussing the strategy for the upcoming match, and he wanted to see how much he himself had grown since he started with the Red Dragon cultivation technique. Name, Issei Hyoudou. Titles, Ascended Red Dragon Emperor, Cardinal Shield Hero, Demon Slayer, Party Master. Level, 40, capped. Class, Low Class Ascended Human, 80%, /Dragon, 20%. Stats. HP, 125000/125000. MP, 412-500/618-750/100,000. SC, 55%. Chi, 500, suppressed. Ki, 125000/125000. Aura, 75000/75000. STR, 500, max. STA, 500, max. Dex, 500, max. Int, 150. Wis, 150. Cha, 500, max. Luke, 140. Issei smirked as he glanced at his status window. Ever since he started cultivating Draig's aura, all his stats and attributes skyrocketed. I'm only at level 3 of the cultivation technique, but already my overall power has grown so much? What will it be like when I reach level 9? He though fascinated. Sadly, before he could exit the building, he heard the sound of sobbing. Someone was crying. It was loud. In fact, it was so low on volume that a whisper would defeat it in a battle of volume. The only reason Issei heard it, while being so far away, was as a result of his dragonic senses being further enhanced by mana. An absolutely vicious clarity filled his mind thanks to his heightened sense of hearing. With it he could discern who it was that was crying. He sighed in annoyance. What now? He thought and vanished from sight. Rias was laying on her bed, crying into her pillow, when she felt someone sitting next to her and patting her on her back. She was so startled by the sudden presence that she nearly fell off the bed when she turned to see who it was. Bam! Sorry, she did fall off the bed. He looked down at the girl, who as usual, was naked. Probably her habit of sleeping naked that kicked in. Issei, she questioned as she rubbed her head, completely non-caring of the fact that he could see her everything. What are you doing here? She asked. I could hear you sobbing from the front door. What's the matter? He questioned while offering her a hand to get up. Her eyes widened before her gaze saddened and she turned away. She hugged her legs and proceeded to stay in her sitting position. It's not worth mentioning, she replied. Issei got off the bed and looked at the girl who looked so caught up in her own misery that she refused to acknowledge that he was willing to help her. So, deciding to do something very Issei-like, he took her hand and pulled her up on her feet. Issei, what are you HHMMM? She panicked when Issei suddenly lifted her up, but before she could inquire the purpose of his actions, she found her lips covered by his. His arms wrapped around her and squeezed her body tightly against his. Feeling the passion in his kiss and the warmth in his embrace, Rias forgot all about her troubles and proceeded to wrap her arms around his neck. The power that radiated from Issei bombarded her body with sensations of pleasure and delight. Sadly, just as she was beginning to enjoy the experience, a finger snap woke her up and she found herself still sitting on the floor with Issei looking down at her amused. It was all an illusion. She looked to Issei for an explanation as she felt her cheeks red up due to embarrassment. He chuckled, "Don't worry. Whatever you saw was just an illusion spell Kuroheim taught me. It soothes the mind by creating an environment the user feels would comfort them deeply." This only made matters worse for Rias, because in her mind she took it that the illusion showed her what she truly wanted, what she needed to comfort her, and that was Issei. Sadly, she didn't know that Issei actually lied. It was a fantasy spell that makes them envision them and the caster together. A spell I created after learning the comfort spell from Kuroheim. I call it the wet dream, he thought amused. But his plan seemed to have worked. Rias wasn't thinking anymore of the matter that bothered her. Thus, when Issei offered her a hand again, she was willing to take it, deciding to put on a gown. Thank heaven. She came and sat next to Issei. Mind telling me now? He inquired. She hesitated for a moment but finally decided to open her mouth. I spoke with my father and mother, shortly after we strategized. I asked them if they would let me be if I was to defeat Riser in tomorrow's raiding game. She confessed. Issei could already guess what happened but asked her anyway. What did they say? Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she recalled their words. Do you honestly think that Riser was your only suitor? There are more than 500, and some are of greater strength than Riser. The only reason he even qualified to be your suitor is because I promised his father, Zeoticus stated. Honey, basically what your father is trying to say is that even if you defeat Riser, other suitors will already be waiting for you. And should you be displeased with them also, then you'll have to fight them as well, Miss Venelana added. After hearing Ria's explanation, Issei understood why the girl was crying. Even if she won tomorrow's rating game, she'll have to continue fighting again and again until eventually, she loses. It was pointless, really. But even in this crisis, Issei saw opportunity. Rias, tell me, do you wish to be free? He asked sincerely. She looked him in the eyes. Her red, teary eyes, meeting his, confident emerald eyes that exuded strength and power. She nodded. Then what price are you willing to pay for it? He inquired. Hearing him speak made Rias realize he has a plan. What do you mean? She inquired. Issei sighed. I may have a way for you to be free, and remain free, from them. You'll be able to choose your own suitor. You'll be able to live your life free from devil law, and there won't be anything hell can do to you. But of course, it comes at a cost, Issei explained. Ria's eyes widened. Just when she was about to fall into the depths of despair, Issei came and gave her hope. What's the price? She asked with hope ever present in her eyes. Issei's eyes softened as he gazed into her pleading eyes. At this very moment, she appeared so frail, so fragile. And for a split second, Issei could have sworn she appeared innocent. But he did not relent. He did not pity her. Nor did he feel sad at her predicament. The heavens saw that all things remained in balance. The treatment you gave is the treatment you received. And this, in Issei's eyes, was but merely the punishment she received for her actions. So with indifference he replied, servitude. Silence engulfed the entire hall, with every single individual gawking at the sudden revelation. Surzek stood wide-eyed as he stared at his red-headed sister in denial. His eyes carried his hopes and his fears that maybe it wasn't true. But when he gazed into her eyes and she turned away her gaze, he knew. He had lost his sister. Feeling as though reality was giving him an almighty bitch slap, Surzek felt the strength in his legs vanish and fell into the throne behind him. Though to others, it may have looked like he sat down, only he and those closest to him would know the anguish he felt at this moment. He, and the clan heads who appeared just as shocked as he was, turned their gaze to the fuming Riser as he shouted, "You speak lies. Riser's wife would never submit herself to a lowly human. She is far too prideful to do such a thing." Riser refuted. Issei smiled in response. "Oh Rias dear, why don't you show them?" Issei gave Rias a wink. She glared at Issei for putting her in such a position, but nevertheless complied. She removed the strap of the gown, stretching over her shoulder, and revealed a crimson slave crest. The shock on everyone's faces was as present as light in daytime. They never expected this twist of events. Turning his gaze to Issei, Surzek voiced his current thoughts. "In light of this, tell me, Issei Hyoudou, what do you intend to do?" the king asked. According to devil law, the abduction of a master's servant is punishable in whatever way the servant's master deems fit. And in addition to that, it also states that should a devil wish to wed another master's servant, he or she must first obtain permission from the master. I have come to get justice for my servants and punish this imbecile for trying to wed my servants against their will, Issei boldly proclaimed. "Oh? And what would your so-called punishment be?" Surzek questioned. He knew he couldn't do anything to stop this. Not only was it against their own laws as devils, but also because of who Issei was. He could not afford to lose this chance at obtaining yet another cardinal hero. Not to mention, Rias had sold her servitude in exchange for immunity. But that immunity only existed so long as Issei remained standing. And while Surzek could not do anything previously to prevent the marriage, if this was her choice then he'd at least try to make sure her immunity ticket didn't burn to ashes. If she wanted out on the other hand, he could always arrange for it to be done. This was no big issue. How do you think? He tried to take my servants as his wives. So I'll be taking his status as compensation. As punishment I want Riser Phoenix to be stripped of all his status in hell, Issei proclaimed. The people still standing, the elders, clan heads, and some of the guards, stood shocked at this. It should be mentioned that this kind of punishment was unheard of. Who'd strip you of your status for abducting a servant? Get real. Surzek shook his head. While you may punish him in any way you wish, it should be of equal weight to the crime he has committed. Thus I cannot allow that punishment. Surzek refuted and allowed Riser to release a sigh of relief. Issei snickered. Fine. So be it. Then I will take one of his servants and ask that he be banned from Earth. Is that agreeable? He asked as he gazed at the Devil King. Issei wasn't stupid. He had a hunch that this would happen. But stripping Riser of his status was never the aim. I needed them to accept this punishment as being fair. Taking one of his servants is debatable. But servants can be replaced. And asking that he never return to Earth will seem as though I'm taking measures to prevent him from abducting any other servants. But will they fall for it? He thought eagerly. Surzek nodded. That is reasonable. I'll allow it. He nodded in agreement. Issei could have taken 2 servants and it would have been even, but he took one and asked for a restraining order instead of taking a second. Both are manageable and not too costly. Even the Phoenix family sighed in relief at this light punishment. In fact, it could hardly be considered punishing Riser. Even though he screwed up big time, he'd be getting off easy. Or so they thought. Surzek looked to Riser's peerage. In that case, Hyoudou, choose your servant and be on your way. There are many more things we all need to attend to. As the servants stepped forward, they became nervous thinking which among them would be chosen. Eubeluna feared she'd be the one having to leave as she was the strongest and most beautiful among the group of ladies. She calmed her heart by means of a sigh. It is inevitable. I'll be the one leaving, she thought to herself. Even Riser thought he'd be losing his queen and that thought enraged him. She was his strongest, his most beautiful, his first. And now he'd lose her to this punk. The thought made him clench his fists till his knuckles turned white. There was nothing he could do to stop it and it frustrated him. As the entire hall fell silent awaiting Issei's choice to the voiced, the boy in question smirked. He pointed at someone they didn't expect. Someone that didn't stand with the group of young ladies. Someone that instantly made them regret accepting this punishment. Riser's heart sank into the depths of his gut while the matriarch looked wide-eyed at Issei's choice. Even the patriarch wanted to shout in outrage. With a cunning smile, Issei pointed at a beautiful young lady about a head shorter than him. She was a beauty even among the clan heiress with her stunning blonde hair and blue eyes. In fact, she was an heiress herself. The hall fell into a death-like silence when they realized who it was. I choose you, Revel Phoenix. Anger, rage, fury and loathing. Every hateful emotion one could possibly comprehend was rampaging within Riser Phoenix. He thought he'd get off lightly, but now his own sister would have to pay the price for his actions. The worst thing about it was that the King of Devils had already agreed to this request, meaning there was nothing he could do about it. Riser was about to object, when another blonde spoke up. Apparently, Riser wasn't the only one who was opposed to this decision. I object. The refuting cry came. Everyone turned their gaze toward the one who spoke, and they were surprised to see who it was. It's him, the spear hero, one of the onlookers exclaimed. And true to his word, it was Motoyasu Kitamura Phoenix that raised his voice. He glared at Issei hatefully before fixing his gaze upon the King of Devils. I have kept quiet throughout this entire event, but no more. My king, Revel is my betrothed, my fiancé. Do you really intend to allow this? After I swore my service to hell and worked so diligently to protect it, do you wish to have the only thing I have ever requested, taken from me by this atrocious man? He pointed at Issei with loathing ever present on his face. Surzek looked to Motoyasu and shook his head. Spear hero, while I can understand your plight, understand that according to devil law, Revel is Riser's servant, even if she is of the same house and status. Being a part of his peerage marks her as his servant. And under that same law, Issei is entitled to request her as compensation for the crime Riser committed. Surzek replied. So I'm just supposed to sit back as he takes my bride? Forgive me my king, but I cannot abide by this. Surely there must be a way to stop this. If there is, please convey it to me. Your subject humbly requests of his king for his assistance. Motoyasu bowed as a testament to his sincerity. Surzek looked at Motoyasu and smiled lightly. Though it was a roundabout method, he had finally obtained a good source of entertainment. So why not keep the show on a little while longer? He thought amused. Indeed, there is a way. According to the law pertaining to marriages, if a master or a devil of high status wishes to wed another devil servant, then they must either receive the master's permission or challenge the master for the right to free the servant and wed them afterward. Surzek declared. Issei took a glance at the Devil King and could tell at first glance, he planned for this, didn't he? Unknowingly, Issei frowned. The mere thought that he was nothing more than entertainment to this man made his pride shake. A sudden urge to fight the red-haired devil filled Issei, but that was soon suppressed by the calm mind, skill. A subtle sigh escaped his lips as he realized he was on the edge of charging at the King of Devils. I didn't think it would have this strong an effect. My transitioning into a perfect dragon vessel is causing all my dragonic traits to heighten. My emotions are also becoming more intense. Luckily I have the shield to protect my mind from influence, otherwise I might get overwhelmed by it all, Issei thought as he realized the true danger of his cultivation technique. Now just imagine what it is like to be a real dragon. Your emotions are so intense that small matters that would usually irritate you causes you to go on a rampage. It's one of the reasons I am glad to be in a spiritual form. Free from the influence of my dragon body, I can finally think and act freely, Draig commented. While Issei was having his internal discussion with Draig, both Riser and Motoyasu took a glance at both their betrothed. Their desire for their betrothed was only matched with their hatred for the man that stood in their way. As they turned to Issei, both Riser and Motoyasu smirked. He is nothing more than a man. Defeating him will be no more than child's play, Riser declared. Indeed, but the question now is which of us will challenge him first? Surely, the law will allow him to face us at different times and settings, thus only one of us will be able to challenge him now. Motoyasu voiced his concerns. Riser snickered. Why do you speak as though you know not the answer? Of course Riser will be the first to challenge him. Riser narrowed his eyes at Motoyasu. Clearly he wasn't going to debate the matter. This was his wedding after all. It would be humiliating for him to have to postpone the wedding and apologize to all the guests. His pride would never allow it. But Motoyasu was concerned for another matter. While I understand your position, I implore you to remember, Ravel will still have to go with him even if you win. She'll have to stay with him until I challenge him. She is your sister. While I can understand you not wanting to lose face in front of the underworld, Rias is but merely your betrothed. Being separated from her for a while longer will not change a thing. But Ravel, she is already paying for your crimes. Do you really intend to choose Rias over your own after you placed her in this predicament? Motoyasu questioned his future brother-in-law. The entire weight of this decision was placed on Riser's shoulders. Choosing his betrothed would mean he'll be perceived as the one who had forsaken his own blood. Choosing his sister would mean he'd have to cancel his wedding and humble himself to apologize to the guests. He'd be known as the one who had his wife stolen at his own wedding and become the laughing stock of the underworld. Riser clenched his teeth. No matter which way he decided to go, he'd still lose face. But seeing them bickering over who'd get to fight him, Issei decided to put an end to the fiasco entirely. Enough already, Issei commanded, and immediately drew the attention of his two challengers. Staring them down with annoyance ever present in his eyes, Issei spoke. If you are that worried about who'd get to fight me, then I'll do you both a favor and take you both on, he declared. This proclamation evoked gasped reactions from the crowds. Whispers and chatter filled the hall as the quests voiced their thoughts regarding Issei's bold proclamation. This man, this single man, is going to take on both the heir to the House of Phoenix and the infamous spear hero, the first guest exclaimed in disbelief. He must be either crazy strong or crazy stupid to challenge both of them, one of the guests remarked. If you ask me, I think he is underestimating the Phoenix heir and the spear hero, a council member added. Is he serious? Does he have a secret that'll allow him to take them both on? I think that may be the case, and so the guests continued questioning Issei's choice and pondering over whether or not he had a secret that gave him such confidence before his two adversaries. But the two challengers weren't as awestruck as the audience. In fact, they were fuming with rage. Clearly he is mocking us, Riser declared in outrage. Whether he is or not, he'll pay for the insult. Only one of us is needed to finish him off. But both? We'll destroy him completely, Motoyasu added as he clenched his spear harder. Issei chuckled at their reply before turning to the King of Devils with amusement ever present on his face. Well then, what are we waiting for? His smirk was met with a smile. The underworld gazed on as three warriors took up their places in a synthetic world. A realm crafted for combat, expanding over a distance of 10 kilometers with an ancient arena at its center. The combat arena in this separate space was where Issei, Riser, and Motoyasu found themselves. Riser was clad in his phoenix armor consisting of golden shoulder guards, a golden chest plate bearing the face of a phoenix, forearm guards as well as leg guards. The white leather suit beneath his armor was thin and yet durable, and only added to his regal appearance. Next to him stood Motoyasu, clad in his own armor consisting out of his white suit with red highlights, armor guards for his shoulder, arms, legs and feet. He grasped his spear in his right hand, gripping it tightly as he readied himself for combat. Opposite of the two blondes, Issei stood in the same suit he wore when he came to the wedding. His hands rested behind his back as his green eyes stared at his two adversaries with amusement. Seeing their adversary not even donning any armor or weapon, made Riser and Motoyasu sneer. Tell me, you who comes to our residence and dares to steal our betrothed. Who are you? Who are you to come here and disrupt the peace of the Phoenix household? Who are you to come and attempt to dishonor the Phoenix name? Who are you, that even the Devil King spoke of highly? Who are you, that His Majesty would allow a man to make demands in the underworld? Tell me, who are you? Motoyasu questioned Issei. This was a question that laid on the hearts of not only the two Phoenix clan members, but also the audience watching on from above. No one knew who Issei truly was, and that has caused them to be cautious. He saved the princesses of both the Gremory and Citri clans. He saved their territory from demise. He is acknowledged by the King of Devils, and he has the confidence to walk into a gathering of highly powerful devils and dares to make demands. Either he is extremely powerful, or utterly suicidal. But as they pondered on this, Issei replied, Motoyasu, you have been a devil so long that you can't even recognize one of your own? Why don't you take a look with your observation, and tell them who I am? He told his adversary. Motoyasu rose a brow at his statement, one of my own. He thought as he narrowed his eyes, activating his observation skill and glancing at the status bars that floated above Issei's head. Almost instantly, his eyes widened. But no more than a second later, he burst out laughing. "So that's why you possess such confidence. You are the shield hero?" he exclaimed and caused another wave of shock to spread throughout the hall. "The shield hero? Are you kidding? No wonder he was so arrogant. Poor fool, does he even know that the shield is the weakest among the 4 heroes? Ha 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 ha, you're telling me that we were cautious of that weakling? I wouldn't underestimate a cardinal hero, but the shield is known for being the weakest. On top of that, it isn't known to grant its holder any offensive skills, only defensive ones. So he really shouldn't have been so arrogant," one of the elders threw in her opinion. The audience continued to criticize the shield and Issei for being its bearer. None spoke in favor of the shield. Rather, they started praising their luck and the Devil King's wisdom for obtaining the spear hero, who has always been known to be the most powerful among the 4 heroes. "Is Master going to be alright?" Rimuru asked Ito as they too watched on from the audience. Rimuru was new to Issei's team and hadn't yet witnessed his master's strength, which is why seeing Issei up against 2 individuals as powerful as Riser and Motoyasu made him a bit worried. Knowing this, Ito replied, "You haven't yet witnessed his strength. That's why you are questioning his abilities. But do not forget, you are a slime, weakest among all the supernatural races. And yet, he made you so powerful that you can even defeat demons, who stand entire realms above the slimes. In all of creation there is only one of you, no other, and it is due to him, your master. If he can make the weakest being so powerful, just think of how powerful he himself must be," she concluded with a smile and ruffled Rimuru's hair before turning back to look at the arena. "Just wait and watch. Master will be fine," she added. Rimuru's looked at the confident smile plastered on Ito's face before he too turned his gaze to the arena. And even then, his gaze fell upon the confident smile of his master. He didn't notice it at first, but once he regained his self-awareness, he realized he too was smiling, and the worry that momentarily clouded his heart had vanished, now replaced with deep-seated calm and eagerness to witness the strength of his master. On the other side of the hall, the Gremory Peerage members were making their way up to their president as she too watched the arena with great anticipation. Ria stood with her arms folded beneath her bosom, gazing up at the screen visible to all. She was deeply concerned as to whether or not Issei could come out victorious. The plan was for him to take me away from here as his servant. Why did brother intervene? And why did he accept? On top of it all, instead of challenging one of the 2, he decided to take on both. Does he realize both my and my peerage's fates reside within his hands? She thought, disturbed at Issei's course of action. She had agreed to being his servant, because she'd have the backing of both him and his entire group. Ruling over Kuo would be a simple matter if all the forces within it gathered to support her. Thus she didn't see this as a loss. And if she finds someone she'd want to marry, all she'd had to do is ask Issei to free her from his mark. Of course she didn't think he'd let an asset like her go that easily, but she'd be willing to offer him whatever he'd want in exchange for it. That is how she had envisioned the future. But now this happened and immediately she was uncertain of her security. "President, was it wise to submit yourself to him? Even if it gives us a second chance at getting you out of this marriage, don't you think it might have been a bit too extreme?" Kiba inquired as they reached her. Rias turned her gaze to her peerage members and sighed. "It was the only way I could see for us to be free. I couldn't exactly stand by and watch as my servants got turned into a playboy devil's playthings, now could I? It was a gamble, but it paid off. And now, should Issei win, it'll guarantee our freedom," she replied before turning her gaze back to the screen. "Life doesn't always leave us with the desired outcome for all our problems, but it does provide a solution, even if we don't necessarily like it," she added. The 3 peerage members glanced at one another with a solemn expression before turning to the screen. Looking at the man that carried their fate upon his shoulders, each member couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards him, especially a certain white-haired Nakomata. "I don't think I'd mind being Issei's servant," Kaneko thought as an image of her in a maid's outfit appeared in her mind and instantly caused her to blush. Her head fell in embarrassment soon after, hiding her blush behind her hair. She thought it went unnoticed, but one person did take note of her sudden behavior, and smiled. "It would seem someone is aroused by the idea of being a servant. Guess I'm not the only one, ha 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 ha," Akino thought to herself as she laughed behind her hand in a mischievous manner. Back in the arena, Issei heard the various mocks and taunts of the audience through his connection to Ito and Rimuru, but none of it bothered him. In fact, it was a pleasant surprise. The negative perk, a look down upon, has been activated. -10 reputation points with all who support the spear hero. -1000000 reputation points in total. Host receives the temporary status, underestimated. Issei smirked. "This is my first time using this perk. Let's see if it is worth it," he thought and summoned his shield on his right hand. "Don't forget, partner, you are still limited to the power of the sacred gears. Don't utilize your innate power, otherwise the seal will break," Drake reminded his partner. Issei smiled. "Yeah, I know. But but using only the shield to defeat both of them is gonna be tough. I want to hide my identity as the Red Dragon Emperor for a little while longer, so I can't use the boosted gear in this match, Issei replied. Certainly it was going to be a tough fight. Both his adversaries were coming at him with their full power, which wasn't a joke, mind you. Riser Phoenix LV89. Motoyasu Kitamura Phoenix LV75. Issei was already up for a tough fight, but now, being restrained by the seal and having to hide his power as the Red Dragon Emperor, will Issei be able to defeat his two adversaries with only the power of his shield? As the three warriors gazed at one another, ready to engage in combat, a voice sounded from the heavens. Hear me, warriors in the arena. I am the referee for this match, Graphia Lucifuge. Upon my say-so, this match will both start and end. If I say the match is over, it is over. Any fighting beyond that will be strictly punished. Do you understand? The powerful feminine voice rained down from the heavens. Understood, understood, understood. All three combatants confirmed their understanding of the battle rules. Good. Now, without further ado, let the match begin. She commanded, and instantly, the two Phoenix clan members shot towards Issei. Motoyasu summoned a three-bladed spear with two curvy blades on both sides. It was black with a red jewel at its center and radiated a massive amount of power. Come forth, meteorite spear. He called forth its name, and immediately it shrouded him in a red cloak of fire. Meanwhile, Riser charged his Hellfire, shrouding himself in a cloak of fire as both his strength and speed rose significantly. Hellfire, flame armor. With both having activated their techniques, Issei decided to do the same. Drake, how much of my power do I have access to? He quickly inquired. Knowing he was dealing with opponents higher leveled than himself, meant he had to know to what extent he was able to push himself. And Drake was swift to give him an answer. All the cultivated power you currently possess are safe to use. The seal will only be affected if you try to draw from your innate power, Drake replied. Issei smirked at his partner's words. That's all I needed to hear. He raised his shield in response to his approaching adversaries and charged the power within the mighty weapon. You're dead, Riser cried out and shot forth a fist of fire. You lose, Motoyasu added, striking with his spear. As both attacks descended on Issei, the man in question raised his shield and cried out, "Come!" As the two attacks met their target, a flash of green light obscured the view of all onlookers. Upon fading, everyone stared surprised at the figures of Motoyasu and Riser, previously clad in cloaks of fire, now standing without a trace of that power to be found. In contrast with them, Issei was shimmering in a red and gold light. He smirked at his adversaries' confused expressions, delighting himself at their sudden disadvantage. Light eraser shield, light consumption. Upon speaking these words, did the last shimmer of fire magic wielded by his adversaries get sucked into the emerald jewel of the now golden shield. Holy art, enhance, release. The golden shield started shimmering as the holy enhancement took effect. Holy power. Bastard, don't tell me he's gonna? Seeing the shield's shine brighten, both Riser and Motoyasu realized what was about to occur and cursed internally. They attempted to escape from there, but Issei had already released the power absorbed by the shield. A golden wave of energy shot from the shield and consumed the two adversaries in its torrent. Despite both jumping out of the way, attempting to escape the reach of the wave, they found themselves unable to escape its grasp entirely and suffered terribly under the influence of the holy power. Burning flesh and searing wounds. Scorched clothing hissed as smoke rose from the fabrics. Riser was screaming in pain, having had most of his left side burned and paralyzed by the attack. Motoyasu was in a similar state, but having had his spear to dull the full force of the attack left him in a fairly better condition than Riser. He in turn clenched his teeth as he glared up at his opponent. The burning pain of holy exposure only added to his anger and humiliation. Almost taken out by our own attack. How humiliating, Motoyasu thought as he struggled to catch his breath from the damage he had taken. To the onlookers, it was clearly evident that both the Phoenix clan members had taken severe damage in that last attack. But would it be enough to take them out? As both Riser and Motoyasu stood to face their opponent, Issei couldn't help but smirk. Motoyasu on the other hand scoffed, "Don't go acting tough because you managed to land a blow. What's even more pathetic is you taking pride in an attack not of your own power," he shouted in outrage. Despite Motoyasu's cry of outrage, Issei didn't say a word, although the slight upward twitch of his smirk made his amusement clearly evident. Nevertheless, he was even more amused by Motoyasu's following words. "You are just a level 40. Don't dare assume you are a match for a level 75 and a level 89. Issei chuckled at this. "Well then, let me show you what a level 40 can do." His shimmering eyes carried his deviance while his toothy grin rebuked Motoyasu's sneer. Seeing this, Motoyasu raised his spear once more, proceeding to channel his innate power. The spear transformed once more, this time taking on the appearance of a silver, single-bladed spear. Thunder appeared to crackle along the edge of the blade as an aura of shimmering gold shrouded the spear. Riser, who was still struggling to overcome the pain brought about by the holy power, became engulfed in fire. Fire condensed in his hand to form a sword. As he narrowed his gaze at Issei, he took a stance with his sword of fire pointing at his adversary. Riser will not allow such an insignificant peasant to bring ruin to his day of glory, he declared and charged at Issei. A flash of gold and yellow crossed the battlefield and rained down on Issei. Demon Shield, Rat. Skill, Accelerate. Activated. Issei's shield transformed into the familiar shield-bearing Fey appearance off a rat's head. The rat held the jewel of the shield in its mouth while its eyes carried the same emerald green light as the jewel. Upon activation, Issei felt his heart rate spike. His thought processing accelerated along with his sense of awareness, making the world appear in slow motion. His adversaries, no more than a few feet from him, appeared to slow down significantly. Sword and spear descended on Issei, threatening to tear him apart. Yet as the two objects were about to meet their target, Issei, in the blink of an eye, dodged both sword and spear strikes simultaneously. Both Motoyasu and Riser's eyes widened. How did he? Impossible. Issei smirked at their shock, knowing the answer to their unasked question. Dodge LV-40, capped. Yet, the two did not relent. Back to back they attacked Issei with their weapons, to no avail. The audience looked on in utter shock as both Riser and Motoyasu continued to attack, yet failed to land a single blow on their adversary. Sadly, their shock wasn't perceived in awe of Issei. Rather, how shameful. Is he going to run throughout the entire battle? What did you expect? He is the shield hero after all. Running is all he can do. Indeed, that first attack was nothing more than a fluke, making use of his enemy's attacks since his own are too weak. He got lucky. They criticized and ridiculed Issei, not sparing a moment to insult the cardinal hero they believed to be the weakest. Don't fool yourselves. An elegant voice silenced the crowd before they could continue their ridicule. Turning to the source of the voice, everyone became shocked. It was Lady Ravel herself, and she appeared to be annoyed. Turning to the group of people, she shook her head. They are two of the Phoenix clan's strongest, yet they can't even land a single blow on a human? That, in and of itself, is disgraceful. And to think one of them is my supposed husband. How disappointing, she concluded. Everyone seemed surprised at her comment, yet no one dared to speak against her. Everyone could tell she was frustrated at the current course of events, considering she was the one who'd have to pay should her brother and fiancé lose this battle. But not everyone was worrying about Ravel. The Gremory peerage, especially, was hoping Issei would win this fight regardless of the consequences since their fates also hung in the balance. As they watched on with great anticipation, they found themselves rooting for Issei within their hearts. At the far end of the hall, Ito and Rimuru stood, watching their master in battle. Each of the two could feel their master's excitement through their link with him, and it in turn made them excited for this battle. It won't be long now. Indeed, Master is only getting started. The two spoke amongst themselves as they viewed the screen portraying the fight. Back in the arena, Riser had taken to the skies, resorting to long-distance combat as he rained down dozens of fire attacks at his adversary. Meanwhile, Motoyasu kept Issei engaged with a barrage of spear strikes, none of which dealt a blow since Issei parried the attacks rapidly. Parry LV-40, capped. Thus, despite his frustration, Motoyasu only wished to prevent Issei from taking action against the fast-approaching fire, and thus saw this as an opportunity. Even as the barrage of fire was about to scorch them alive, Motoyasu did not retreat. Instead, his spear transformed into a fiery red spear, exuding the golden aura of hellfire. He is willing to sacrifice himself? No, it's not that, Issei thought as he gazed down at the spear his adversary held. With the Hellfire Spear I can't be damaged by fire and will be able to negate the effects of Lord Riser's attacks while still attacking him. Motoyasu thought to himself and smirked. Thinking to end Issei once and for all, trusted his spear forward, releasing a wave of hellfire at point blank. These fools never learn, do they? Issei thought to himself. There was no time for him to cast a spell, nor was there time to summon the light eraser shield. But luckily for him, he didn't have to. As source of thy power I order thee. Decipher the laws of the mystic and protect my target from harm. Barrier LV-40, capped. As source of thy power I order thee. Decipher the laws of the mystic and unite the protectors to form an impenetrable wall. Union Barrier LV-40, capped. The fire attacks struck their mark and destroyed half the arena in the process. We got him. Certainly that attack killed him. Serves him right for interrupting Riser's wedding. Both Riser and Motoyasu looked on in excitement to see their opponent dead, or to hear the voice of the referee announcing their victory. Yet neither happened. As the dust began to settle, within a crater, a cracked dome-like structure became visible to all the onlookers. And in it, Issei stood unfazed. Impossible. There was no time to cast a spell, much less a barrier strong enough to withstand all our attacks. Motoyasu cried in disbelief. Riser sneered as he gazed down at Issei. "What did you do?" he questioned, to which Issei smirked. "Let me give you a bit of advice, Riser?" Issei's voice sounded, but not from within the barrier. As both Motoyasu and Riser turned to the sudden presence behind them, they became shocked to see a copy of Issei stand in the corner of the arena. When facing multiple foes, again, the same voice was heard, but from the opposite corner of the arena. "Always make sure to have the numbers advantage." To their horror, 4 copies of Issei stood in each of the arena's corners. Seeing this, they understood. "Bastard, you had clones cast the barrier since you could not," Riser declared. "Clones LV-40, capped." Issei thought back to how tens of barriers appeared around him before fusing into a single barrier. "If anything, I should thank my foresight. Luckily I had clones reside in my shadow. Having them move to the shadows at the edge of the arena to assist me was probably the best choice I ever made." Looking to his clones, Issei nodded in thanks, to which they smiled before dispelling themselves. The remnant of their leftover mana returned to Issei, and along with it, their last thoughts of motivation to their creator. "Go get him, boss. Spank that spear bastard's ass. Roast that chicken. If you want to thank us, get us some KFC." Issei chuckled at his clones' antics, thinking to himself how great this technique is to grant each of his clones their own unique personality. The barrier could not be maintained any longer and proceeded to collapse. Issei reaffirmed his choice as he watched it break down. "That could have been me," he spoke in amusement, once more feeling a rush of gratitude for his clones. "Partner, maybe it is time to get serious and stop fooling around," Drake's voice sounded in his head. Sighing, Issei looked up at his adversaries before narrowing his eyes. "So be it." Calling upon his light eraser shield, he quickly used the light rejuvenation skill to restore all of his energy before turning back to his adversaries. They could feel something regarding Issei has changed as they gazed into his eyes. Something instinctive within them became apprehensive at Issei's new demeanor. Now, unlike before, they waited for Issei to make the first move. Big mistake. Mana. Issei began to channel all of his cultivated mana throughout his body, making his eyes become emerald green from the mana flow. Mana manipulation LV-40, capped. Key, a surge of power spread through him as his body began to emit energy, causing lightning sparks to manifest all over his body. His muscles bulged at the surge of strength. His hair raised up and became spiky as it defied gravity. His eyes began to emit a greenish blue light. Key manipulation LV-38. And finally, aura. Feeling the power that radiated from his very being, carrying the essence of who he is as a human, a dragon, and a cardinal hero. Issei began retaining this power, drawing it back into himself and preventing it from escaping. It condensed, forming a visible cloak of golden energy around his body. His gravity-defying hair turned golden as the aura condensed around it. The dragonic attributes in his aura caused his skin to turn scaly, his nails elongated and his teeth sharpened. His pupils became sharp like a reptile's while his sense of awareness increased exponentially. Aura manipulation LV-30? Gazing at this new form, Motoyasu and Riser became extremely cautious. Sensing the sheer power condensed in that single form was enough to make even the two phoenixes weary. Issei continued to channel the power within himself, until it reached its peak. The earth around him tremored and split open as it continued to be exposed to such raw power. Feeling this new transformation stabilize, Issei turned to face his adversaries. Gazing up at them once more, he smirked. "Now it's my turn." His mighty voice sounded across the arena and permeated through space and into the hall where everyone looked on baffled at the power showcased by this man. Any confidence the two adversaries had soon left them as they began to feel an ominous premonition. The two phoenixes were just as baffled as the audience, wondering where this sudden power came from. But even in the midst of this uncertainty, they could feel it. A pressure, no, a presence unlike any other. To the audience, he appeared as a man. But to the ones facing him, Issei appeared as an entirely different being. The ghostly visage of a beastly creature appeared behind Issei and was clearly visible to the two adversaries that faced him. At first they stood bewildered, wondering what manner of beast it was, until it opened its eyes and revealed emerald green fire. Finally they understood. They were never facing a man. This creature standing before them, like the embodiment of power, could never be a mere man. Suddenly, they felt the fear. Suddenly they felt the overwhelming pressure brought about by uncertainty. And as they stood before him, they felt like two birds before a dragon. Looking up at his adversaries, Issei began walking towards them. Calmly, steadily. The world seemingly acknowledged his presence as each step he took caused the surrounding pebbles and dust to arise and orbit around him. Elegantly, gracefully, as though in worship. Watching all this from the heavens, Motoyasu and Riser couldn't help but admire the dominance portrayed by this man, showcasing such supremacy that even nature was submissive within his presence. Yet, in retrospect, they would come to regret this minuscule moment of distraction. Suddenly, Issei appeared behind them with his fist cocked back. Their eyes widened as they never saw him move. And yet, even as they felt his presence behind them, they still couldn't react fast enough as Issei shot his fist forward, releasing a force so great that a storm of wind manifested. The earth shook and tore apart as its surface exploded, sending tremors throughout the realm. The air itself vibrated, causing sounds of thunder to spread about. A dust storm followed shortly. And when it finally cleared, the entire audience stood flabbergasted at the sight. The entire arena was gone. Nothing, not even a speck of dust remained as the entire realm was wiped clear of its existence. The place had become a desolate wasteland. At the center of the aforementioned wasteland was a giant crater. Riser and Motoyasu laid wasted at its center, broken, torn, while their bodies, having been obliterated, showcased the absence of a midsection and torso. Still, despite their critical condition, the flames of the Phoenix's regeneration blazed to life, pulling them back from the brink. In mere moments they were fully restored. Yet, even as they stood, they found themselves feeling more drained than ever before. It became clear to them that that punch dealt more damage than any other attack they have ever incurred. If the two Phoenixes weren't fearful before, now they most certainly were. Up in the heavens, Issei gazed down at his foes with a smile on his face. Looking at his new form in wonder, he grinned. "Drake, how long do you think this form will last?" He thought curiously. "This form is extremely taxing, Issei. You're utilizing 3 forms of power simultaneously. And while you have achieved a state of power that allows you to exert 1,000 times the force you can in your base form, the strain it puts on your body is too great. If you continue to exert the same level of power as the previous attack, then this form won't hold for more than 1 minute." Drake spoke worriedly. Issei groaned in annoyance. "So what you're saying is that I can't use my full power for more than a minute?" "Not just your full power, simply remaining in this state is putting immense stress on your body. Even if you didn't fight, you'd only have 5 or so minutes in this form before your body caves under the stress it's been put under." "Well shit, that's not even the worst of it. There's more. This form relies heavily on the balance between the 3 powers. If you use so much as a single spell, the mana drain will destabilize the balance among the powers and force you out of this state." "Well shit. I thought this form would be my ace in the hole, but it's turning out to be a real pain in the ass," Issei thought in disappointment. "Not quite, partner. These devil's abilities rely heavily on their stamina, and this form of yours seems to drain them fast. Just look at them. They are taking longer to recover. If you continue to fight in this state, it will no longer be a battle of strength or power, but a battle of stamina," Drake advised. Issei focused back on his opponents and noticed they still hadn't fully recovered. Despite his second-long discussion with Drake, he had expected them to be fully healed. But they weren't, further proving Drake's theory true. Gazing down at his right hand, he clenched his fist. "Let's make this quick." Seeing the utter destruction brought to an entire realm made the devils in the hall fall silent. Nearly everyone stood with their mouths agape, unable to believe what they are seeing. A few even fell on their behinds after witnessing such a display of raw power. But none spoke a word. Until, "Impossible, this is simply impossible. That man was capable of such destruction?" One of the clan heads spoke fearfully. "This level of power is nearing the peak of high class." After hearing the voice of one clan head, the others rediscovered their ability to speak. This was never a fair fight to begin with. Just what is he?" The Lord of the Phoenix clan spoke in astonishment. "Can't you tell?" Hearing this one question made everyone turn to the Devil King seated upon the throne. Upon realizing he had everyone's attention, he lazily pointed at the screen with his index finger. "Look closely, and you'll see." With these few words everyone turned back to the screen. Everyone stared bewildered at Issei, trying to discern what he was. But being obscured by the cloak of aura, made it hard for others not within the realm, to see him properly. No one could find anything pointing to the identification of his being, until one of the council members, head of the Zrak clan, used the ability of his clan, the Unraveling Eye, to gaze at Issei, and discovered something truly worrisome. His gasp alerted the room to his revelation, and soon everyone turned to his worry-filled face, desiring to know what he has discovered. "Head of Zrak, what do you see?" The other clan heads began to question the head of Zrak for information, but seeing his ghostly expression, only made them even more curious. He, spit it out already." The head of Zrak tried to speak, but could not hold on to the words as they flew out of his mouth in much the same fear as he was experiencing. But gazing at the visage of Issei, or rather, Issei's soul, he saw the image of a being that could end them in a blink if it so wished. The beastly appearance of a being draped in golden scales, a pure white halo resting behind its head, the light of which only added to the majesty of the creature as well as the intimidation the head of Zrak was experiencing. Its wings were as beautiful as its golden body, decorated with crimson crystal feathers. But what scared the clan leader the most, was the crimson eyes of this being staring right back at him, as though it too, was gazing into his soul. Feeling the abyss staring back at him, he immediately deactivated his ability and took a few steps back in shock. He's a dragon, he exclaimed in shock. This little piece of information caused the entire room to go silent. The clan heads, especially the council members, stood shocked. They turned to the screen to see the one who had brought them all to a state of disbelief. Looking at him, they finally understood. He is a dragon? No wonder he can beat them while being of a lower level than they are. The Phoenix had enraged such a being? How unfortunate. Indeed, to think, the embodiment of power would reveal itself here. As the guests once more chattered amongst themselves, one lady stood confused after hearing their words. Ravel looked to her mother and matriarch, seeking answers to her questions. But having felt her gaze, Lady Phoenix turned to her daughter and answered her unasked question. That man is a dragon, or at least a dragon descended. Among all the supernatural races, dragons are revered for being the most powerful race of beings. Standing alongside the gods in terms of power, she paused, giving her daughter enough time to process the information. But Ravel shook her head. I am aware, mother. I merely wonder why they are revered as such. After all, they pass through the same realms of power as every other race. Yet, despite both brother and Motoyasu residing in a higher realm than himself, he is still beating them. How is that possible? She questioned her mother. Lady Phoenix nodded, and that's the reason why they are called the strongest. You see, each of the supernatural races can only utilize one form of power. This is true even for the gods. We devils, for instance, only use demonic power since our existence depends upon it. The strength and condition of our physical bodies depend solely on the amount of demonic power we have accumulated within ourselves. All races follow this principle except for dragons. Due to their peak affinity towards nature, their bodies are capable of housing multiple forms of power at once. Imagine a mid-realm devil fought a mid-realm dragon. The devil would only possess mid-realm demonic reserves, while the dragon would possess mid-realm ki, aura, mana, and whatever other power derivative it may have come to know. At times, dragons have been known to have access to such a wide variety of power derivatives that they could even fight beings residing in a higher realm than themselves, as you are currently witnessing. For this very reason, they have become known as the very embodiment of power. Lady Phoenix finished with a sigh. She could already tell that the road to victory just became immeasurably slim for her family. Ravel looked towards Issei in shock. If that is true, how are Motoyasu and elder brother supposed to fight a being like that? This is insane, she exclaimed in shock. Lady Phoenix nodded. We can only hope that Riser and Motoyasu will return alive. Hopefully. Both ladies looked on, hoping their family wouldn't have to pay with their lives for crossing such a powerful being. Back in the arena, a sequence of shockwaves and explosions continued to emanate from across the realm. Motoyasu and Riser continued taking a beating as each strike Issei dealt invoked an immense sense of pain. Furthermore, they found that they couldn't call upon their powers anymore as their demonic powers continuously dispersed with each strike they took. What's happening? Why do yes it hurt so much? Why can't I summon my power? Both Motoyasu and Riser thought in unison. Unbeknownst to them, Issei knew the answer to that question, and it made him smirk savagely. Demon Slayer Aura LV1. A power awakened by one who has slain 1,000 demons. The bane of all demonkind. LV1 can temporarily nullify the powers and abilities of demons so long as the user is in contact with the target. This ability is perfect for this battle. These idiots only ever rely on their regeneration ability and their vast reserves of demonic power. With both of those gone, they can only endure the onslaught of my attacks, Issei thought in delight. Yet even as both of the phoenixes deteriorated under the consecutive attacks, Issei himself was running out of stamina. Only 1 minute has passed since he began his devastating beatdown of the two, and yet he could already feel his stamina nearing its limit. I need to finish this now. Issei clenched his fist and proceeded to channel a large portion of his power into his next attack. Both phoenixes were already nearing unconsciousness. Neither of them were aware of what was coming. Sadly, even if they were, it still wouldn't matter since neither of them had the strength left to dodge the attack. Issei stared at his two adversaries with pity. You were strong, just not strong enough. Farewell, my adversaries. He stated his farewell and shot his fist forward. Stoop! A sudden cry reverberated through the air and caused Issei to halt his attack momentarily. A second later, Ravel landed between Issei and his unconscious opponents. She gazed up at Issei's predatory eyes and felt the intimidation brought about by them. For the first time in her life, she felt insignificant. Yet, despite it all, she felt a slight sense of desire dwelling beneath her fear and intimidation. Step aside, little bird, Issei's voice emanated in her ears, causing her to awaken from her short-lived trance. She shook her head, nervousness ever present as she spoke her mind. Enough, I'll go with you. They can't beat you. That much is clear. There is no need for you to beat them into oblivion. Just take me and go, Ravel requested with teary eyes. Issei gazed down at her expression and nodded. I did not come to kill and destroy. but rather, to pay my debt back in full. But if you insist, he looked up at the sky with a stern look. Well, Grafia, what will it be? He asked aloud. No sooner had he asked, did Grafia reply. As a result of external interference, Sir Riser and Sir Motoyasu will forfeit the match by default. Thus I declare Issei Hyoudou the winner of this battle. Issei only smirked as the world around him began to wither away. With a simple glance at Ravel, he snaped his fingers and spoke, time to go home. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light appeared in both the hall and the arena realm, causing all the devils to close their eyes on reflex. When the light dissipated, both Issei and Ravel in the battle realm as well as Ito and Rimuru in the hall, had vanished. Not a trace of them was left in THD Demon World. Yet, even though they were gone, they left a permanent impression on the all of Devilkind. A message that was as clear as day. Don't screw with the dragons. That's it, guys. That was the full stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. With that, take care.